His father died just a few days ago and, from the very start, his life had been a struggle. He lost his mother when he was still a kid, and even his relatives didn't lift a finger when he needed help most. Loneliness crushed him every day because there wasn't a single soul he could call his real friend. But the wildest twist hit him next. He got ripped into a world he never even knew existed. Just a few minutes ago, Kurito, 27 years old, was still stuck in Japan. After finishing the morning rituals for his father, he wandered through the city with no direction, and it hit him hard how tough it all felt. When it was all over, he finally tried to wrap his mind around how his father had handled everything solo during his mother's funeral. As he stepped onto the bridge, his mind went totally empty, no thoughts at all. And all that stormed through his mind was one brutal thing: loneliness. Curator shut himself away in the city, living solo and staying unmarried. In the last few days, he lived through the most non-stop chaos of his entire life. And even now, he couldn't shake the flashback, his father grinning as he welcomed him back home from his office. This time, no one was going to say those words, because the tension in his face was screaming, and he was already thinking about taking the day off. But the workload crushed him, so all he could do was grab a half day for the next date. Right in the middle of it, a notification suddenly flashed on screen, and there it was, a working email. And it was crystal clear, nobody cared one bit about his heartbreak. Since work wouldn't let up, all of it churned in his nerves and pure anger burned in every inch of him. Right now, he just wanted to slip out of this place and vanish onto a fairway, which lets him slip away and carve out a comfortable life so he can survive. Right when his thoughts were building momentum, a voice cut in, announcing that they were choosing him for something special. Just as he tried to make sense of the voice that thundered in his ears, a blinding light burst out of nowhere, and in the blink of an eye, his sight vanished. The second his eyes snapped open, he realized he was in a place he'd never seen before. Different in every appearance, even the buildings are totally different each time. People, their clothes, and every other detail. That mysterious voice hit him again, welcoming him into another world, and his mind went completely blank. The voice kept pressing on, explaining the power it had handed him, so he could live through whatever came next in comfort. The flood of information hit him so hard he couldn't even get a single question out before it all moved on. The voice disappeared into thin air, and suddenly he was stranded alone in the heart of the city, panic exploding in him as he drew the attention of everyone around. He had no choice but to let out a heavy sigh, then he made it crystal clear. Even when he longed to go somewhere, it didn't mean he was being dragged into another world. But then his mind snapped back, because if he went back, he'd have to crawl through that corporate slave life all over again. He shook the thought off and jumped straight into action, because he refused to let the terror of being trapped in another world freeze him in place. With no clue how he'd ever get back to his own place, he made a choice. No matter where he ended up, he'd live right. Then a rush of emotion hit his mind, as, the very next second, his thoughts derailed. Everything around him suddenly looked like some kind of game simulation, a reality that felt way too fake to be real. It was one of those fantasy worlds he'd devoured in books and novels, but once he got hit with reality, trapped as a corporate slave, his mind snapped straight to one thing: money. While he was still chasing a way to earn his living, drifting through the city streets day after day, he noticed everyone staring at him like he'd just blown their minds. The only explanation: those clothes screamed wrong place, wrong time compared to everyone else there. The outfit style and colors just didn't match, so he ditched it and sprinted off to find a proper clothes shop. The moment he spotted that symbol, he bolted straight to it. Before he could even step in, the shopkeeper was already there, smiling wide and greeting him like a noble, as if he'd been expected all along. For the first few seconds, Hirito just stood there, utterly baffled by what he'd proclaimed. And then he spills how he wants to dump his clothes and demands an explanation. He realized the material looked so much better than anything on the streets that the guy simply couldn't place who he was. As Greta pushed the negotiation forward, the shopkeeper slapped down a deal: 40 gold coins for his clothes. Toretto had zero clue what currency even meant in this world, so he sank into thought, and the shopkeeper started to sweat. Then he jacked the price up to 50 gold coins. Curato immediately caught it. The shopkeeper was trying to lowball him and rip him off on his materials. But that was the absolute best he could manage, his only way to pay back those clothes. Curato, somehow during the sale, clearly called out that guy for being brutally thorough with every word he said. So he went along with the deal, then demanded a stack of regular clothes he could wear around town. As soon as the deal sealed, Hirito got outfitted with the bare minimum gear. And he already knew the local language and could read the writings like it was second nature. The mysterious voice must have changed him completely, feeding him everything it could, then tossed him straight into that world. Right in the middle of his thoughts, he caught himself again, staring at the first move like it might decide everything. Some tiny kid collided with him out of nowhere and then shouted, right on the spot, to sell him her flowers. Kurito somehow spotted the exact perfect opening. Then he leaned down to the girl and promised, right there, that he'd buy her flowers. He traded flowers to the person and got answers to the questions he needed most. The little girl painstakingly priced every single flower, each one earning her 2 bronze coins. And Corradio got exactly what was coming. He finally clocked it. This little girl spotted the perfect chance, ripped him off with a crazy price, and only then handed over the info he'd been hunting for. Right from the very first question, he pressed for answers on what money was truly worth. Realizing this question was a total disaster, he clenched his jaw. If he wanted to live, he'd have to move like nobody was watching. The little girl lifted a wooden stick, pointed him toward the truth, and explained the money came in bronze, silver, and gold. Then broke down the math, and Curado ended up with about 500,000 yen. He was sitting on plenty of money, set for life. So he pressed on, firing off more questions, what the country was called and whether those guys knew the name Japan at all, and the place they stood in. It was the capital of the Zil Kingdom. Corrido finally realized they weren't in any ordinary place at all. This was another world, and the little girl snapped him with one question after another. Realizing that poor kid had no job was the only thing that made those ridiculous questions make sense. When he finally made it clear he wasn't some local at all, just a traveler who'd rolled into the city not too long ago, that lady leaned in and told him to head straight to the Adventure Guild to land himself a job. The curator knew a guild wasn't just a building. It was where people came to earn money by taking on and completing requests. But for the kid, this was a real monster slayer, someone who'd fought creatures for a living, like her father told her, even if it was absolutely terrifying. He knew he couldn't stay jobless for long, so he decided to head straight to the guild. He wasn't chasing a job at all, he just went to check the place out. The second he stepped inside, he froze. Those hideous, bone-chilling adventurers were already waiting for him. While stormy thoughts raged in his head, someone stepped in and greeted him the moment he arrived. Wondering why he was really heading to an adventure guild. He couldn't believe it. This demi-human was actually the one tending to the receptionist at the place. He kept staring and staring, then finally snapped out of it, took a breath, and told everyone he wanted to become an adventurer, so he headed straight to registration. Before anything else, the lady grabbed his attention and laid out the whole deal about the adventurers. Then they dove into the ranking system, S2 picked straight from achievements and how many missions you knock out. Climb higher and the rewards turn sweeter while the challenges crank up harder and harder. Once you finally hit that S-rank peak, the royal capital starts throwing requests at you. The family pulls out all the stops to support it, and you end up setting the standard that others chase. A brand new adventure kicks things off at F-rank, hunting lost items and delivering packages. Simple little quests that basically everyone agrees are the easiest way to start. The higher you climb, the harsher the requests get. No more simple stuff like beating a monster and hauling rare materials. Everything depends on the experience you've built and the kind of missions you're truly getting served. And on top of all that, he could even jump into a party or create his own, whenever he wanted to team up instead of going solo, so she sent him off with the best luck to climb for higher ranks and laid it out to him, any violence inside the guild is completely forbidden. Right as the explanation wrapped up, she leaned in and demanded the registration fees, 5 silver coins. And he shoved them into her hands. She immediately grabbed his attention and ordered him to press both hands over the crystal there. When Curito pressed him, he finally learned the truth. This was the kind of secret that the adventurer's info stayed locked down and never spilled. So every guild in every corner could grab the info too, double-check it, and confirm it was the same. Curito's eyes lit up with a burning need to get to the bottom of that technical gadget. Right away, the lady shut that down. She didn't even know the truth herself. Then Hirtu apologized for his behavior and just like he was told, he slapped his hands right over the ore. Just as it all seemed normal, he suddenly felt a wave of nerves rippling through every inch of his body, like something was pulling information straight out of him. The moment the process wrapped up, the screen burst to life with the results. They dropped his full name right there, then the receptionist kept reading, line by line, about the other skills. She finally realized the boy was gripping spatial magic in his hands. She rushed to the Adventure Guild and demanded someone else check the magic on the list. Yet somehow, nobody there knew a thing about it. The usual suspects show up: fire, water, earth, wind, darkness, and the rest of the lineup. Right in the thick of their conversation, they were still trying to figure out what it all really meant. And if the guild master ever finds out. Corretto couldn't wait to get himself registered. He insisted he'd done nothing wrong, and even the registration book didn't mention any magic as the reason they accepted or rejected the registration. The receptionist finally got it, then reached out and grabbed his plate. That locked him into an F grade and also set him up for a waiver from Tulfi's. And they made him hand over 3 silver coins just in case he failed to come back with it. The second his registration wrapped up, the receptionist leaned in and demanded he jump into some tasks. Then he turned and strode away, vowing to come back the moment she was finally ready. Curato bolted straight to a hidden spot in the city, then snapped into action, casting his spatial magic on one of the drums, which hacked it cleanly out of the air, something he'd never even dared to expect. So he dove into new tests, crushing other skills, even spatial distortion. This skill somehow blasted a huge, empty gap right in the drum. Curato watched every second unfold and suddenly realized his skill wasn't just good. It was something way bigger, something more dangerous. And it turns out his skills were way too broken, because at the guild he touched a crystal, and it blasted him with every shred of magic knowledge from that whole world. Turns out in that world spatial magic didn't exist at all, and everything that came next was brand new. Trying to stay uncharted by whatever monsters lurking inside was pure madness. Curato realized the power wasn't his at all, it was the mysterious voice that dragged him here, and it had handed him that strength. But he couldn't wrap his head around why he got that power, because it felt like some manga-level special mission was being stitched into his life. The only thing he could figure out was this: someone handed him this power so he'd finally be able to run far, far away. Then he paused and wondered, could magic help him move his own body from one place to another? So he decided to take the leap and test it out. Before he could even blink, his eyes shot open, and the world ripped out from under him, dropping him somewhere completely different from where he'd been just a second ago. When he swung his gaze to another part of the city, he couldn't help grinning. This spot gave him the bigger, better view. So he snapped into that spot in the blink of an eye, and that teleport hit like a nightmare for a poor guy. Somehow he clawed his way into that position, and the view was so mind-blowing it made every risk feel worth it, because his eyes lit up the moment he saw it. Right there, frozen in place, a brutal flashback hit him, his father's voice drilling into his head, telling him to take care of his own life. By living the life he's been craving. Right away he started thinking this new life had none of it. No towering buildings, no roaring cars, no trains. He didn't have to spend his days as some corporate slave, or fake his way through friendships built on nothing but selfishness. All of it was basically shouting, go farther, break free, and live your own life. Hirata soaked up every single moment from that place like it was going to disappear the next second. Remembering his dad's words and the eerie voice that had spoken to him. He finally got it. He was about to unleash that magic to survive in another world and live the life he'd always dreamed of. The next morning finally hit, and he stepped into the new world to grab his very first job and earn his way. He snagged a quest to haul a load of goods from one place to another. The boy kept pressing the receptionist for more and more work, again and again, until she had no choice but to listen. She snapped back at every request, insisting 2 were more than enough for the day. Because if he didn't finish, he'd get hit with a penalty immediately and his F rank would be on the line. He could only survive by doing hard manual jobs or signing up to volunteer. At that exact moment, the delivery quest fit him perfectly, because the only way to get anywhere was on horses and carts. And he was terrified to face monsters alone, because just 2 days ago he was nothing but a corporate slave. He had to grab the goods in the south, then haul them all the way to the east for delivery. Before he even got to the park, he shot straight to the top of the tallest building in the city. From his spot, he could almost scout every corner of the capital, but teleportation magic came with one brutal catch. He could only teleport to spots he'd already been, so he had to climb up high and get a clear view before he could do anything, because otherwise he'd be stuck. He could drop by once, then come and go anytime he wanted. He locked onto the house like a bullseye. He blasted his spatial magic again and snapped straight to the doorstep with a teleport. He slammed his knuckles on the door and shouted for the person inside to answer. He kept nudging him about the delivery request, and the guy couldn't help laughing at how the adventurer showed up way too early. Then he jabbed a finger at the chair his granddaughter needed, and the moment Kairva finally got it, he clenched his resolve and pushed on with the work. Then, heading for the chair, he shot his hand up. Then he taps into spatial storage, packing every last bit of it straight into his own storage space. As he managed to pull it off, he couldn't believe it. His magic was ridiculously convenient in every single way. Once his delivery pickup was finally done, he didn't waste a second. He tore straight to the exact spot he had to drop it off. Then again, he threw down his spatial magic to pop right at the nearest spot, and sprinted straight for the gate of the delivery location. He knocked again and shouted for the owner, and this time the door swung open to a girl who looked way too entertained, like she'd scored an early delivery from her grandpa on purpose. She got the chairs delivered, meanwhile they were freakishly heavy, and she braced herself for the grind ahead, while Haskurito's cheeks burned with a shy blush. That radiant-smiled woman beamed at him, praising his work like it was pure genius. This time, Curato was hit by a brutal flashback to his past life, where no matter what he did, he still got scolded, even when he was doing everything right, and still never got a single ounce of appreciation for his hard work. He drank in every compliment bowed to her with quiet grace, and then straight up walked away from there. A few days rolled by since his wild, adventurous journey. One day when he walked into the adventure guild, the receptionist snapped his name and kept him for a quick moment. Even though she called him by his name, that boy somehow couldn't remember her at all from their last run-in. The receptionist flashed a smile and introduced herself, straight up telling Kusha her name. The one who runs the whole adventure job management. Curator remembered her as a receptionist who had always trusted. Trusted him on day one, back when his magic lit up the crystal clear as day. With a string of wild encounters behind him, the receptionist simply wouldn't believe his own eyes. He nailed the task in no time at all. Where they thought the delivery would drag on for days. But in the end he had to prove it firsthand, showing her his spatial magic sketches and making it crystal clear he really could do what he'd pulled off. The way the lady talked to him screamed bureaucrat, and that same cold fear hit home when she handed him a quest, straight from the royal capital to deliver something. All by himself, and that twist hit hard, because he never saw that sudden shift coming. So Kusha told him that he'd been juggling the other tasks so well that it pulled the new adventurers into doing the work through all of his load, and somehow Kirito couldn't shake the guilt. But Kusha steadied him, promising that missions beyond the royal capital would give him real synergy. Kirito was so hooked on the idea, he couldn't help but pause mid-thought. He finally got it. Once he left the royal capital, the road demanded monsters, and he had to brave them even with magic that was already pretty damn strong. He hesitated, then Kushia barreled in and cut him off. She snapped him out of his headspace to warn him, if he chose to take the quest, she'd push him for a promotion to a higher rank. That would somehow bump his salary even higher too. That drive was so strong that Kirito snapped into accepting the request immediately, because with him in that condition, he couldn't possibly refuse a raise. Outside the capital, the sky blazed with sunshine as the whole scene burst to life. As Kirito headed out for the quest, he couldn't believe his eyes. The breathtaking view beyond the royal capital wall left him completely stunned. On that very first day, he flashed his card to get the city tax waiver, and that's exactly why being an adventurer pays off so hard. Today's mission was simple but serious: deliver cash and a sealed letter to a village. And this wasn't just another task, it was a brutal step up in responsibility, and Kurita knew the delivery would drain every ounce of stamina he had. And it turned into the perfect test to climb that next rank. A cool breeze whipped past him, easing his nerves, while he stared out at the view like it was made just for him. Kurito blitzes across the battlefield with teleportation, and he used his magic to seize a chunk of his land right there. Even though it was flying by, tension gripped him because the village was miles away. He stared at the map in his hands, then spotted a seagull cutting across the sky, and the sight sparked a wild idea. Maybe he could reach the destination by air. Right in the middle of his thoughts, he suddenly got yanked into the air. 1 second he was thinking, the next he's floating above a seagull that didn't stand a chance. He couldn't believe it. He actually managed a move like that, and once gravity kicked in, it yanked him back down to Earth. He didn't hesitate, he fired off spatial magic again and tore through even more of the place. It looked ridiculously good, like he could just blink straight into midair whenever he wanted. And he didn't have to fight a single soul, he just kept moving until he hit his destination. With every step he leaned harder into his magic, until it felt like he was soaring through the sky, weightless like a kid dreaming they could fly. From above, everything down there was crystal clear, and you spot a bunch of goblins closing in right where the cage is. The forest was on the guild's hit list for extermination, and coming from Japan, he'd never seen anything like it before. The info said no more monsters would pop up along the way, but one lone straggler still slipped through, which hit him with a brutal flashback the last time he used his magic as a trial on that drum. He had zero interest in fighting those monsters, but he couldn't shake the feeling that life would eventually force him to face them. So he dropped low right away, planted his feet in front of that herd of monsters and stood there, gripping his weapon like he meant to stop them all. The goblins straight up hated the fact that someone was coming at them head-on, like they could just challenge them without fear. Just when nobody expected it, all three of them surged toward Pareto, bursting into the scene like they came from nowhere. He realized this was the perfect moment to train, so raise his hand, then unleash a spatial slash. That tore a goblin clean in half before it could even get its attack off. The other two were standing behind it when the attack hit, and from how they looked, pure terror blared across their faces, because they'd never seen magic like this before. Before anyone could even open their mouths, Hirado snapped space with spatial distortion and wiped them out in a single hit, making them lose their lives. For the first few seconds, Coretta just stood there, frozen in disbelief at where he showed up. When he finally snapped back into his senses, he couldn't believe it. He pulled it off with zero practice. The view was bleak as sin, nothing about it looked remotely pleasant. And since he'd never killed a single animal in his past life, guilt crushed him harder than ever this time. As soon as he clocked his situation, he realized he was sitting on the most crucial, deadliest magic out there. so he had to tread carefully. Then he shoved the whole idea of taking down a goblin out of his mind, like it was nothing more than a cockroach. Around sunset, Curado pushed forward near the mountains, running along its side. He finally spotted his destination, Howlin Village, ringed with a towering wall. Curito left the air and came on foot, and when he reached the gate, a young guard with a spear stood there, on duty and staring him down, because he couldn't help but wonder who Curito really was. Curado froze when he saw that man's massive physique, then forced himself forward and introduced himself, telling him he was an adventurer there to finish the quest. Coming all the way from the capital to finish a quest was almost unheard of. Then he pulled out a letter and some money and made it clear. The man's shock hit harder than before, and after he ran through the delivery names, his face flipped completely, like something lit up in his eyes. Those guys were the first true adventurers, and even with everything they faced, their core personality never once shifted. That guard was creeping around Curito with way too much fake kindness, and somehow he even labeled him cheerful. But Curado wasn't thinking about praise at all. His whole focus was finishing the quest fast and sprinting back to the capital. The guard told him it was already too late, so the delivery couldn't wait. He said they'd have to push the whole job to tomorrow. Curito got it. He wasn't about to barge into anyone's dinner, so he shut it down and vowed to finish the job the very next morning. Once he agreed, he turned around and started marching back toward the royal capital, until a guard snapped in and shut him down, saying there was nowhere he could stay in a village this tiny. Then he snatched him from behind and demanded he come to his place, like it was all his idea. Curito felt completely awkward. Sure, he could have teleported away, but the guard yanked the kid straight down to his side, and Curito had no choice but go along. A tiny cottage waited, and as they both finally stepped inside, they reached home. The man screamed, demanding everyone acknowledge he was back, and the crowd welcomed him in. A gorgeous lady dressed to perfection leaned in with burning curiosity. Who was the guy she'd brought this time? Curado bowed down just enough to look humble, then popped right into his introduction as an adventurer. And that's when the lady was revealed to be Stella. The guard was named Andrew, and it was his own blunder, yet he still left it all sailing right over Curito's head. Stella insisted that was his real, growing character, and Curado just couldn't help but feel thankful that he'd given him a spot to crash for the night. Night fell and Stella hurried both of them inside. She had dinner to cook, and she wasn't about to waste a second. The second Curito stepped around, he instantly felt it. This place was way cozier than Japan ever was, because everyone walked inside with shoes on. They both tore down to the first floor and just like that, a little kid popped up and rolled out the welcome mat for them, right there where it all began. Andrew introduced her as his daughter, Nina, almost like his instincts were yelling the truth. Hayata dropped to his knees, greeted the kid, and introduced himself as an adventurer, grateful for the kindness her dad showed. After all this time, Nina couldn't stop smiling. She finally had a guest back in her home. And Curado finally exhaled, because this time, unlike his past life, he didn't have to deal with a nightmare kid. Andrew cut in at once, furious that the boy kept clinging to his daughter, while he nailed him with double threat stares like, "Back off." Stella yanked him by the ears, telling him to ditch the whole act, zip it, and not interrupt. She needed backup in the kitchen, so Andrew nodded and agreed. Pain screamed through him, but before he headed out, he made it crystal clear to his girl. The boy had come straight from the royal capital. Those words lit up the lady's face like a sudden burst of joy. And she was thrilled to have even more answers. Now she stared at the guest with a whole new spark, buzzing with excitement over the wild news stories she was about to hear. But the boy couldn't quite figure out what all this joy was about, so Stella leaned in and explained. Out in a quiet rural place like this, the traveler tales are pure entertainment. She wanted Curado to stick close to her daughter, and once he understood what she needed, he stepped up without hesitation. Still, somehow Nina's father didn't like it one bit. After a bit, the food finally hit the table, perfectly set and ready to eat. The dinner slid onto the table with two kids practically drooling at the sight, and Curado devoured it with a big grin. He couldn't believe how delicious the food was. As Andrew slid him drinks, he hesitated at first, then slowly started accepting them. Tracking that smell after it was finally served felt almost impossible, like it was still fresh off the grill. Andrew made it clear, this wine was crafted right in the village, powered by the grapes themselves, and that's why it tasted so damn good. They both raised their glasses and erupted in cheers. Curita realized the food wasn't just rich, it was dangerously tasty too. Those guys kept firing back, saying the stuff we're dealing with is being made right inside the village by their own people, and that's more than enough. Then the curator dug in, relishing every bite, and realized the taste was so good it felt unreal. He dug in and praised the lady's cooking, and the other two at the dining table nodded along like they'd just tasted perfection. Greta paused mid-meal on the dining table, and the moment she saw it, surrounded by her family, everything hit her at once. Again, she shoved him straight into his flashbacks, ripping him open with every rough, bruised memory. His mother died when he was still a kid, and that hit him hard. Andrew caught the shock the moment it crossed his face. But he dodged the question and said he was dreaming of opening his own field one day. Andrew saw his chance and seized it. He told him to quit the job and come farm with him in the village. Somehow, Corretto wasn't feeling this suggestion at all. No buzz, no buy-in. He took a hard look at it once his light finally steadied a little, and stopped flickering like his livelihood was on the edge. The very next day, Corretto was still sprawled on the bed, sound asleep. The moment the first sunlight hit his eyes, that suffocating corporate instinct crept in and wouldn't let him breathe. His thoughts got wrecked the instant a sudden kick slammed into his cheeks. Then it hit. Nina had ended up asleep with the boy, and right now she was stuck in the most awkward position imaginable, living her best sleep ever with her uncle. He slowly rose, carefully set Nina on the bed, then slipped downstairs. He snapped to the fact that Stella was already awake, fully locked in on her daily chores. He crashed into the best sleep of his life, wearing Andrew's pajamas he'd snatched the night before. Night had fallen, but Nina still wasn't awake, and Curito didn't even bother lifting her. She looked too comfortable, so he let her sleep. All that time, Coretta couldn't stop spiraling. She kept asking herself if her father. Andrew was fine because last night Nina made a bold move. She stayed with Torito, determined to catch every adventure tale from the capital. Her father hated it. He couldn't stop worrying about his daughter like she mattered more than anything. Stella could tell that man's whole world was her daughter. Nothing mattered more to him. Andrew stepped in from behind and backed up the statement, telling them it made perfect sense, because he was a father to his only daughter. Even after all that time at the door, Andrew couldn't stomach a stranger lying with his daughter, and he started grilling himself. Did he mess up somehow late at night? Even though he'd been checking on them every 30 minutes the whole night. Breakfast was waiting, so Stell shoved them to freshen up, and as he stared at the dish, something hit him. Jurito bolted off right away to scrub his hands clean. After breakfast was finished, Curito and Andrew decided to crush the quest next. And as they headed out across the fields, the whole place felt weirdly peaceful, right up until Curito wandered off. And then he blurted out that it was a nice village. Because the moment Andrew heard young people call it pretty boring before, this sudden praise hit like a total shock. In Curito's eyes, being bored wasn't a curse, it was a luxury because, in that flashback when he was barely surviving, there wasn't even a second to wonder that a world like this could exist. The first thing that stopped him from getting bored was being stuck long enough to actually think about it. And just then, the thought shot through his head without even asking. It hit him like a jolt. Last night's sleep was the first real good one he'd gotten since arriving in this world. Last night, he got totally hooked on answering every question the curious girl threw at him, especially about the kind of people who live in this city. After he rained her with stories one after another, the boy finally hit the wall, exhaustion crashing over him like a wave, and he made it crystal clear he'd personally stepped into the royal kingdom just a few days ago. He leaned in and told her his hometown was miles away, and that the journey there beat him up every step of the way. Like a place nobody would ever choose to be, and those words hit her hard, an innocent little girl feeling real emotion in her chest. So she pressed a blessing into him, vowing that from that moment on, good times would roll in nonstop and nothing but fun would follow. All night's chaos replayed in their heads, and somehow they still hauled themselves to the spot where Curado had to deliver the letter and the money to finish the quest, right at Greg and Taylor's family home. And Andrew decided to handle it himself, calling them both, so nobody would panic at the sight of a stranger. Turns out it wasn't random at all. An old couple stepped up, and their intro came straight through their sons' and daughters' names. And the adventurer met them with a grin as he passed over the goods, which he dragged all the way from the royal capital just for them. The old man couldn't make heads or tails of what was inside the baggage, until he explained it was packed with money. It felt seriously suspicious. Every time, it only ever turned out to be random letters. Those old guys wrote it up, then leaned in and told him. Even with an F-rank card, the guild trusted him big time. And that's when Curito started raising alarms, because what if the letter said something about him? The letter was all about him, spelling out that the boy would carry the cash and the note together. This was a trap to see if the kid could resist snatching money from the pockets. Kyrieva didn't like what they did to him just to test things, then press him for the final number to make sure it was right. After he got the confirmation, he realized the receptionist was downright cruel. Then those guys stepped in, thanked him for playing his part and handing over the letters. Andrew and Pareto, grinning like they'd just won something huge, headed back. They realized their quest was finally over. And just like that, it was time for Curado to bolt out of the place. Andrew told them to come by his home before he left, and the boy thanked them for everything they'd done for him to the fullest. So Curado dropped by Andrew's place, only for Nina to explode, furious that the boy vanished so suddenly. Because Curado was kind, he fought to explain his situation. He had to leave no matter what. Nina leaned in and demanded a promise from that guy. He'd come back and visit her again. And just as Perdo extended his hand, he locked eyes with her and shook hers. He got hit with another freezing devil stare from her father, because the guy hated how touchy he'd been, so Curate stepped in and made it crystal clear. She was way too young for his age. But in the old man's eyes, he was still just some kid, barely 18 in his head. Curito snapped, saying they were totally off. He was 27 right now. That line hit the couple like a sucker punch. They absolutely weren't expecting such a huge number, and they just stared in pure shock. Curado was stunned, because this boy was only 1 year younger than Andrew. As he realized the man was way older than he seemed. Before anything else, he made it clear, Nina was cute, but he wasn't interested, especially given her age. Stella cut into the conversation and immediately told Gerardo to take the bento with him. While he was mulling over one more bite of Stella's cooking, he suddenly decided to grab whatever he could before he left. Curito bowed his head and thanked them from the heart for everything they'd done for him. And the family frantically waves at him, already praying he'll show up again the next time he comes back. On his way back, Curita caught that those guys treated a stranger with real kindness, and that hit him hard. They weren't just decent, they were good people. And after all that time, he finally found peace there. And gut feeling kept screaming that he belonged to his family, and once life finally loosened its grip, he swore he'd return to that place. With the job done, he turned right back toward the guild. Later on, Curado spilled the truth. Once he ditched the village right after finishing the quest, he got promoted straight up to rank E. And that route came with two huge perks. He grabbed more delivery jobs, which turbocharged his chances and made his completion speed skyrocket. And the second reason was simple. He boosted his pay every time he took on a job he'd handle himself. Right then, he was pulling in more money than any other adventurer around. Then somehow this was doomed from the start. Because one day at the Adventurers Guild, other adventurers swarmed him and grilled him about the shady tactics he'd pulled to shoot past everyone else in just a short time. Curado's situation was brutally clear. He was in a terrible spot. There wasn't a single rule forcing the boy to do those subjugation tasks. Those guys seethed that this low-key adventurer was raking in more than them just by doing delivery runs, and Corretto couldn't figure out what move to make next. Then it hit him, everything the receptionist warned him about on day one. Guild members could never let internal fights spill over. But this time, that thing was totally losing the plot. They were about to smash him into paste for whatever he was doing, but he wouldn't give them a single response. Then the other guys on site started piling up obstacles right there. And everyone in the royal capital was practically trembling with excitement, begging for the battle to start, since this was their favorite kind of entertainment. Hell, half the crowd was even throwing bets on who'd win, and Curato realized too late he'd been ambushed and there was no escape. He had to fight his way out. From that moment, a flashback hit him back when he was stuck on delivery runs. People would dive into brutal city battles. And right now, he could unleash that deadly move to break free of the place in an instant. But it won't actually fix the problem or rip out the roots. He couldn't beat them with bare hands, and every magic attack he tried only made things worse. Just then, a new thought kicked open in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking, what if he blew those guys away with his teleportation magic, turning it into a straight-up promotion? Which sets him up with a killer business opportunity later on. Then one of the adventurers tried to catch what the boy was mumbling all by himself. And they pressed him for answers, and the boy shot back with a hard no. He wasn't about to bend how he did business. And if any trouble pops up, they'll step in and fix it. Because the moment those comments come flying from a newbie, that crowd's attention snaps right onto them. They had no choice left, so all of them slammed into the fight together, attacking at once. Curata didn't even budge. Instantly, he ripped them into midair with spatial magic, and everyone froze, stunned. They had zero clue he'd pull a move like that. The next second, they stared down and couldn't figure out how or when they ended up there. As always, gravity tightened its grip and dragged them all down to the ground, while right in the middle of the chaos, the boss who loved bullying that man had already blacked out. While they were trying to wrap their heads around the fact that it was Pareto who pulled every string behind it. The curator leaned in and set it straight. Look at the weights you're lugging right now. If you slam into the ground from that height, you're dead. For those guys who didn't have a clue what they were walking into, this was beyond terrifying, the kind of fight that could destroy everything. And Curado didn't budge an inch while they screamed for their lives at him, firing off non-stop apologies for whatever they'd done. Here you help them, then you hit them with this. He flicked the spatial magic again and slammed them down onto the floor. The crowd huddled around them, stunned out of their minds because nobody could make sense of what just happened, or how they suddenly ended up back out here. Kirito seized the moment and blurted out that his magic was the real reason. And it let them jump across the distance in the blink of an eye. They hadn't heard of magic like that before, so they pressed for every detail, until Kirito leaned in and said that he was fired up to back their journey by jumping in and helping. He guided them through instant teleportation to their destination. No obstacles, no delays. He pitched it like the next big money maker, ferrying adventurers from one spot to another like a business. He was about to build a real business, because in this world, horses and carriages were basically the only way to move, and transportation was sorely lacking. But with his idea, he could even bargain for better pay than he makes delivering goods right now. Kirito saw a massive advantage for everyone, and the whole room erupted into heated debate. Harita could tell they were all totally lost, and that he might have screwed up. Then a gloomy girl pushed through the crowd, wondering what kind of good intention hid behind that help. And the moment they asked, the merchant with money on his mind snapped back that every single ride would come with a charge. Plus, he promised they'd save both time and effort. He was about to charge for the trip 2 silver coins, which had those adventurers gasping at the price, way too pricey for them to ignore. They figured out that this shared carriage would only cost them 2 copper coins, which made the deal feel almost crazy good. Meanwhile, he got lost in his own thoughts right in the middle of it. Someone burst out of the crowd and snapped up the deal, then handed him his first assignment, hauling the Thunder Sword. Other guys just couldn't wrap their heads around why he'd dare take that kind of risk. While Dorian found it hilarious that his very first customer finally showed up, even with questions flying in right away. The man who took the bargain, convinced it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He ditched the moment and headed off with Kurado, pushing him to introduce them to his party, which is packed with rocks. Helena's right in the middle of it. And Reed, the four-eyed captain, was the one leading the crew, and he hauled him right to that place. While his party members didn't exactly see eye to eye with the price he was charging for teleportation. Reed broke down the math for them and proved the price was ridiculously cheap. You start in the regular carriage, and it'll cost you 2 silver coins. Everything for daily meals and the little extras is folded into the price. And because those guys chug so much, the bill climbs even higher. And when they finally got the chance to explain, 2 of the members nodded and agreed, because they were the ones burning through the most time on the party floor. So they convinced themselves the cost curator's price was actually doable, because it would save them time and energy, and it let them land high-paying gigs and knock out more than 2 requests a day just to survive. One of the best upgrades to the group was this. They could finally stop fearing monsters, because the moment they headed for the destination, those beasts came crashing in right on cue. The moment the explanation wrapped up, those guys lit up with relief, and Helena even leapt straight at Kurado, rushing to apologize for how rude she'd been just a second ago. Reed was set on climbing straight past every other adventure party, going for the rank by seizing the riches the others were chasing. And with that cue, every single one of them guns for one thing, tearing their way toward rank A. Every word of that conversation was getting picked up by a stranger lurking in a nearby alley. The man practically couldn't stop grinning once he learned someone out there was actually carrying a teleportation spell that alone blew his mind. At that same cafe, Coretta nursed her tea and kept staring at the sand clock like it was ticking down to something huge, which was basically shouting, "It's almost time." At the battle's destination, the Thunder Group had already been pounding monsters into dust, and this time, even the monsters were so terrified their knees went weak. Just a few hours back, like it was yesterday. Corretto didn't just move them, he instantly snapped them straight to their destination. It was supposed to take them 3 long days with a wagon, and even so they couldn't believe it. Curito flat out clarified he could only help move things to a place he'd already visited, because that made it way faster. Reed forked over 2 silver coins, right on cue just like they demanded. Curito felt like a tank this time, no exhausting grind, just the job he was paid for. The guys said it would take 2 hours, but they finished it way faster than that, and Curito was riding that same solid feeling again. Curato made a bold move and slipped into the royal capital to sip tea. And one of the adventurers hated that he'd rest, while the rest were out there busting their asses. Alan tried to sneak away from the fight with Curito, but later they finally caught up to him, and the guy just waved at Cerdo before it was over. She told him to meet her after 2 hours, just like they planned. On command, he snapped back to the present. Already 2 hours had vanished, and Corito snapped right back to the location without wasting a second. The second he touched down, it felt like a devil had been waiting. Lena lunged to slice off his head on pure instinct. Our boy nearly panicked from that stunt, but Helena snapped in and explained it wasn't meant to happen, and the whole plan was teleportation to a distant place, not something done right here on the spot. On finally getting confirmation that it all went insanely well, they captured that monster with shocking ease. Curito fired off instant praise for their hard work, then zeroed in on the next stop they had to hit, right before he leaned in and started to ask if Curito. The curator stepped in to help them stash those precious items, and in return they got rewarded too. It'll help them snatch back every single piece of that material. That negotiation turned out strong. Once they started handling multiple requests, they snapped up even more material. So that means inventory's coming, but they can just skip the extra hassle by handing it straight to Curado. Curado pocketed 3 copper coins and called it a fair price for the exact same thing. And as the guy debated whether to hand him an empty bag or pull some other move, Curado instantly pulled the same item right out of his spatial magic, like it had been waiting there for him. When it hit them, he looked like a cheat code in this world. Everyone stared, and all the guys burned with jealousy over his magic skills. And they even wanted him to take the reins of it. Finally, everyone was seeing his true power, and the boy couldn't help but feel genuinely relieved. They pushed forward anyway, then locked in the next target location just to keep the timing on point. They teleported again, snap, just like that, and the 3-day journey got crushed into mere seconds. And just like that, the group smashed not 1, but 2 requests in a single day, something that was basically impossible in real life. At the guild, those guys finally get the payback for their request. They were blown away. It was way more than they ever expected, and even after handing Curado the fee she demanded, Curado leaned in and thanked him with a warm, gentle smile, while the others rushed to thank him and begged him to forgive them for how rude they'd been earlier. They showered him with praise, and somehow their smooth talk made it painfully obvious those guys wanted him inside their party. The whole team was buzzing, ready to greet him and pull him in as one of their own. Curado shot that rumor down on the spot, insisting he wasn't planning to play adventurer forever. But he promised to jump in and serve on demand, because they were the first customers and any discount would be their reward. As those guys kept circling the argument in the middle, they just wouldn't stop. That's what the adventurers, paid for and backed by other groups, could hear in the middle of it all. People who actually believed the guy's words were the whole truth. After weeks of grinding, his reputation finally caught fire, and it had only been a few weeks since he'd begun the service. And then things exploded for them, big wins rolling in, with non-stop requests flooding his way these days. Soon the client list exploded, the work finally settled down, and they crowned him with the teleport service role. On a bright, perfect day at the Adventurers Guild, Kusha didn't look even a little cheerful, and the second she called Curado by his teleport service name, the tension hit hard. It hit him the wrong way, and a hot blush instantly spread across his face. Kusha seethed the whole time, trying to act modest in front of him. But then she snapped out of it and decided she'd take control and command him to. They'd barely slowed down the shipment of adventurers. Every single team was cranking through requests at insane speed. And he wasn't prepared for that because just a few days ago nothing moved like this. Even the guild master showed up just to heap praise on him, and when his completion rate hit the mark, his reward shot up. Kusha wasn't happy at all. She slammed her hands on the table and told the old man straight up that he only showed up once a month, clueless about his real duties, and she made it crystal clear that if this was how he'd keep doing it, then the guild staff will get slammed with overwork until they're forced to quit. This time, the words weren't as stormy as before, but it sure looked like she was trying to pull sympathy from him. And just like that, Curado finally got it. The real cause was right in front of him because that lady was grinding herself to the bone. And she was even playing the role of a corporate slave, just trapped behind the grind. On top of that, Curado finally clocked that turns out the magic power wasn't limitless. His brutal teleportation had started making the world spin, and exhaustion slammed into every inch of his body. Curado finally slammed the brakes on the whole venture and chose to take a break. As he strode down the hallway, a voice snapped from behind and demanded his identity was real. And just like that, she snapped out a bright hello right to his face. It was the same guy from earlier, slinking around the curator, and honestly, he looked just like a Hollywood actor. But he didn't have a clue who he really was, so he went straight to ask about it. He introduced himself as Anilio, a merchant looking to trade. And right behind him stands Rodney, his employee. Cutting straight to the heart of it, Curado got his answer right in the face. He demanded to team up with him, and just like that, it completely twisted Curado's whole expression. Nobody saw it coming. This dude wasn't just into him, he was totally in love, already dreaming of marriage, and his whole mind got swept into a wild other world. Emilio wasted no time and made it crystal clear what his partner's role meant. Once the confusion finally cracked and faded, he rewrote the statement in a whole new way, begging him to join his guild. Hearing those words, the guy finally realized what he wanted, and it all clicked. The other dude was trying to get him to handle the transportation work. Emilio handled every evaluation firsthand, watching him like a hawk. And the moment he saw those transportation skills, he was blown away, cutting the trip down from a brutal week and a half to basically instant. And he was convinced his ability could grab the goods fast and flip them for profit with barely any effort. Curita clocked it instantly. This guy actually finished the homework and handled everything with real care, so Curita admitted his true motive. He was trying to earn money. Those words hit Emilio like a spark, and suddenly he knew the boy was ready to take his offer. He demanded right then and there that the excitement be shut down, then leaned in and asked what company they were talking about. and he rolled it right into a milieu trading company straight from the top because he was the president. Hearing it was pretty lame. It was so fresh, it looked like he'd just made it seconds ago. So Emilio explained that even if the company wasn't famous and Curado had never even heard of it, Curado still knew everything that was going on back in the royal capital. At first, he pegged Curado as a lame guy, but then he saw the truth. Curado was way more understanding even if he came off stiff. So he stepped up and clarified it himself. He only opened the company a few days ago. Emilia couldn't shake the feeling that the moment he heard this, he'd be hit with the crushing kind of disappointment. And yeah, it rang true. Corrido's face gave it away, because he wanted to slap his name onto a giant trading company. Emilio shot back right away, saying he had no business using a company that only meant well. And honestly, the reason was pretty damn simple. That it was all about connections, fate tying people together in ways they never saw coming. The bigger the company gets, the more they'll chain him to the grind, while the profit gets split up and swallowed by a whole crowd of members. He drove home the real reason he'd joined the Adventurers Guild. He wanted freedom from any strings or foundations. And that same promise even pushed him into hauling freight as a freelancer instead of letting him drown in terrifying battles. He knew that in a giant company, this guy would get swallowed into the gears and turned into just another cog machine. And Curado was downright stunned when someone approaching them actually admitted it. To hire him as an employee, so Emilio laid it out plain. His company was the most doable option out there. With only 2 members, they can snatch up jobs anytime they want, no red tape holding them back, and the guy is already ready to pay him a fair, honest wage. When they asked how he was selling, he just shrugged and said he'd already kicked off work on the very same channels. Next, the real question hit. Curato wasn't sure his current stash could even cover the goods, so he tightened his grip on his position and then they shoved a bag packed with 50 gold coins into his hands, enough to buy himself a little house in the royal capital. Depending on the place, Curado thought it through and realized if he could handle that kind of money, he wasn't some ordinary guy, he was a full-blown inspiration, and Curado figured the cash in question was their first startup fund they were planning to use for the company. Emilio shot that idea down, claiming this was his first reward if he took the job, and Hereta froze when she realized his wage was going to be locked at just 50 gold coins. Emilia shut that down fast. She said it was only a one-day business deal. This was just the base pay rate, and once the business grows, the wages will climb. Curito's mouth flew open. He never even expected those words to come out. But Emilio stood his ground and didn't back down for a second. He was certain that with them teamed up, the profits would skyrocket, so they should join hands together. Coretta was still in total disbelief, stuck on what had just happened in those few wild minutes. And after seeing the same situation keep unfolding again and again, he realized that even if the business crashed, his life wasn't on the line at all. And honestly, it'd be a win for him no matter what. Besides that, he couldn't help but find the man standing right in front of him downright hilarious. With everything that just happened, he finally made his choice. He grabbed the chance and started working with that guy. And just like that, both of them clasped hands, right there on the spot where the Emilio Trading Company was born on founding day. With 3 strangers starting from scratch, nothing in their hands, no safety net, just a wild leap into the unknown. The very next morning, Curito yawned, stretched, and headed out of his inn like he couldn't stay still. That kicks off the very first day of the Emilio Trading Company. He realized the president himself was handling those boxes, and they were about to jump into their part of the job right away. The curator greeted his colleague with a bright good morning, but not a word came back. So the master straight up said the guy wasn't anything bad, he was just a little shy. Curato finally managed to grab a little sleep that night, and the place they'd been using to stash it was nothing special, just a bare-bones storefront. Everything was fired up to the max, and Amelia still clung to the idea that if the 2 of them shook hands and walked side by side, then it would have yanked them to the stars every single time. But the curator realized his words never sparked an ounce of confidence in them. Right then, the guy blurted out a question about Curito's magic. Questions churned in his mind. First up, just how far he could teleport and whether he could move goods with it. And on top of that, he demanded an illustration of how he used to stash everything inside his spatial storage. Curato clearly wasn't ready with the answers yet, but he still chose to back him up and praise him again for his homework. Emilio picked the exact spot they'd teleport to first, then showed him with a hands-on demo test. Then he pivoted to the next topic and demanded to see what storage magic he was hiding. Curito ripped open his spatial magic space right in front of him, and somehow the man never got the compliment that was just sitting there, waiting for him the second he cracked the message open. He swore he'd dealt with other stuff in that space before, and not once did anything go wrong. Plus, the space kept everything perfectly preserved in its original condition. So you don't have to stress about whether the catch is still fresh. These guys can haul brand new fish right out of the harbor and sell them straight in the royal capital. Emilia knew they could do it immediately, but dumping those customer demands into the market would be a blunder, because they'd just end up selling that material to the upper class for big money instead. And it hit him this kid could turn any moment into profit instantly. No hesitation, no second thought. When they finally hit the spot where Curado had to stash his spatial magic goods, they found a cart stacked high and packed tight with materials. And somehow those guys were just waiting for him to fire up his spatial magic, so he could cram the entire cart into it. As the crew struggled to load and unload the stuff, it was a nightmare, and Emilio was convinced it never should be done that way. And somehow it landed on Curado's ego like a direct punch. So right then he slammed his spatial magic into action and pocketed the entire wagon inside it, leaving the other two behind him stunned. And this time even Curado was blown away, because the act was finally completed. Emilia couldn't hold back his laughter. He burst out laughing so hard it stunned Curado. As soon as I saw it, chills hit me sinister to the bone. So Emilio leaned in and told me it was a total revelation and that he'd finally stumbled on someone just like him, way out of the usual pecking order, like she belonged in a league all her own. The merchant straight up believed that power would let him slip anything across the border, and Curado definitely hadn't seen that shocking claim coming. And it turned out to be nothing but a false alarm, relieving Curado, because he wanted to make money the honest way with no risk hanging over his head. Curado wasted zero time and yanked them away with spatial magic, teleporting straight to a village beyond the royal capital. And the moment the job was done in the blink of an eye, Emilia burst into pure happiness. When they grilled him about why he'd come all the way to that remote village, he told them the spot sat right next to Mad Hat, and the trade there was booming like crazy. They could go straight to work in their own facilities and start dealing right away. The curator knew the facilities weren't just storage. They housed spices, dried goods, and even delicate textiles. And since the prices in this place are almost identical to that village, and they're just a hop from the neighboring country, they can grab the materials for cheap without breaking a sweat. That place was packed with untapped promise, because to bring the material to the royal capital, people had to cross the mountains and fight their way through monsters, and that brutal trial could turn out to be the biggest advantage of all. Besides that, only a handful of merchants actually knew what was going on, while everyone else hauled themselves into the country to pay taxes and grab the materials. He finally clocked it. He'd been making those deliveries again and again, but he had no clue about that kind of inside information the merchant clearly understood. They finally spelled it out: run the deal for cheap under the royal capital, then jack up the price and sell for a fortune, and that was the whole heart of the business from the start. Emilio fully believed the mantra was real, but turning it into action proved way harder than he ever expected. Then he glanced at Curado and it hit him hard. Realized that with him around, it was basically a slam dunk. No second guess, he barked orders at both employees to rush the material test right then, and they had to finish fast. He realized Emilia would take his sweat and his blood too, because to her he'd already paid with hard work. With the trading company finally up and running, Corrido got summoned again and again to hit multiple locations, on Emilio's orders. They tracked down rare food, crafts, textiles, and all sorts of treasures, then hawked it for top prices to a faraway land where everyone wanted it, so the demand kept the gold rolling in. With every extra detail in his hands, he teamed it up with natural charm and razor-sharp communication, and he shot through the ranks until the company climbed high among trading firms across the whole nation. And just 3 months later, the Emilio Trading Company went from a humble storefront to something way bigger, like it exploded overnight. The whole spot was packed with rare treasures, each one flashing and gleaming like it was begging to be grabbed. When Kurigo showed up, he couldn't hide his shock. The company had blown up big time, and it was packed with multiple employees. That trading company was even dubbed like a place where you can find anything, anytime. And Curado instantly knew that if they kept grinding like this, true stability would finally lock in within just a few years. Curito knew every bit of what they had right now was only there because that clever mastermind was locked away behind those closed doors. When he finally made it to the office, the guy was still grinding away at the table like nothing had happened. He warmly ushered Curado into his home. Jurito told everyone he'd finished his share for the day, then slid the whole setup to the back and left it there. Even so, Emilia still needed his help. Right then, no delays. Hireta knew this time he could pull the materials on his own. No teleporter needed anymore. And Emilio still couldn't shake the day he took that guy's uninterrupted work and totally wrecked it. Because after that, it felt like a nightmare, and he never wanted to go back. Even though Curator was still stuck at the job, thanks to that high wage, Emilio swore it was absolutely worth it. The reward for the day sat waiting on the table, and Curato had to snatch it up. Then it hit him, this Hollywood star was grinding nonstop. Emilio made it crystal clear. No matter what, he would never break the promise, the one where he'd bind that guy down with non-stop work, like a machine that can't stop. And when Curito finally showed a flicker of sympathy, Emilio snapped, "Work for the company for your whole life." Curito's face twisted, pure rage exploded as he slammed back a furious no. Even so, Emilia wouldn't back down. She pushed for him to finally settle in that place. He reminded the guy that Pareto already had more than enough to live, then told him to grab the life he earned and enjoy it from here on out. Right in that spot, the world went dead silent for a full minute. Nobody dared to say a word. So Emilia handed the call to him. She let him decide exactly how he wanted things. All he wanted was to turn his company into one of the best in the world, and he'd always jump in and help without hesitation if anyone needed it. Done with business, Curado slipped out of the trading company and headed back onto the streets, like the day was still buzzing around him. He couldn't stop wondering how on earth he was going to enjoy life at all. Ever since he was born, he rode the moment like it was a river, never once stopping to wonder what came next. He was so lost in his own daydreams that he never even stopped to think what he wanted to do. And he was so out of it he swore he was crashing into Pazer's bike, trying to yank him back from the edge. But even so, worry gnawed at him, and he paced around hunting for somewhere to finally rest. Like every other time before, he hunted down the tallest building in the capital and claimed it as his next target. Then bam, he got teleported to the spot, shot back through the circle in an instant, and landed right where it all began. He recalled the exact words from the beginning, the moment he chose spatial magic so he could live without chains. He stood there and replayed the flashback, back in the guild, hauling cargo as a transporter. He didn't have a single complaint, because in his eyes, everyone around him was just genuinely good. Including Emilio, a downright weird boss who ran the whole place like a firework. The moment he was in, he was overflowing with joy, like nothing could beat what he was doing right then. And the wild truth, in all his past, he'd never once managed to build a real, lasting bond. That's exactly how it started. When he lost his mother, fear slammed into him, and after that he refused to lead or connect with anyone. And that's why when his father died, it felt like the whole world ripped away, leaving him with absolutely nothing. Right when he bowed his head, lost in thought about what he'd even cook in that other world, he spotted something. Like a hometown made just for him, somewhere he could finally breathe and find peace. With his eyes shut, the very first face that burst into his mind was Nena's, pushing him to come back again. And that first tiny ray of hope finally broke through when he caught a glimpse of the back in the village waiting like home, and it's the person he met out on his adventure. He found the one perfect loophole to jump back in time, his old village, and he couldn't wait to see that family again, sit them down at the dining table, and finally share a real meal with them. He longed to settle in that village and stay there for good, but he couldn't just ditch the company work. It wouldn't be fair to his friend. Right then, one wild idea exploded in his head. And once it clicked, he realized his magic could let him bounce between the royal capital and the village, living a full-on dual life. The boy was dead set on never living alone. He wanted real connections, and he wanted to cling to the things he loved with all his heart. And with the power in his hands right then, he could make it happen. He took a gamble, living a double life, splitting his days between the royal capital and his village. The story cut to the village, where Nana sat in the garden, softly mumbling to herself in that sweet, hypnotizing voice. As she carefully arranged a gorgeous bunch of flowers, someone yanked her attention with a call from right behind her. And somehow it felt like pure healing power was standing right there. He gave her a soft wave, fully expecting her to wave back. And then he smashed through the silence with his grand intro. Sure, he thought she'd remember that sleepover at least. He tried everything to make that lady remember their best days together, but when her face didn't even twitch once, the truth hit him hard. She might have already forgotten him. The very next second, hope lit up her eyes and she spotted him instantly. Then she bolted straight toward him, wondering whether he'd come for a new quest or if his health was already on the brink. After surviving the 2 toughest minutes of his life, Curado finally let out a breath of relief. Turns out the girl hadn't forgotten him after all this time, especially since he'd promised, "I'll be back early." Nine seethed because the boy actually dared to think she'd forget. She remembered it all, every single detail. As he tried to get some reassurance from the lady, the kid lit up with a bright smile and told him, right away, that the last time he visited, they had the best time together. He thanked him for keeping his word and for coming back to the site. The curator somehow couldn't help but savor that expression. They both sprinted straight to Nina's house. Stella couldn't believe it. She spotted the last guest back in the village again. Gerito leaned in close, letting out a soft, warm greeting to her, like it was the safest place in the world. And Andrew rushed to make his point clear. Stella wasn't agreeing that he should just stay home, because there was no work left for him to finish anyway. Stella begged him to stay the night, and then she rushed off to set up the bed. And once again, Nana chose to sleep with Pareto that day, only for his father to shut it down with another hard no. That same look showed up again, just like before, because whenever it came to protecting his daughter, Andrew never once let his guard down. The whole family showered each other with love in every single way. When night fell and they sat on the dining table sipping wine again, he got hit with questions about his lookout duty, because right then someone else was handling it. When he told me he had guests waiting at his place, he cleared everything up, showing me just how truly wonderful the people of the village really are. Then he leaned in and told him that right then everything was about to change, because currently, he was toying with the idea of moving into the same village, and the whole family's mood lit up like wildfire. Everyone was buzzing to hear that line and the whole room lit up with joy, while Andrew even begged them to go fishing, thrilled that she could hang out with him more. Curata didn't expect them to say something like that. It hit like pure drama. Stella, the housewife, couldn't stop worrying about one thing: how he would survive from here on out. She was sure that if he took a job in the capital, he'd finally get the freedom he wanted, and the bigger paycheck that came with it. So Curito told everyone straight up that he was making his money right now through trades. But the real issue hit him again. He couldn't run a business in a place like that, not for real. Curito then told him he'd keep his work going from the capital. And after that line, the whole room went stone-cold silent. Nobody could even wrap their heads around what it meant. It sounded so unreal I couldn't believe my ears. So he told them his magic lets him keep working in the capital, even though he could live there too. Andrew barely even listened to the noise coming out of that guy's mouth, because it was obvious none of it was going to turn out true. Honestly, he'd never even heard of magic like that, nothing like it. So Curato decided enough talking and showed them exactly how it really works. He told them he'd march everyone straight to the capital, and Nina was the one practically vibrating with excitement. But Andrew's faith in his own claims had shattered completely. The next instant he snapped his eyes open, and there he was in the capital, right in the middle of it, surrounded by his family. And he just stood there completely stunned, whipping his gaze around at the scenery and the place they'd found. He finally realized, yep, this really was the royal castle. Stella boldly declared, this is the real capital. Nina, on the other hand, couldn't stop grinning. She was too busy soaking in the view. She stared at the giant building towering over everything, and realized the crowd inside dwarfed her whole village. While Andrew still couldn't believe what he was seeing, Stellagate gave him a pinch, just to snap him out of it and take away his shock. Swallowing every ounce of pain, he finally told him it was all true. Now he just craved one thing: getting home. In the very next heartbeat, Curato snapped them right back into place. And Andrew was thrilled to be there, but he still wanted to stay a bit longer. He swore to her that he'd take her back there again someday. And she couldn't help but grin, because he had zero clue what kind of magic was hiding inside him. Andrew finally got it. He wanted a life built on two lifestyles at once, and honestly that choice blew his mind. With the price hanging in the air, the man casually said, "I'm rolling in cash right now," like the cost didn't even matter. Andrew grinned and welcomed him from the very first moment. Then he and his wife pleaded with him to stay, just so they could spend real time together. Those guys were ready to throw everything at his side the second trouble hit, and were already hyping up a huge celebration, feast on the table, drinks in hand, for the arrival of one of the family's own. Giardo finally cracked the mystery he'd been hunting for the whole time, after stumbling into that other world. And he flashed the brightest smile you'd ever seen. The very next morning, when he finally opened his eyes, yawning like he couldn't care less, he drifted outside the place, aimless and restless. He blinked and suddenly he was in the village, one of those mornings that feels like a gift, with crisp fresh air, stunning scenery, and calm beauty waiting right outside your door. And he couldn't stop smiling, because he finally got to live in the village from then on. And from where he started, it felt like the smartest move he'd ever made. He was still hunting for a place to live when the moment came. Nina slipped in from behind and wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. Wishing him a good morning, she couldn't help wondering what they were up to. They were set to play for the day, and she had a ton of something big. A whirlwind of plans in her head, things she desperately wanted to do. But her father cut in and reminded them they had exactly one mission for the day: go hunting for a house. The second he said it, fury exploded in him, because that guy had once again gotten way too clingy with his daughter. Curito shot a question right away: what steps did they need to take to land a house? And then they started laying out everything they had to do to get one to the royal capital: paperwork, payments, and a whole pile of other paperwork-heavy chores. He fell silent for what felt like forever, then finally leaned in and told them. He told them the countryside didn't run on all that messy, complicated stuff. All they had to do was win the village chief's permission to stay right there. Once he got it, he could pick any empty spot he wanted and build his own home from the ground up. And the rule hit every rural area the exact same way. So the curator just couldn't believe how wildly different the royal capital and the countryside really were. Then he started wondering if it was even possible to get permission. The look on Andrew's face twisted mid-expression, and it screamed that whatever came next wasn't going to end well. It won't be that easy for him, living the high life with his jewel stash, because that's the future he's already decided to live. Then to jack up his spirit even more, he snatched the boy from behind and warned him that it was on him to keep watch over his house. He was convinced that because he'd already delivered the letters to that place, it gave him a huge advantage, like a ready-made ticket to win permission. Even the little girl stepped in to back him up, then marched straight to the chief asking for permission, and with those words in his head, he finally believed he had a real shot, like the universe might actually let him win. They shoved down the last bites of Stella's breakfast, then headed straight for the village chief's house. Right in the heart of the city, smack in the middle. Larry was introduced as the village chief, and the moment he got the full picture of the condition, he finally clocked it. His magic was totally different, and the wild part was, he even showed off the exact same thing in the demo himself. And even the family insisted on joining them, but before long, like, way too soon, time was already running out. Larry mulled it over and built his decision on that. From the intro alone and the character he'd always been, there was zero pushback from him when it came time to give permission. But he couldn't stop himself, he had to know why he picked their village. This village was all peace and hardworking farmers, churning out world-famous goods. So he figured that with the magic he had in his hands, the possibilities were basically endless. Curado spun around and shot a quick sideways glance at the family behind him, their lowered eyes hanging in the air. He told them he had no family and no real home, until one of his quests finally led him to the place he could call his own. Then flashbacks slammed him, memories of his previous life flooded back, where he lived completely alone. All he could hold onto from his father's words was one demand: live your life your way, not someone else's. The instant he slipped back into the village, it hit him. He didn't just return to a place, he returned to people, a whole family and Andrew and the others, and they welcomed him with pure hearts and zero hidden motives. The heat hit him like a blanket, and that comfort was the whole reason he'd never choose anywhere else to live. He was convinced this was the whole foundation of life, and the only kind of life he'd ever truly wanted. Lurie was hit so hard by that statement that it totally shook him. And once he realized the boy genuinely cared about the village, he pulled him in and welcomed him with open arms. The little lady finally flashed a smile, approval sealed the deal, and happiness burst through her. And Curado couldn't shake the feeling that Andrew was keeping his distance, lurking way behind in a truly strange, unsettling mood. Nina leaned in and told him, "My dad isn't anything, he's just blushing because everything you said came out as kind, soft words." That was nothing like what she was used to and Curado. After becoming an adult, they finally understood what was going on, so they clung to that truth and vowed never to say those words ever again. Once he finally got permission, Andrew didn't waste a second. He led the way to the empty houses because he had every key. They decided to take a shot at it first, before even daring to build a brand new one. And since Jarito refused to stay a freeloader for long, he picked an empty house he could survive in. He refused to build from scratch, and since renovation was the only way he could afford it, he went straight for the cheapest option. Andrew stepped up to the first house and bam, it was a wild, total mashup of everything. The house looked ancient, yet someone kept it in top shape like clockwork. He set his sights on something way bigger. But Andrew showed it there in the village center because the access was perfect. Then Andrew dragged him to a brand new home perched high on the mountain peaks, straight up the coolest view of their whole lives. And when they showed up, the whole thing fit like a glove, exactly the right shape, perfectly built. That third one was just way too huge for him to handle right then. Before that, no matter which house he checked out, none of them felt right to him. And then it hit him, access mattered more than ever, because he couldn't just vanish to some lonely, isolated spot and call it escape. He couldn't decide where to stay, and it was driving him crazy. Then they raced to the final empty house, tucked right inside the village. And it was straight up good looking, built perfect and exactly the right size. Curato couldn't stop laughing at it. And Nina was totally into it too, because he picked it was right near her home. Andrew didn't show him the place earlier because it was uncomfortably close to where he lived. And just a few weeks back, people were actually living there. So Curato told him, "Don't stress, come by my place for dinner again anytime." He couldn't stop laughing at the irony. After wanting it for ages, he was finally getting to live close to the family. With those words hanging in the air, Andrew's face shot bright red again. Because he'd never once been prepared for praise that intense. As the gate swung open, Gerardo stared in shock because the place was. It was perfectly neat and spotless, exactly the right shape with just the amount of space he'd been hunting for. The place felt wide open because a whole family with kids lived there and made the space feel alive. And Andrew stared at it, realizing it was huge for someone like him. Yet Curato never cared a bit about cleaning. He grabbed control and started organizing the place the way he wanted. While Nine was fooling around, she yanked him by the attention and told him to go check out the second floor. It was packed with rooms everywhere, built like it was made for greatness. The place was so huge it swallowed one person whole, so he shoved the others into storage and scribbled that something else was the real emergency. As the lady slipped toward the back door, the real truth finally came into view. The scenery was downright hilarious. Nine knew a ton of things, including the stream that once used to run right through there. Because she'd once run around there, playing with all the kids who lived there before. Curado was convinced this was the perfect spot for sun-soaked days, where he could finally kick back and breathe easy. And those guys said, why stop at partying? So they sparked up a bonfire, cooked grilled cheese with sausages, and turned the whole night into a roast and relax celebration. Curado finally snapped and decided to run with this house, because it lined up perfectly with whatever was burning in his head. Those guys hauled back to the village chief and told him the exact same thing. And with that, the house finally got its makeover. He hired a crew of men and the renovation began for real. Don't expect much remodeling, this isn't going to be a big makeover. Corrado loved the house inside more than anything, and he was already deciding to keep the kitchen and the entrance just the way they were. All he wanted was to sprint out of there as fast as possible, anything but being a freeloader. They packed up and headed out for a day of fishing, so they could finally kick back and enjoy the rest of their time after they were finished there. While Corrado got swept up in dreams of life in the countryside, he suddenly remembered, damn it, he still had a mountain of work waiting for him back in the capital. That snapped Andrew back to reality. He still had a whole week of unfinished work hanging over his head. The whole place felt warmer and safer than anything else. Like the moment you turn around, you just have to go back. The curator decided to grab some furniture, if Amelia wasn't busy with something else. He snapped the spatial magic instantly and vanished from right there. And just like that, Andrew stared in awe again at how insanely good his magic was. The second he touched down in the capital, the truth hit him hard. It had been ages since he'd last laid eyes on that place. As he headed out, he told himself to stop by Emilio first and knock out every last piece of unfinished work. Lunch was bouncing around in his head too, but the second he stepped off the curb and crossed the street, he spotted Rodney hanging back waiting on him, and the sight totally jolted him. When he asked why he was there, Emilia stepped in and told him, wait right here. As he might come back that day, everything hit him like a shock. Now Emilia was even predicting the future. Right at the trading company headquarters, Curado ripped himself into existence in an instant with his spatial magic. And Emilia didn't look pleased at all that he'd vanished for so long. He shot out an apology right away, admitting he'd gotten way too comfortable. And since Emilio had nothing pressing to handle, he just wanted to show up, purely to make his presence felt. And then wondered, how did he even figure out a way to enjoy his life? Curado spilled the whole story, how he juggled life in both the village and the capital at the same time, and it was downright hilarious. While he daydreamed about living in a big, roomy house, the village was already treating him like it was his best day ever. Emilia could tell the folks living there weren't just random. They had real character in every single one of them. Curado practically beamed after one of the wise men backed his decision. He even praised his choice, saying that every decision he made was 100% his, and only he could truly say it was right for him. Then he demanded he keep working with the trading company, because he couldn't afford to let comfort make him lose focus. He thought their company was still a baby, and without Curito there, some deals just couldn't get done. While he was buried in thoughts trying to figure out how to make it truly great, a lightning bolt idea hit him. Then he said if Curado wants to live a jewel life, he'll need a place in the capital too. Curado never even considered something like that, until the instant he denied it. Emilio sprang out of his chair, fury blazing in him, like he was finally admitting he desperately wanted his own place. Because if he stayed at an inn, they'd never even notice when he slipped back in. And he couldn't bear to leave Rodney hanging there, staring at the silence with zero answers. He was convinced that if he finally had a real home, it would crush a bunch of his problems all at once. And if that was the case, he snapped his fingers right in front of Corrido, leaving him stunned, then promised he'd have a home for sure. Those words hit Corretto like a spark, and he instantly nodded in agreement. And it definitely wasn't the end. Anilio even pushed for hiring staff with. So he decided to handle every last bit himself. This whole thing kept escalating, and Curado was convinced Emilio was saying it with a merchant's brain, like every word was raking in profit. And Curado kept picturing her relaxing in luxury, yet the more he dwelled on it, the worse everything seemed to get. The merchant's face snapped with a sudden, shocking change in expression, wondering if he could juggle both homes in the village and the capital, alone, without everything crashing down. Because even getting help from the counselors would turn into a non-stop, soul-crushing grind. And if they didn't keep those houses maintained, disaster would come fast, and it would be way worse than anyone could imagine. Amelia grabbed his attention and told him straight up, If he wanted to keep a house standing, he'd need real magic or someone to help with the work. Corrido had zero answers, and once again the merchant walked away the winner. And that's when he nailed it down. If he wanted a real home there, then hiring staff was the smartest move. Kurita knew he kept getting shoved deeper into the pit that man carved out, but he had absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. And it was basically clear the boy was begging him to take over his home, so he could stash all his company gear there while he was gone. Emilio's face basically blurted out his real plan, and still, he smiled because that guy had the nerve to go for it. The day finally hit when they were set to tour the capital's grand houses. Even so, Corretto still couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't add up. Even though the merchant was desperate to seal the deal, he couldn't stop thinking about his village home back there, bare walls and not a single piece of furniture yet. If you flip it and look at it like a merchant, you'll realize everything that guy said checks out absolutely. So he stopped and weighed every choice before deciding what house he'd finally call his own. Just when he was strolling through the royal capital again, he collided with someone out of nowhere. And before he finally swallowed his pride and apologized, that lady just strolled away like nobody mattered. And Curado couldn't help but obsess over how classy, gorgeous, and deadly on the eyes she was. The very first house they stepped into turned out to be a massive mansion. And the story didn't stop there. After that, they hit up the other two spots they'd already come to see. Curato couldn't wrap his head around it. Why were they rolling past these massive, gorgeous houses when he had to live all by himself? Emilio quickly realized one thing: bigger really was better. It was too much to just shove into storage. Curito stepped in again and made it crystal clear that all he really needed was a great house to live in, not some fancy mansion in the first place. While the salesperson tried to convince him they were offering their top recommendation, the whole time he kept in mind that he was Lord Emilio's friend. After hours of arguing, they finally slammed out an agreement, then immediately decided to move the whole thing to a new place. And it totally looked like this guy was having way more fun than Curado, because through his eyes, it was obvious he'd pushed everything aside. Corretto was the only thing he truly worried about, not himself. When Cerrito finally stumbled into the fourth location, he couldn't help but feel mortified, like the world was watching him fail. Emilio finally finished the house and told him to move in, but Curative shut him down because, right there in front of the trading company, he pushed for way more than just sitting around. He wanted the job done, no excuses. As the scene shifted, they gawked at the next house, jaw dropping as it came into view. In the corner of the royal capital, it felt like the world was about to fall silent, which was pretty in the quietest way. Turns out the estate had been cleared out by a noble who used to live there, sitting just far enough from the busy center that the whole place felt calm, safe, and guarded. Once they finally hit the location, the salesperson swung open the door and showed them a massive, cozy house that felt like it was made for them. Still, it didn't come with that flashy, rich, classic design vibe everyone talks about. It all started with that noble who once lived there. He craved a warm, simple life with no fuss at all. And because his taste lined up perfectly with the previous owners, he figured this was the one he'd go with. They barged in and immediately found. He realized the place was ridiculously spacious, and it looked so unreal it almost felt impossible. But somehow, even with its size, the place felt perfectly calm, like nothing could touch it. It was stacked wall-to-wall with fire and water magic gear, ready for anything. Like the moment you stepped in, you could feel the power humming. Since it was just too convenient, the place came preloaded with even more equipment. Curato didn't care about anything else. He was locked in on that bath scene. Because this bath was absurdly huge, and that's exactly all he'd wanted from the start. It took him a little while to shake off the shock and finally realize, yeah, in this world, a bath wasn't weird at all. But back in Japan, that was a no-brainer. Just one dip in that bath was enough to get the guy on board, and once he asked, "So what's the price?" everything suddenly clicked. The seller warned him it'd cost about 50 gold coins, but with the discount already locked in, she declared she'd take only 40. The curator had the full amount ready, and for a second the price didn't look too bad. Then the merchant shut him down on the spot and refused immediately. And he pushed for a little lower price. She looked totally baffled. Then the salesperson crushed the price down to just 30. Because Lord Emilio asked for it himself, Emilio didn't hesitate. He bargained hard and offered up that same greedy deal for the product she wanted. So she won over the higher-ups, and then she crushed the price, slashing it from 50 down to 25 coins. Emilia still wasn't buying it. She refused to hand over the product, and when she turned to Curado, the whole chat felt terrifying. In the end, the deal still got sealed for 15 gold coins. And Emilio realized it was exactly what they needed. Curito finally got it. No matter what deal that merchant struck for him, he'd be paying it back with his own hard work. And he reconfirmed it again, whispering straight into the guy's ear. He shut it down right away, telling him the deal this guy set in front of him was barely a handshake, nothing worth the effort. He changed his tune again when he said, I'm storing the company's materials here, a lot of them, so there's no need to worry at all. 3 days crawled by at that place. Emilio called Curito and told him the renovation finally wrapped up. Turns out it only needed a few small fixes like a deep clean, and the furniture was already in great shape. Emilio was the one who shoved them to hurry up, practically bullying the trading partners to fall in line. With the staff prep finally done, Curado got lost in the thought of an old butler stepping in to run the whole place. As soon as they stepped inside, he was already firing questions about the staff, like he couldn't wait another second. And the very first look Corretto took inside, it was a lady standing there, ready to greet them with a warm welcome at the place. And then it got way worse, because it wasn't one enemy anymore, it was three more standing right off to the side. And Curado couldn't believe it. He was about to be looked after by those kids, the same little ones running the place like it was their world. He couldn't wrap his head around why these kids were acting like servants all of a sudden. But those guys shoved their claim in his face and said they ran the whole place themselves. And the first lady stepped forward and introduced herself as Elsa, and the whole room lit up with a warm, friendly greeting. Curato didn't really know the girls at all, and the moment he realized it, embarrassment hit him hard. So he spun toward the guy and snapped that he should have told him way earlier about having female servants. And he didn't care one bit that they were beautiful. When he heard that surname, it hit him like a lightning bolt. Those had to be nobles. And he even got Elsa's confirmation that she came from a worker family. As the fourth daughter, she got shoved into the role of a servant. And the rest of them weren't any lower either, they were all at least baron level. The rest were nobles too, and the other three girls hopped in right after, introducing themselves and dropping their last names. And since those girls basically threw themselves at the company to learn anything they could, it was totally normal for noble daughters to take maid jobs just to get educated. He spun on his trading partner like, all right, now you're the one dumping kids in that mansion. Emilio acted like he had absolutely no idea what he'd just done in the first place. Back in this world, if you had a family name, people automatically treated you like you were a noble. But not every noble ruled from the top, and it wasn't rare at all for the youngest child to get sent to work as a maid. But the real killer problem was that every one of these girls was the daughter of a top business partner, Gerardo's clients, and he was the one who had handled them during the trading days. He already knew the truth. At their age limit, it tops out at 12 to 15, with Elsa as the oldest, and every word Curado heard hit like a brutal strike. He simply couldn't stomach the idea of treating his servants like they mattered. But for Milio, it was still downright entertaining. Curita figured the group had to have at least one guy on the staff. Emilio was sure he'd be way more comfortable with beautiful women than stuck with just that rude guy. Curito still wasn't impressed one bit. He was convinced his life back in the village beat anything the capital could offer, especially with Emilio. Like he was confessing, telling her he'd been hunting that woman. Right now we're hunting, turns out the person you're looking for is in the village and they're not there. Curado's ugly face said it all, he'd totally misread the mind. Then he chose to strike a deal with him, banking on one thing, Emilia wasn't gay. And right then, Elsa's face said it all, she was not buying any of it, not even a little. And Curado's mind suddenly lit up with the image of that woman from the village. He just got the image of Nina. Only this time, her overprotective father Andrew was right there, guarding her like a shield. He finally understood the girl in the village wasn't going to choose him, and since he craved peace more than anything right then, he swallowed it, stopped fighting the current, and let life carry him. Before anyone even blinked, the scene shifted, and they were already settled in the drawing room. Elsa chose that moment to grab some tea for them, just like any other maid would. Knowing exactly what she needed, the ladies begged for his tea specialty. Yet Kerdo was still rattled, whisking the cup like crazy while she handed it over. Amelia scanned it and clocked that Curado hated the idea. Then she went along with it, because he'd never once been able to live in a place where maids were just standing by like it was normal. Even inside the trading company, Emilia knew Curado had never once been the one barking orders at his subordinates. Curado knew the truth because he'd been a corporate slave for his entire 27-year life, every day of it. Totally geeking over that cup of tea, he took it in and thanked her softly. They didn't like it either, and they told him that since they were his subordinates and servants, he didn't need to keep acting so formal. Emilia even nodded along, like it was clear he was playing the servant, not her. And he figured this was only the early grind. He'd slowly adjust day by day and get the hang of it. Curito stepped up and tried to fill the chief's shoes. But the moment he shot a look at Elsa, her eyes turned downright terrifying. And he couldn't move an inch, realizing that even though she was sweet and stunning, her presence was terrifying. He shoved himself out of his spot because the pressure was already choking him. As he stretched, it suddenly hit him. Emilio was the one who'd reached out to those girls. He noticed Elsa in the house stayed rocksteady. She'd listened to every bit of magic chatter without even blinking. Meanwhile, another mate was terrified because it was Emilio pulling the strings. Elsa, meanwhile, gave off the vibe of an ice maiden, so unshakable she wouldn't bend no matter what hit her. Right as he was stuck in his thoughts, a voice snapped from behind him. And it was Reed from the Thunder Party who signed on as his very first customer. They both decided to hit a tavern together and wash the day down with drinks. While Reed was spilling how much he'd been suffering, because Toretto wasn't there to help them teleport from one place to the next. Did Corito turn around and start grilling the other side about who else was in the group? He finally found out the women were heading to the public baths. While the day off rolled in, Rox headed out to grab drinks with the other guild members. Curator immediately remembered he had a private bath at his own place, so he could slip in any time he wanted. And before anyone could blink, word was already flying around the corner. Coretta was already working at the trading company. When Reed told the other half of the tale, shock hit him hard, because he'd supposedly bought a perfect house in the capital, with maids included. And the look on his face screamed one thing: he wanted to get the real story behind those profits, because he was one of the key players in the trading company. He didn't drop any gossip, he just laid out his point. Buying a house and hiring maids was never in his plans because he'd never managed to truly see life from an employer's shoes. Reed tossed that conversation around like it was a trophy brag, but right now their dough was shaking with real fear and deep trouble. To help him deal with it, Reed decided to come clean and spill his side of the story. Where he was still young, juggling even more worries the moment he first joined the guild. As an adventurer, he crashed again and again. Then the days stretched out where nothing he did could land. He was convinced that if the higher-ups ran things right, even the lowliest adventurers could still pull a paycheck from the road. He pressed him for the truth, even though it was his very first day as an employer. He needs to dig in, hold his ground, and make the right moves so the employee's future stays protected. Curito finally snapped into focus, clear as day on exactly what he had to do next. As he strolled down the street, the thought hit him. Those girls at his place were so calm, but deep down they were still just kids, standing in front of their very first real test of work. Even he, just a corporate employee, knew the top brass had to be seriously powerful. And that's why he gritted his teeth, braced himself to keep everything from falling apart, and clung to a strong, positive vibe inside the house. Elsa stood right by the door, staring like she expected someone to show up any second. And when Curato finally slipped in, the girl's attention snapped instantly. She jolted right back on her toes. Curato couldn't shake the feeling that it was all his fault, so he kept apologizing every time he blurted it out of nowhere. But when Elsa remembered she was the maid there, she burst into apologies, even though she didn't do anything wrong. Curita realized that no matter what composer she grabbed at her current age, she'd somehow end up. She was just a kid and he refused to let it slide. Then he snapped that she should get the bath ready because he was about to jump in. Elsa nodded with a bright grin, like she'd been waiting her whole life for the master's first command. Gerardo looked at it and knew, no matter what, that he'd get them working in comfort, straight up taking over the master. He was still laughing like everything was fine. Then his stomach growled loud enough to hit him with instant, crushing embarrassment. And he flashed the maid a quick signal: he's hungry, because all he had left from the tavern were drinks. Right now, that place doesn't have a cook at all. And right when he decided to order lunch from the restaurant for the day, his mind snapped into deep thought. He told them to do it all themselves. And sure, it wouldn't match a pro chef's cooking, but they had to try. Purito practically grinned. Someone here could actually cook. So he turned up from his bath and ordered her to start right away. On top of everything, the food table came loaded with all kinds of dishes and steaming cups of tea. Every dish looked almost too tempting, even though to him they were pretty ordinary. So Elsa clarified it was made by those girl nobles from a far-off, remote land, highborn in name but not exactly rare. Turns out, in that country, the daughters who served at the court weren't allowed to inherit land at all, so most of them slipped into marriage with other families, while the fourth or fifth daughter usually got taken by lower status folks like knights or merchants, which is why they never really rose much above common people. Once he stopped and looked a little deeper, it was crystal clear. Those girls weren't just learning stuff for fun, they were being trained to become brides. He couldn't stop thinking Emilia might be plotting the whole thing just to get him to fall for one of those girls and marry. That thought terrified him, so he shoved it aside, praised the food as absolutely delicious, dug in, and then crashed into a deep sound sleep that night. The very next morning, he jolted awake in his lavish mansion. Because that bed was so insanely comfy, it felt like it was holding him in place. He suddenly realized the morning felt downright royal. Everything around him screamed expensive. He thought living in the capital wasn't that bad at all, because for him, what mattered most was right there. And that's when the bath, fully ready and waiting, was suddenly available there. Bathing at home meant he could soak up bliss every single day, and that huge space let him stay in the tub for hours. No stress, no distractions, just him and the calm. The very first day he showed up, bathing, of all things, Elsa leaned in and asked to wash his back, and the whole moment hit him like a wave of pure embarrassment. As time rolled on, he finally slipped into the rhythm, and everything started to click. The second he climbed out of bed, Elsa was already there, staring him down and grilling him on what he planned to do that day. The village renovation was almost done, so he had to rush over there, and he wouldn't be back in the capital for the next 3 days. After he heard it in Milio's direction, he just told her to deliver the message if anything even remotely popped up. With each day that passed, life with the maids felt easier for him, and when the command came, she bowed gracefully before him, signaling she was in full agreement. Right before he left, she even leaned in and wished him a great trip. And once they were gone, it hit like a wave. Right as he stumbled into the village just outside his house, he took one look and knew it all was done right, from the front gate right down to the last detail. The outside looked exactly the same until fresh paint was applied all around, and the whole place felt like it was radiating pure good energy. And right beside it, they even carved out a tiny garden. His grades were barely noticeable, but they still lit up his excitement like a fuse. Everything crashed down the moment he tried to open the gate, and found out the gate had been changed. The locks came off too, but the keys still hadn't shown up, so his reckless plan to blow everything up was getting painfully out of control. But he didn't even know the carpenter. He marched straight to the village chief's door to demand the keys. Nina clocked that Jurito was back, yelled his name right away and told. And she finally told him she'd been holding the keys the whole time. Then Jurito's face lit up with pure excitement. Without wasting a second, she bolted for the keys, then shoved them into his hands. After a few minutes, they came back and told him straight up, those were the new keys. She kept lingering like she knew something was coming before she finally headed back to her place. When Corito asked, she lit up with the idea of seeing his brand new house for herself. And once she got the permission, her face exploded with joy, because she felt like she'd become the very first guest in this brand new house. Corito couldn't help but grin, seeing her bounce in pure excitement was downright adorable. Even though romance wasn't really in his head, he still craved a family. He wanted a kid just like her, and he wanted that growing up right beside her. Right now, he had zero crushes on anyone, so he marched into the house and started inspecting his brand new place. The second they stepped inside, they realized everything was already set and waiting. Renovation done, and the house looked so spotless and perfectly tidy it might have been staged. Ever since that last time, everything suddenly felt totally different. As the little girl pushed deeper into the house, Curato suddenly called out, "Stop," and demanded she halt, and then handed her a fresh pair of slippers. He leaned in and told her, "In this house, we don't wear shoes." And as she grabbed the slippers, she shot back a question, "Is this culture still alive in the capital too?" Curito shrugged it off, saying it was just his personal preference and was. And it felt a little off since there was zero secret message hiding in it. Turns out the houses in the capital were made for indoor shoes, and the maids handled the cleaning, including the streets which were paved, so everything stayed spotless. But the moment they reached the village, everything changed, dirt and grass everywhere, and if someone stepped inside with those muddy feet, they'd be scrubbing and cleaning for ages. That's why, while everything was being renovated, he made sure to carve out a special spot just for shoes. Nina slipped into those slippers and instantly felt the pure, unbelievable comfort. And now she could barely contain herself. She rushed inside, ready to see exactly what had changed. With the comfort they gave her, she even tried to drag the whole thing back to her place. They hurried upstairs to the second floor, and there they found, and realized it felt way roomier than before, because he didn't even have to. He smashed the wall they'd built to link the kitchen, and right away the space opened up, bright, airy, and wide. Curito figured that a tiny, cramped kitchen could drain the spark out of anyone's cooking. And as he tossed those words out like he owned the place, the lady snapped back, asking if he even knew how to back it up. Because Pareto had been alone in his old world for so long, he'd gotten used to handling it, at least for now. And somehow that totally lit up the little girl's heart, because even guys could cook. Nina had never once seen her father step into the kitchen to help her mother cook. He just drank, drifted around, and left behind nothing but the same image they could both remember. Even that thought made Andrew sneeze. He stood by the main door, convinced the air had turned icy. Nana told him that the guys there almost never touched the cooking, and Curato already noticed it too. Men always slipped outside to work, and they'd never once been dragged into housework. He was completely stunned to be shut out as an outsider, even after he'd finally managed to scrape together something that was just average food for everyone. Curito made it clear he widened the space for one reason only, so they could sit together, share meals, and cook side by side. And he even let the whole family slide in to cook while he wasn't there. All he wanted was to squeeze in more family-style moments, so they'd feel closer and build real connections. And he absolutely refused to let his house sit there and waste away while he was gone. Nine was over the moon, and the pure joy on her face screamed that she was soaking up every single day the moment. Kurito sprinted back to their village, buzzing with excitement to cook together, mess around, and even wander over to the flowers to visit them. Because she was over the moon, he finally returned to the village, and suddenly everything felt right. She lifted her hand with care, ready to shake on it, because after that moment they'd be neighbors, no turning back. And when Kurado did it, pure excitement slammed into him so hard it nearly knocked him off his feet. Out of nowhere, Nin's mind snapped to a memory, like it hit him out of thin air. The moment the thought hit, she bolted to the window and stared out into the night. Remembering she still had to sprint back home, she was picked to lend a hand in the garden and grow green onions. Even though she didn't want to leave, Kurado slid her a promise. She could drop by any time because they were neighbors and she had time to handle everything back home. Once the harvest was finally in, she smiled and decided to hand him a bunch of fresh green onions as a sweet little thank you. As she walked away, Kurado suddenly remembered. When he returned later, he'd seen people tending vegetables in that tiny garden. And because he even had a tiny house of his own, he went ahead and started a little garden all by himself. Next time, he decided to dig deeper and get the truth straight from Stella. But the moment he stepped inside, the room was totally empty. And as that sound boomed back at him, he finally got it. Before anything else, he had to fill that empty space. To let the fresh air in, he immediately yanked open one of the windows. With a smooth rush, the mountain wind tore straight toward his face. It hit him like lightning. This was the greatest moment of his life. And from that second on, his dual living finally took flight. After hours passed, Andrew slammed a knocker on Kurado's door to tell him you're there to help him with the move. And Kurado even turned around and thanked him for it. He told him he was already finished with everything, and that hit Andrew like a truck because it was shockingly fast. With his magic doing the heavy lifting, hauling those massive items was never a problem for him. And once he saw the kid truly didn't need a hand, Kurado felt sick with guilt for shutting him down, because the boy had come all the way from the main gate. Andrew wasn't finished yet. He burst out with a new idea. A housewarming party, something he'd been craving for long enough that it finally had to happen. Now that the shifting was finished, he turned to Stella and told her to get the dinner ready. Kurado loved that idea too. He'd been worn out from all day's work, and the last thing he wanted was to keep cooking and dealing with everything around the house. Andrew bolted to his place first, snatched Stella and Nina, and got moving right away. Kurado clocked the guy working all day and still glowing with energy, so he decided to learn a few things from him. In just a few minutes, the entire family came roaring back to Kurito's place. Stella double-checked, "Promise you'll be okay if we crash your place on the very first day." Before anything else, her parents snapped, told them the rule, then made it clear they'd better act. He kept it in a house nobody could enter with shoes on, and Nana flashed a bright smile, confirming it with a burrito in hand. And right then, once it clicked, she grabbed his attention and asked him. He kicked off his shoes and slid into comfy slippers, which felt surprisingly comfy, so they snagged some to set up at their place. Those guys burst into the drawing area, and the sight of all that wild mix of furniture had them grinning like crazy. And it felt like the real deal, like home. Nina was the one who couldn't hold back, blurting it out with full-on excitement. Andrew shot Kurito's styling praise with a few simple words. Kurado glanced at Stella and realized she couldn't even manage another word, like she was suddenly sick. Stella stared into the kitchen, completely speechless. Her eyes sparkled as she hurried to the kitchen, where she unpacked cubed magic tools straight from the capital, then turned to the water magic, already injected and pulsing with promise. None of the guys watching could believe Stella was this fired up. Then Nina begged her father for it, and he snapped back that it would cost them a fortune. Stella snapped back to her senses and, without a second to lose, offered a quick apology. But Kurado pushed her to keep that drive going, then told her she could grab whatever she wanted from right there. As those guys were trading words in a tight little conversation, Andrew snapped at his daughter to slam into the house and go digging for clues in the other areas. While the mother tried to discipline them, snapping that they needed to stay calm like they were in someone else's house, nobody listened at all. So when they bolted out, Stella shot a quick apology for the noise, but Kurado waved it off, too busy daydreaming about what she was going to cook that day. Stella didn't waste a second. She told him she'd grabbed something from her place to cook with, then popped open one of the baskets. It was packed with every ingredient they planned to throw into tonight's feast, especially creamy potato soup. She mostly mapped out the dinner plans, and Kurita's excitement kept climbing hotter and hotter by the minute. And when it hit him back in Japan, he remembered the summer season was exactly what he couldn't wait to sink into, stuffing his face with all those seasonal dishes. Then he asked what they'd be eating for dinner, and they told him. Mushroom modulo, sizzling stir-fry with meat and veggies plus a fresh salad. They both rushed to make sure it was cooked before the father and daughter even had a chance to get hungry. First, both of them slipped into kitchen clothes, and Stell couldn't stop getting wowed as every second passed, watching her whip out the spices and fire magic stove like it was nothing. Curator grabbed the knife and started slicing the vegetables, taking full control of the prep. Stella lit up and praised his cooking skills. Turns out it was hilarious how he could whip up a meal all by himself. Curado couldn't shake the embarrassment. Stella had been stuck like that, and Andrew clearly hadn't helped her nearly enough. Curito was certain that every time she asked him to, he'd leap up for help in a heartbeat, and you could tell he genuinely adored this family. Like he couldn't care less about anything except being there with them in the middle of that conversation. Andrew stayed silent, listening to every word as the sound slipped through the kitchen from one end to the other. Curado's stomach dropped. His position looked so terrifying it practically startled him out of his skin. He burst into the kitchen in under 2 minutes, yanked Curito out, and roared that he was taking command. Curito stared in total disbelief, completely lost because he couldn't even figure out where any of it was coming from. And it turns out he blurted everything about Curito, and how her mom suddenly fumbled and looked so clumsy, and Curito snapped back with a terrifying glare. Then they both slipped out of sight and sneaked a peek at the kitchen, spying on how that couple was really having the time of their lives while they cooked. Those guys were eating it up like a blockbuster, grinning like they were living in the opening scene of a movie. And Corito couldn't stop giggling because that couple looked ridiculously cute together. Anna just wanted the same kind of love her dad and mom had. And that hit Corito hard. Kids like her don't just mindlessly watch, they get pulled into everything they see and feel around them. Right then, Nina was suddenly called from the kitchen for help. So she bolted right away, chasing Curato down and begging him for help. After hours of non-stop prep, they finally finished the dinner, and right now they're clinking glasses of wine before the big feast hits. Tonight, they kicked things off with Andrew's cooked food, and the moment Curato and Nina took their first bite, their faces snapped into brand new expressions. They all felt it was undercooked, but Andrew couldn't take it. He exploded in rage, screamed at everyone not to trash it, and meanwhile Stella had been loving every second. Those guys dug into the meal, then everyone crashed into bed and fell asleep. The very next morning, Coretta jolted awake again. But this time he was back at his village home. Then it hit him no cup of tea the moment he woke up because he was stuck in the village, so he heated the tea on the stove and poured it for himself. Then he slipped out to the balcony, soaking up that breathtaking morning view as nature breathed around him. Back in the capital, it was all luxury and maids, but here the place was way more modest and plain. He couldn't stop smiling because he finally got to live his life his way, free, loud, and totally himself. He was thrilled he could flip the vibe on command, grumpy when he wanted, calm and relaxed the next second. He hurled the dishes into the dishwasher, then bolted outside to stretch his body and shake the tension out. Nina, right there again in the morning, spotted him and came sprinting toward him like something had to happen. Struck by pure curiosity, he couldn't stop wondering what he'd been doing a moment earlier. The instant she realized he was already stretching. So she jumped in with him. Curito turned to her and told her to mimic. Mimic its moves because doing it the right way is actually good for you. Herida counted down with shaking focus while Nyan matched her move, counting and reversing in sync. After everything she tried, she realized the moves were downright ridiculous. Curato's face went hot with embarrassment, and he told her it'd only clean the body out and that it would be a wild time, plus it'd save time too. After a little practice, he finally let her take a breather and told her to rest. Stella rushed to his place too, hunting for her child. Then he bowed up and apologized for what Nina had caused that early morning mess. She told him that the girl was practically glowing because he'd shown up and she was having the time of her life. She made sure she was a good mom, telling that lady to play in moderation, then urging her to get back to farming because they still had work to crush that day. When she finally left, Hirito leaned in, waved her off, and then realized once again he was standing there all by himself. And it hit him hard. Nina was the only soul in that whole village, and she was his only company. That thought alone hit him like, I can't make it out of here. So he flipped the script and decided to live every second like it mattered, because deep down he felt he wasn't truly alone. So he dropped into the shade beneath a tree and just let himself soak in the calm of nature. Huddled at the very bottom, he found a kind of calm that felt completely untouchable. And he couldn't stop picturing how he'd take Andrew's idea, fire up the grill for sausages at the spot, and wash it all down with a great drink. Just as he stared up at the sky, a fresh idea slammed back into his head. So he shot up right away and spotted 2 trees practically hugging each other. Then in the next few minutes, he lashed a real layover bed to both trunks. And realized, wow, this was way nicer than he expected. And he couldn't wait to put Milio's leftover ropes and scraps of fabric to good use. While he was sharing his thoughts, he couldn't quite shake the unease, because it was all handmade. But the second he flopped back on that thing, he suddenly felt weightless, like he'd been dropped into space, floating there with zero gravity pulling him down. He congratulated himself, bragging that his first idea was pure genius, and he pulled it off flawlessly. While he soaked in the luxury, his eyes kept snapping up to the sky. watching the birds roam freely, weaving through the sky like they owned the place. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, and it wrapped him in a strange, warm kind of calm, so he just stretched out and laid back. Right then, the boy was crashed out taking a power nap when boom, Nina showed up out of nowhere and snapped him awake with a scare. She called his name and yanked him awake mid-sleep, then popped out of nowhere and asked, "Everything okay?" But she couldn't stop herself from wondering what he was doing right then. Stella tailed the girl and shot the man another apology for the mess she caused. Curado realized this kind of thing was normal kid stuff, especially for Nina, who couldn't stop digging into what everyone else was doing. And it was exactly the kind of itch they just couldn't ignore. She was curious, so Curado jumped at the chance, guided her with a gentle hand and helped her get into position. Once everything was settled, she was loving every second of it, while it drove him up the wall because it was way too much fun for him right then. And every swing sent a fresh jolt of thrills straight through her. And it was obvious the three of them were absolutely loving every second, until once she finally had her fill, Stella snapped, "All right, you're getting back to the farm." But she urged the lady to give it a shot, because it absolutely crushed anything else she'd ever seen. Hirito was allowed too, because it caused zero trouble. So Stella follows the instructions and carefully drapes herself onto the hammock. And right as her eyelids started to fall, somehow he ended up lost, then for the next few minutes he just kept wandering. The other two guys just hung around, basically waiting for her to finally wake up. But it looked like she'd slipped into a coma-like sleep. Right out of nowhere, she burst back, snapping into her memory, and realized she couldn't waste another second there because she had to get back to work. When Nina realized her mom needed a break, she boldly told her to take the whole day off, no work at all. But Nina seemed way more into playtime than caring for her mother, and Stella snapped back fast. She insisted that crops were living beings too, and they always needed real attention. They wouldn't let it slide, not for a second. So after a little scolding and some hands-on teaching, Nina finally agreed to tag along with her mother to help with the garden work. With a soft smile, Hirito waved them away as they headed out. Then it hit him, he remembered what they said about crops having a life, and only then did he realize he'd been clueless. Because he'd never once been able to live on his own like the others. Then he paused and realized his quiet countryside life wasn't just background, it was part of the whole experience. Then he flopped onto that bed, and right there, a wild dream he didn't even ask for flashed in his mind where he clapped for his own vegetables and basked in pride over his little garden back home. That image hit him like a spark. He craved it so badly he couldn't wait, so he dove in and tried. But it was still pretty early. He decided to take the day off, because his words mattered to him right around evening when the sun was finally ready to set. Andrew clocked out, headed straight to Corrido's place, and asked for permission to hop onto the hammock. It looked like he was basically crashing Corrido's peace, so with no other option, he dragged him to that place, where the whole thing stayed a hot trend for a while. On another day, Corrido hauled himself to Andrew's place to check out the tiny garden they used to have back home, and told him he was thinking of growing the same vegetables at his own place too. Andrew stepped in to help him without hesitation, watching that he was hooked on farming and crops. But before anything else, he grilled the kid about whether he had any experience, then flashed a sweet, harmless act while still refusing to fully admit it on the spot. And since he had zero clue, Andrew decided to begin with something simple. Stuck on the fact that it was a total beginner-level crop. Knowing that the boy could simply head to the capital and get everything he needed for the day, no trouble at all. He started wondering what he could grow with barely any effort. All that flashed through his head was green onions, something he could actually grow right in the middle of the conversation. Stella came to herself, flashed a grin, and greeted them like it was game time. Then she leaned in and told him, "Come by my garden," because she'd been tending those plants back there all on her own. That tiny green onion garden looked downright unreal. And Corretto couldn't believe what he was seeing. The garden looked absolutely flawless, like someone had tended every single inch with obsessive care. He couldn't stop worrying if he'd be able to keep that same back strength growing in his own garden. So you pumped him full of motivation, and suddenly it felt almost effortless, like he could pull it off with ease. That motivation surged through him, and suddenly he had just a bit more confidence to stand his ground. Andrew plucked one of the green onions from his garden and held it up for Curato to see. It was massive. He stared in stunned disbelief, though for them it was just a totally normal size. Curita realized these guys had absolutely no clue what they were actually holding, and how much it truly was worth. Back in Japan, that single thing could drain your entire savings, an absolute fortune for regular folks. He even leaned in and told them the other agents, onions were small and way thinner. But for those guys, it was nothing, just like weeds they scrubbed off every single time they tried growing those vegetables. Curato looked completely out of place as he spat those words. While Andrew just kept cleaning, he split it into two halves and handed Curita one, telling him to run a test. With the order ringing in his ears, he chomped down on the very first bite, and just got totally swept up in the sweet, delicious taste of it all. He thought it was basically like fruit, something you could just toss on the grill and eat. His mind raced with ideas. Could he sprinkle it on other foods, turn it into a handy kitchen gem, and use it 100 different ways? One bite of that thing lit a fire under the boy, and he decided, right then and there, that he was going to grow green onions. Stella even pushed him to check out a totally different crop, negamo. Because that veggie wasn't from the world he'd asked about, he pressed the question, and Stella just smiled and confirmed it tasted almost exactly like potatoes. And it tasted unbelievably delicious in that first try. Then they hauled him to the next field, where the crops were grown through hard, relentless effort. And honestly, it cracked him up, because he'd never once been warned about something like this in his entire life. Andrew told him straight up that those things were a nightmare to grow. One crack of slack could spell disaster for their survival. Since the crops were way easier to grow than those green onions, this might be his smartest move to push through. Right then, Stella grabbed a potato and shoved it into Kurito's hands, telling him it stretched longer and thinner than the usual one, and somehow even looked a lot like sweet potatoes. She leaned in and softly pressed it into his hands, telling him he could cook it anytime he wanted. And just when she finally got the confirmation of what he was about to grow, after she'd gone through, he made it crystal clear he'd grow everything, green onions and gigamo alike. Wanting to be more generous, Stella handed Kurito some of the seeds, yet Kurito never saw this coming, not from this family. But they didn't even flinch because back at their place, they had more than enough. Those guys stood ready to back him up no matter what, and Kurito's eyes couldn't hide it. He was absolutely thrilled to finally be here. Snatching the seeds, Hireta bolted back to his place, then stared at the empty ground and started measuring the garden area he was about to turn into something great. With a stretch of 4 meters in length and 3 meters wide, it's absolutely massive. To hit the recommendation exactly, he wasn't sure he could pull off a plot that huge, so he told himself to grow bigger bit by bit until it finally felt natural. First, they had to clear the weeds from the ground, because there were tons of them, and they spent a moment figuring out exactly how to do it. He ripped through the weeds with a swift spatial slash, slicing them clean off the ground. And it worked flawlessly, no glitches, no resistance. So he powered through and cut into every last piece of it relentlessly until he was done, and then he grabbed a broom and swept up the mess of leftovers after tilling the soil. As he yanked a tool through the soil, tearing out the stubborn roots left behind, he remembered he could unleash a second distortion magic, digging straight into the soil like it was nothing. Without a second thought, he decided to try it too, and just as the moment hit, the boy was completely hooked. When Andrew showed up to hand him some fertilizers, he couldn't believe they were exactly what his plants needed to explode with growth. But the second he saw the weeds were wiped out in the blink of an eye, his brain just couldn't wrap around how it even happened. Kurito admitted he'd tossed in a little magic to make it feel way easier. And since the man couldn't stop wondering how that happened, Kurito finally decided to prove it to him, right there hands-on. He dragged a slash straight in front of his eyes, shaking his mind with disbelief, because somehow something like that was even possible. One little illustration didn't even come close to satisfying that guy's eyes, so when he demanded multiple demos, he made sure he got them. And Kurito proved it every single time, while Andrew kept turning up the praise, louder and louder each go. Once he felt satisfied, he fired off more praise for his magic, calling it even more mind-blowing than before. Kurito's eyes locked on the fertilizers he'd brought to hand over for help. Then, as Toretto lunged forward, Andrew just raised the bag and yanked it away like he was stealing the only chance. With a chilling voice, he demanded a deal, help yank the weeds, and in return he'd let him take the fertilizer. Kurito figured the dude would just give it up for free, then he got hit with a cold reply. The man said it wasn't some change of heart, it was just a straight trade. Kurito flicked his aura into a whole new mode and chose to play clean, telling Andrew that only the patch he planned to use the fertilizer on would be cleared, because Andrew was absolutely never ready for a move that detailed. Kurito snapped back into who he used to be and immediately threw out a sincere apology for his play. He made it crystal clear he'd always be there to help him, so there was never going to be a problem. Andrew shot him a grateful nod, sure the kid was about to help him big time. Then Kurito just smirked, because he knew Andrew was already doing more than well enough as things stood. Andrew raced to apologize again after he played a prank on a merchant of trades. Kurito knew real merchants were way more terrifying, and right as he tried to think, Emilia flashed in his background like she didn't even notice him. Both of them made up their minds to push forward and take over. And Kurito couldn't forget it, the second he returned to that place and crossed paths with his family. He'd been taking the hits. From the very start, he couldn't stop thinking about how to repay every bit of kindness the village had given him. When he finally made it back, he grabbed the plow and kept going, but soon exhaustion hit him, so he called it a day and took a short break. The day before, he'd spent hours yanking weeds at Andrew's place just to earn dinners from Stella's hand. And let's be real, that deal felt wildly lopsided. After a while, he whipped his head around to check his trail. He took one look and thought, wow, everything felt so well put together it practically breathed like a real, proper farm. And he couldn't help but beam with pride because he knew he was doing great. His training had to hit the routine too, not just the teleportation. Pride surged through him as he kept thinking, and then someone's voice rang out, praising his hard work on the farm. And when he spun around, he spotted Greg and Taylor hanging back beside him. He instantly clocked both of them and jabbed his fingers like they'd been buddies for years. Before anything else, he called them out by their last names, and both of them suddenly swore they'd finally give a real introduction this time, unlike the mess last time when he showed up as an adventurer. The woman stepped forward and declared, "I'm Angilia," while the man beside her answered, "I'm Glythe." Curito bowed in full formality to introduce himself, but the lady waved it off and told him to stop being so formal, because they were the ones who owed him an apology for vanishing after he moved in. The lady drifted toward other conversations, while the man cut in and bluntly demanded what he planned to grow on that farm. After the market finally handed him a sack of potatoes and onions, the man headed out to inspect the land, determined to see exactly how he'd been keeping it in shape. He offered a suggestion, and he told him to raise the potato mounds a little higher because their roots dug out deep and wide, they could burst up from those mounds and spill into the world. Kairito couldn't stop smiling. He was soaking up advice from everyone, even as his thoughts quietly raced ahead. The man shoved a bag of cutlery into his hands and said it was just a housewarming gift, something that could actually come in handy. Before Curado even had time to process that gift, the lady swung another surprise his way. She hauled out homemade butter and cheese like it was the next blow in her secret plan. It threw off a wildly ridiculous smell, and he didn't even stop to wonder whether stealing all that stuff with nothing in return was actually a bad idea. Glythe handcrafted every single piece of that cutlery with his own hands. Because their family had been crafting and selling artisan goods for generations, Coretta couldn't help but stare in total awe. And just look at them, these had to be crafted by some of the greatest masters, judging by how they look. That old man's grin lit up the moment the boy praised him, but he tried to play it cool and act like it didn't get to him. Still, the other two saw right through it, knowing he was just betrayed from all those compliments. At first glance, the old man just looked grumpy as hell, but deep down he was pure kindness. Angilia raised cows and sheep, and right now everything's about to change. She owned a huge flock of sheep, and every day those woolly beasts turned out fresh milk for her. That praise felt amazing to him, and she laid out the perks: easy wool, steady mill output, and all the benefits that follow when you keep the herd. That could have totally passed for meat. Curator wasn't ready for that kind of comment. But she didn't give a damn, and even told him to take up raising livestock himself. Once the job at that place was finally finished, they packed up and walked out, leaving him with a prayer for good luck for the rest of his life. And he softly thanked them for showing up out of nowhere and giving him a sign of kindness. He stepped inside just as night crept in and served up the food he'd gotten from the old lady, starting with that bread slathered in butter. He grabbed the old man's cutlery and dug in, and the first bite hit rich and delicious, light on his hands, easy to use as he savored every second of the meal. He remembered something crucial. Every single person in that village had a job to do, not just the old couple, but even the family living right across the way, including Andrew, who unleashed his power to hunt for food and keep the village safe, while Stella and Nana busied themselves growing all kinds of crops. He was convinced every person in that place was pitching in with their own skills, and that's exactly why the village was thriving, powered by mutual support. And he didn't need any magic at all. Something clicked in his head, and he realized he had to step up too and help them however he could. And then he couldn't stop wondering, what's the one way he could really bring something to the table? Like the danger wasn't just near the target, it hit him from the other side of the world. The next day, Curito stormed out of his house. He spotted someone standing there, and before he could blink, they greeted him. "Good morning." Turns out it was Mayor Leroy coming straight to visit him. He rushed to apologize for showing up so early, then checked again to make sure the place worked for him, and Curito just lit up, praising everything he loved, from the air to the food to the people. But one word snagged his attention: inconvenient. Larry shot him a quick look. His face screamed he was feeling low, and he just asked straight up what was dragging him down. He got all flustered and blurted out that the day before, that old couple showed up to check on him. And on top of that, they even showed up with housewarming gifts. His heart overflowed with gratitude, and joy surged through him, right up until he stopped and gave it one thought. He couldn't stop thinking about the one thing he could do to actually help that village. Because he'd been getting it all along, he couldn't just sit there. He had to repay that gratitude. He swore that ever since he arrived here, he's been getting nothing done. not because he wanted to, but because he just didn't have the skills or the drive like everyone else. It felt like a real sting. He could sit there and enjoy dinner with the family, but he never once lifted a hand to put anything on the table. Larry finally understood what was going on, and he was thrilled that this young man was diving so deep into it. But he warned him, slow down, stop rushing like that. Kirito's ears snapped up as if the urgency in those words had hit him like a spark, and the man kept going, painting the village as nothing but quiet, rural streets. At that place, there weren't any shops or real options at all, so the kids who grew up there had no choice but to tear out of their hometown and chase the capital. And Greg and Taylor felt it too, the exact same pulse in their hearts. Kurita remembered it clearly. He was the one who'd answered their call and brought those letters down from the capital, and now the old man stared at him like somehow he was still young. And that was wild because he was already 27 years old. Larry couldn't stop smiling. Someone like him, already settled in the capital, had moved right into the village, and the whole idea made him grin like it was pure comedy. Kurito froze, those words hit him so hard he just got wrecked by the feeling. And he was convinced that the old couple showing up to visit him meant everything was finally crystal clear. Leroy practically beamed when a kid fresh off the capital finally returned to the village. So he told him again, don't worry, everything's fine, like it was only about to happen in the next heartbeat. He should stop overthinking everything, live his life, and actually enjoy the ride. With those words, Hirito finally heard his father's message loud and clear. Live your life your way. And that brutal realization snapped everything into focus for him. So he once again patted his own back, thrilled he'd returned to the village. Right then he chose to chill for a second, and the mayor's words slammed back into his mind, who told him he could step in when the time finally hit. Like good ideas and real results were never supposed to show up instantly. And every moment hit harder than rushing ever could. While he was roaming the village, he stumbled on a spot that looked locked down and perfectly guarded. And there, flawless, beautiful tomatoes thrived like jewels under the sun. So he decided to roll up to it on his own, no questions asked. He stepped into the farm and froze. Everywhere he looked, tomatoes were packed in thick. Nothing like this existed in the village, and somehow it was right here, so close. He was absolutely obsessed with tomatoes, and he couldn't stop wondering, could he get them straight from the source? But the second he focused a little harder, he spotted it. Those tomatoes were all warped and oddly shaped. It looked like an onion, and that color was honestly gorgeous. Right in the middle of his inspection, someone crept up behind him. The second he spun around, a shovel came up to his neck, right as a straw-hatted guy barked that he'd better get out of his tomatoes. They labeled him a thief and then kept pressing him, saying that if he kept going down that legal path, regret would hit him hard. He kept accusing him non-stop, like he was nothing but a tomato thief. While Kurito tried to clear up what was going on, he kept pushing the truth, again and again, so he could finally make him understand what it was. He tried to brush it off as no big deal, just asking about those weird, oddly shaped tomatoes he'd never seen once in his entire life. The boy couldn't even recognize his own face. Then Kurito stepped in, introduced himself, Kurito, and told everyone he'd just recently moved in. Those words hit him like a lightning bolt, and suddenly he realized he was the same weird kid who'd returned to the village after making the capital his home. As he started tending to his tomatoes, he kept pressing him, saying he'd called him a weirdo, because his actions proved he didn't give a damn about his fancy, royal life in the capital. The boy kept calling him young like he was some mirror, and the words came out downright brutal. Kurito told him, yeah, the capital is rich, but that doesn't automatically make it better. Right now, he'd been falling for the village instead, the people, the buildings, and even the way it still had plenty of nature woven into it. He figured he could say those words with zero hesitation because, back in the capital, life had already been good to him. But Pareto's expression gave him absolutely no good feeling at all. So yeah, people were basically praising him. The boys just swallowed their pride and apologized for doubting him, because some idiots had already slipped onto his farm in secret. But for Kurito, the village held no real villains, yet the boy still had to stay on edge because he wasn't one of them. The Straw Hat guy hated that fancy tone and snapped right back, restating his age like it was a line in the sand. When he learned the truth that he was only 27, his shock hit all over again. Because his face gave away nothing, no sign it was true. The boy suddenly remembered the guy was only 1 year younger than Andrew, and that was all the intro he had left to give. Kurito demanded the boy do it himself. The boy stepped forward and introduced himself as Olga, the kid who ran the tomato farm like it was his kingdom. At just 22 years old, he was one of the village's wild young freaks. Kurito couldn't help but grin. Someone his age actually lived in that village, and he was itching to make friends. Both of them felt nothing but calm. They clapped their hands together, sealing the moment. Right then, Kurito's gut screamed trouble, because that wrong feeling turned out to be a smashed tomato right in front of him, which dripped across his hand, and Ola couldn't help laughing to himself, like he'd totally outplayed him or something. Kurita had this strong gut feeling they'd click for real, especially after he went to the well. He scrubbed the tomato stain off his hands, then leaned in and asked what kind of tomatoes he was growing right then. Olga just sensed they were the usual harmless sort of thing, nothing suspicious at all. Hireta couldn't swallow it, these regulars were supposed to be round, but this was. But the straw hat guy didn't care, he was too busy keeping tabs on his own tomatoes. He only made a quick run to the nearest village to sell his stuff, then stopped right there, going no farther. The curator knew his thoughts rang true, because the logistics out there didn't play around, they were brutally unforgiving. With no cars or planes, the produce spoiled on the trip, and with monsters hanging around, they couldn't just toss everything onto the road and rush to the capital to sell it for a higher price. Right out of nowhere, the thought hit them, turn one of the tomatoes toward the farm. But the boy lunged in, grabbed him, and hurled it away. Hurled a chunk of tomato at him, warning him that it wasn't ripe enough yet. So he could grab one straight off the cart. Jarito just flashed a quick thanks and that was it. The second he grabbed those tomatoes, he felt their weight. Big, perfectly sized, and just ripe enough to avoid that harsh green bite. He kept showering the tomatoes with praise, and the producer's gut sank, like he could tell this wasn't landing as genuine. So he leaned in and demanded he dig in and eat it right then. After the command, Kurito took the first bite, and it was like the flavor yanked him straight into pure bliss. It tasted way sweeter and sharper than any other tomato, and still none of it helped them figure out what the guy was really trying to say. Kurito couldn't stop praising it as delicious, and the look on his face screamed that he'd never tasted anything like this before. And just like that, Alva's face lit up with a big proud smile, as if someone had finally thrown him the praise his crops deserved. Even with confidence in the flavor, he was still over the moon someone actually praised him. Like that approval lit him up inside and gave him this amazing feeling that. And Kurito finally got what was going on. Because when someone praised their hard work, it meant his situation was one of those everybody knows this conditions. Turns out there wasn't any compliment you could get without work. The tomatoes' shape and taste only eased into greatness after the effort, with moisture and richness that were on a whole other level. Every last drop of credit went to Alva. He was the real mastermind, the one who poured his heart and soul into crafting these beauties. But the real gut punch was this. Even now, Olga still had no clue what kind of priceless future she was growing with those tomatoes. Herida couldn't wrap her head around it. There was something far more valuable right in front of them, guarded for only the few. And it wasn't just the tomatoes. Andrew's green onions were on the list too, right there in the moment. He thought trapping all of it in one spot was basically a total waste. At that moment, he was pulling the ugliest faces, so Olga couldn't hold back and blurted out why. Kurito looked down, told him the fruit was super delicious, and asked if he didn't want that taste to spread to millions. Olga couldn't even guess what was firing in Kurito's mind, as he kept spiraling over Emilio. He tracked down some outrageously premium deal for the product he was about to hand over, but the whole thing looked downright terrifying. Hallbeck almost got his point, but it didn't matter. If he wanted to sell it to a pack city, he'd have to fear the waste it could create, not chase profit, because hauling that stuff over long distances would be a brutal deal-breaker. He thought the village he was growing these materials in was just his only way to sell them, but right before he could finish his sentence, Curate burst into a scream, telling him he could be the one to help spread his tomatoes all across the country. Alder had absolutely no clue what our protagonist could do, so he shrugged him off as just another mental patient, someone who'd talk only because he couldn't help it. As Coretto tried to explain what he could do, he froze mid-sentence. Then panic hit when he realized he'd been cut off mid-find. He finally cracked a way to get his hands on something and actually help his village. Once again, just like he always thought was right, he chose silence, then set out to prove it in action and test what he'd say when they finally reached the capital. In the blink of an eye, they got there without wasting a minute stuck in some carriage. Before anyone could even blurt out an answer, Kurito snatched his hand, and boom, the next moment. They blinked and boom, they were already staring at the royal capital. Frozen in the dead center of the streets, he stood there, right in the path of everything. Back at the capital, Cashin strolled through the streets with a carefree grin, singing like she owned the whole day off. After a long wait, she finally got it. Once Curato lost his transporter job, she had to drag herself into late nights just to finish the work. She refused to waste a single second even wondering about it. And Kerdo was right there, seconds away from chasing down that sweet ice cream until everything changed. Olga suddenly materialized right beside her out of nowhere. She got yanked into the street and froze in total shock. She even toppled to the floor, and Corrado, completely clueless, just kept asking what she was doing there. Right in the middle of their little chit-chat, everything got derailed. He couldn't wrap his head around what just happened or why it happened. Out of nowhere, he burst into the capital and stared straight at the royal castle. The man finally started to trust what the boy had claimed back then, that those trips between the city and the village were real. While he was stuck in his thoughts, Cushion suddenly cut in and asked if he was Kurito's friend. Meanwhile, Olga stared at a beastman like it was her first time seeing one. As she introduced herself as the guild's worker, she grabbed his hands and made sure he didn't refuse. She begged him to join right then. Olga had never, not once, come this close to a girl. This felt miles beyond anything he'd ever experienced. Right as he was about to snap, Kurito clocked it and yanked him over to the other side, insisting she needed to hear that he was only trying to explain how his own magic worked. While they were on the move, Prishan called out again and told him, "Come to the guild anytime you want." Kurito nodded and agreed right as he said it. He ripped the distance open with teleportation again. Kurito surged out from the heart of the city and pushed all the way back toward the village, chasing that perfect, cool breeze. While Aldo was still frozen in place, he kept explaining face set that this was exactly how it worked. The boy teetered on the edge of shock, and all he wanted was to blurt it out. "With my magic, we can wipe out the distance in an instant." But it all hit so fast that the boy barely got a second to catch up and understand. He figured he could sell those items in the capital, but a cold doubt hit, would anyone even want them there? Kurito burst in again and spilled his plan. He said he was teaming up with a top trading company, and his magic space and transport could stash the tomatoes safely without ruining their fresh state. He still couldn't believe those tomatoes could actually reach the big city and get sold there. And when Kurito caught that the boy was dead set on hesitating, he told the guy the exact same thing. Olga took that hit straight to the heart, and somehow his snark at his age didn't sit right with her. Finally, she cut through the tension and demanded to know what he was really getting out of helping them sell their produce in the market. And when Kurito finally answered, it was simple. He just wanted to push the village a little closer to prosperity. And right then, this was the one thing he came for. He admitted it, he truly loved the village, and swore he'd help out any way he possibly could. Without even a name, he'd already stormed through so many places that no one could count. Even if he thought it wouldn't work, he couldn't resist, he had to try anyway. So he decided the villages couldn't just grow vegetables for the capital anymore. He wanted those crops rolling out across the whole nation. And at that moment, he finally earned the boy's trust, the one he'd been chasing since day one. Those words hit Olga like a gut punch, and before she could even think twice, she just acted. He just scratched his head, told him to shut it, and muttered that he was never built for talking, thinking it over as he said it. Once again, Olga pressed him, "Are you really sure you're? The material with sell is flooding the market." Kurito shot back with a stone-cold expression, no hesitation at all, and declared he was completely sure of it. Olga held her breath waiting for him to move, but Dorado just wouldn't budge. His face stayed frozen. He decided to bet on himself, because his confidence deserved one real shot. He scooped up the straw hat off the floor, after it had fallen right when he came back from the capital. He told him he had to test whether those tomatoes could survive in the capital, because the whole place was buzzing at peak excitement. Olga showed real grit and pressed him, straight up asking if he wanted only cold cash. He asked it straight to the point, then made it clear. Rural folks need more money to grow and sell their produce than city people do. Kurito also knew one thing for sure. Money was the real problem, and trade turned into a full-blown nightmare the moment it was on the line. And just when everything finally got settled, both of them clapped fists in agreement, swearing they'd de-trade those tomatoes to break out and reach the whole nation. Kurito spun right back toward Naina's place, like the night had pulled him there again. She hauled water from the two wells. As Kurito materialized through his teleportation, she lit up the moment he showed up, because he was there to meet her parents while they were out working in the field. He bolted there right away and apologized for cutting in mid-work, because whatever it was, he couldn't ignore it. He needed to say it now. He pushed forward and demanded a little time, so they could find a spot to sit down and hash everything out. As he laid out the full, no-holds-barred story for them, they couldn't wrap their heads around it. Corretto was actually planning to sell their crops in the capital. Andrew had the same gut-wrenching question: would their product actually sell, or would it just be treated like ordinary crops? Curado hated the comment, so he snapped and screamed that they weren't regular at all, no matter what they said. Once he steadied himself, he told them straight up that these green onions, thick, sweet, and absolutely huge, were nothing like the ones back in the royal capital. Andrew had no clue about any of it at first, and even now the same thought kept gnawing at him. If he left everything back at the village, it would be a total waste. First, every crop, potatoes included, was cleared and approved. And because it grew so easily, the shipments would roll in steady and they'd finally rake in way more than they were making right now. Andrew swore everything felt totally normal to him, but Corrido and the others stared at it like it didn't make sense at all. While he spiraled over the village chief, because getting that permission could turn into a real. Curado leaned in and told him, "Don't worry, I handled it already right from the start." He told them the whole scheme was simple. Sell every last tomato and rare veggie from the village, then add the milk, cheese, and meat they had on hand. Once Andrew finally learned he could meet that guy, everything changed. Joy lit up his face and even the little girl beamed, thrilled to finally know. Because she loved Olga's tomatoes more than anything in the world. Andrew leaned in and demanded to know if the boy planned to cash in on the trading company connection to sell the produce. Curato nodded and straightened things out. Because he was tied to a legit trading company, he planned to push the goods straight into the markets and restaurants. Andrew had also heard about the Emaleo trading company, so when they started grabbing control of everything, it was only a matter of time because they kept popping up again and again, taking more and more. Every time those merchants rolled past, they couldn't help but gossip about how insanely fast it was growing. Then it hit him Curito's magic was the missing piece, the real force driving everything. Curato realized the company was exploding in growth. Its name had even reached the smallest corners of the village, and that kind of momentum didn't come from nowhere. That felt like a good sign. Now the real question hit. Would the villagers back them up and help sell their produce at the market, or would they turn away? Andrew glanced at his better half for answers, and when she flashed him a bright smile, he got the green light. Curito wasn't stopping there. He hunted for other crops that would thrive, sell fast, and bring real profit straight into the royal capital. So he cornered Andrew and asked him who. They told him they never grow anything else, but they knew right in the village there were folks who did, so he should go ask them. Then Andrew hauled the boy to new places and made him taste all kinds of materials, stuffing the mix with sugarcane and watermelons. And then he hauled every sample together in one spot, right back at his home. And at night he couldn't stop smiling, thinking, this is finally going to work. Right then he caught a glimpse of everything available back at the other place, and picking through it turned into a brutally tedious grind. Right then he couldn't take it all at once, and Nilio's impression mattered most. He couldn't stop wondering if that guy would actually hear him out. So if they didn't spot any profit or real value, they'd shut down the opinion right away, no matter if those people were friends. He knew tomorrow's conversation could decide everything. The next day, the scene snapped back to the capital. Elsa was stuck tending to Curito's place when right out of thin air he showed up like a total surprise. Teleportation magic in his back pocket, he zoomed into the scene and started explaining how he got there. But this time she didn't even flinch, she refused to move an inch. Curato totally didn't see that coming. She bowed gracefully in front of him and sent him right back his wishes. He was thrilled she'd adapted, and she couldn't stop admiring herself because she finally wanted to be the head maid. Turns out it was just the learning process. Just like before, she scanned for any message from that man. With nothing left to do, he headed straight to the trading company to pitch his produce. Then the maid cut in and told him Emilio was already there. When Cerdo finally returned, he had no idea that the same guy would be waiting right at his own doorstep. And like clockwork, he cooked up the excuse, claiming he knew the kid would show up, then he just rolled in anyway. Emilio turned the conversation back to himself and demanded, "Am I really enjoying my life here in the village?" And Corrido replied with total confidence, saying his time back there crushed everything he ever faced at the capital. Emilio was even pushing for permission to head out to the mountain area so she could finally rest. And the way he carried it out made Corrido look like a retired old man, like he'd hit early retirement and then decided to act. He was soaking up every second. Then he just cut himself off mid-sightseeing and told him straight up that he couldn't wait to talk about selling it. Emilia never even saw this coming, because that guy had barely tried to sell a single item in the first place. Jurito dumped everything he'd brought back from the village onto the floor, then looked at him and said, "These are the crops we harvested from that place." Emilio hated it so much he was ready to storm out, but the only thing stopping him was the grip on his coat. Someone yanked him back and demanded he wait. He just wanted to show the items off and let him hear him out, because every product looked solid, sharp, and in perfect shape before they even got into the discussion. Emilio stared at the villagers, wondering if they'd really asked him to do it. If that were true, he couldn't sell it, because it wouldn't even pad the company's profits enough to justify it. Curito made it crystal clear, those people would never, ever go putting in a request like that. And he carried those materials with him because the thought of tricking the villagers, or Emilio, never once crossed his mind. Those words felt like a lifeline, so Emilio blurted out an apology right away, and went right back to double-check the basics, seeing it and tasting it for himself. Before he even fully bought into the idea of working on the crop proposal, it already caught Curito's eye. Curito flashed a bright grin, buzzing with excitement at the news that he was about to step into a negotiation. As Emilio stared hard, it hit him, this kind of quality simply wasn't on offer here. And Curito beamed the moment those words finally spilled from his mouth. He leaned in and told him, back in the village, these materials were nothing special, just ordinary stuff. That's why Emilio finally got it, why they always slipped out of his network. In the right situation, what looks normal can totally flip, and special could be anything as long as there's an image made of it. Kirito's heart pounded as he heard Emilio say those words, because if that was his real thought, they could land the sale for sure. He was talking like a real merchant, convinced he'd land top-quality goods and squeeze them for a fat profit once the bargaining started in the market. Emilio was grinning hard, just happy. Kirito had started sizing it up the same way too, because this was exactly the kind of move that could boost the premium product's value. Emilio still couldn't quite place the taste, and it left him genuinely puzzled. While Kirito was absolutely certain, he knew for a fact that he had the truth in his hands because he understood that. When it came to veggies and anything you could eat, the only thing that mattered was one thing: how they tasted and what kind of flavor hit your mouth. He de-picked those materials out of a pile of options again and again, trusting his own taste, because once that hit, nothing in the village could beat the food. He chose to taste it first, then chopped the onions into razor-perfect sizes and slid them to Emilio, making sure he knew they were safely stashed to shield them from any damage. Emilia blinked in surprise because that onion was so huge it instantly snatched his attention. For the first few seconds, he chewed straight through a toothpick. Then once he got what it meant, he didn't move a muscle. He couldn't help grinning. Every bite hit like magic as the green onion melted in his mouth, and Kirito knew right away it was something truly amazing. He basically braced for the same reaction and then kept rolling, explaining how you can cook it down to tender perfection, pull out even richer flavors, and top it all off with a few drinks. Emilia stared in awe as Kirito pulled off his marketing magic. Then she didn't wait for a single more signal. He immediately jumped to the next flavor, odd shake tomato, big enough to make you pause. Then he chomped into the tomato, chewed slowly, and his face lit up with every second as that flavor hit and he couldn't stop smiling. He raved that it was sweet and delicious, and Kirito practically lit up, feeling every bite. Even Emilia could tell something was off. The stuff they got there tasted way too sharp and watery. Every bite was pure sweetness with a rich, satisfying texture. Those reviews sounded like they were written by someone who'd mastered the craft. Right in the middle of the test, Emilio instantly snatched up his phone, called Elsa, and shoved a tomato into her hands, begging her to cook up a soup just to tug on her temptation. Right out the gate, the three other maids had their ears glued to the conversation, lurking nearby, jaws tight with curiosity. So what was it that even made Emilio's attention spike? Without wasting a second, they lunged for the table and sampled every other thing that was sitting there. And the second they wrapped up, the curator snapped a question to the merchant: could they actually sell? Emilia fell into deep thought, wiped his mouth, and then apologized for how rude she'd been earlier. He kept insisting it was nothing but favoritism. Then he leaned in and told him the village's crops were top tier, and if they stuck to every procedure, they'd sell like wildfire. He even went out of his way to praise him for bringing in some genuinely good stuff, and told him the only thing he wanted from him right now was one guarantee: every single product from the village would be sold, and sold only through the Emilio Trading Company. Right then, they had to figure out who the real buyers might be, so they decided to investigate first and sort it out later. Next, the story snapped to the village. Andrew stood on gate duty, mouth hanging in a yawn because the day stayed totally calm with zero weird stuff. Kirito's sudden appearance cut right through his peace, like a pop of thunder. Startled to the core, he yanked his spear up and leveled it at him, panicking that some terrifying threat was right ahead, while Kirito fought back to defend himself. He told Andrew he'd rather use the gate, because he knew Andrew was working that day. Just as Kirito's spear hovered at his neck, a brutal flashback ripped through his mind. Every time he'd once stepped in to help adventurers on the battlefield. Andrew leaned in and asked the boy what he'd been up to, and why he hadn't set foot in the village for days. Then they finally learned the truth. He'd been secretly selling the crops he pulled in from the royal capital. The second Kirito said those words, Andrew couldn't hold it in. He peppered him with question after question. Kirito snapped at him, telling him to slow down and breathe, just a little calmer. Since everyone was itching to know, he decided to drag up every person from the village who'd be thrilled to finally hear what really happened back at the royal capital, just a few minutes from now. A crowd bigger than anyone expected surged into the village square, circling in toward the center like something was about to strike. As everyone buzzed and traded stories about what had just happened. And Kirito couldn't even process it. So many people were trying to make peace that it didn't feel real. They worried about their crops, after pouring every ounce of effort into growing them. The crowd's noise rattled Kirito, because back in his corporate days, his presentation skills had always been pretty rough. Just as he hunted for a way out to face everything barreling at him, the danger from behind erupted too, and they were still buzzing with excitement. Then he started shaking Kirito hard, grilling him about his tomatoes and what rumors were flying around them, fighting to keep his own nerves from cracking. He told everyone he'd deliver a report right then, and Olga scrambled to get through to him, because he hadn't slept a wink for it. A voice yanked the boy back from behind him, and they made it clear this one was Olga's little sister. Curado had no clue about her at all. None, yet she was also the kind of person who used to help out with the tomatoes. Over a few words with that lady, Ova felt it. This wasn't just small talk, something was brewing between them. And just like that, he shoved her into the corner, so hard it actually stunned her. She never saw it coming. Her own brother just bilated on her when she needed him most. Right as she was still reeling from what her brother just blurted, a petty little quarrel erupted in the background between them. Nina marched in with a bright smile and leaned in to tell them. The old man who had been standing earlier was already slumped on his knees, fuming with impatience, so he had to move fast right now. While everyone closed in, Corrido clocked his own condition and snapped, calling straight to the main topic right away. Everyone sat on the edge of their seats, eyes wide and ears tuned for anything. The air felt razor thick and our guy started to sweat because even a total newcomer couldn't help but get hooked by the brutal grind they'd put in day after day. But at the end of the day, he finally mustered the nerve to tell them they couldn't sell that material in the shops. Everybody there got slammed by it, no one walked away the same. Nobody saw that line coming, everyone froze, and the whole crowd went dead silent. Pareto immediately snapped the moment into clarity. Told them that just because shops wouldn't buy it didn't mean they couldn't sell it somewhere else. Olga started getting totally confused, because those two statements kept clashing, canceling each other out mid-sentence. So he sat them down and spilled the real way things worked back then, and laid out how they were locking in the final buyers for the product. And that really snapped Curado back to reality. These weren't just any products the company was pushing right now. Turns up their nose at seafood and shuns rare monster meat. While Coretta tried to crack what it all really meant, Amelia leaned in and told him the truth, why they wouldn't touch beef or vegetables. Because anyone could spot them hiding on any corner of the shop. Right now, the royal capital had no port, so fresh seafood was easy to grab and keep, while up the other end, vegetables and meat were practically everywhere. Pareto's material was way too flimsy for a newborn trade association to sell, and with the market already locked in, the company had little to gain by jumping in. Vegetables and meat basically sold the promise right from the start. Make it cheap, make it tasty, and you're golden. So that's why his agitation flared the moment he shoved vegetables at him, and he made sure the boy was working the niche market right away. And once it was this kind of situation, getting anyone to buy wasn't going to be a walk in the park. Emilio's face snapped into shock when he heard the plan. They wouldn't sell it in the market at all, they'd deliver it straight to restaurants. He explained that some restaurants were so upscale the nobles ate there constantly, royalty included. And because that trade association already ran a deal, signing contracts with restaurants while the trading company brought the delicacies and seafood, they could pitch the vegetables like a slam dunk when they renewed the contract. Emilio was sure Corretto's vegetables would finally get the respect they deserved. He'd lock them away with magic for storage, and nothing would spoil a single thing. But he knew that still wouldn't be enough, and right then, the trade association's head, the trusted Corrido. Even if their views stretched wider than the usual crowd, plain old ingredients were still a mystery. So they needed one crucial key to beat what everyone already knew. He made sure they had to sell the trade with a flashy pitch, so they were forced to run a proper testing session, no exceptions. He remembered, yeah, villa vegetables were sold in the royal capital, and right now he had to hustle up a plan to win back favor. Still mulling over that flagship pitch, the one he believed could upgrade everything. As Elsa tried to follow the thought, she noticed the boy's headache raging, so she hurriedly urged him to have some tea. As she started prepping one, Curito suddenly got a wild idea blazing in his head. Then he fired off a few words straight to the lady, like he couldn't wait a second. Believing they might finally pull off a real shot with that, right before the scene switched. Curito's house was already buzzing for another day, packed with guests as they rolled in, each one greeted like a superstar and introduced as an honored representative of the restaurants, all of them waiting patiently for the moment to step forward. They all got hauled in for the final roll call of the Curito vegetable session. As everyone else gathered their watches the scene unfold, they couldn't wrap their heads around why the Emilio company was barging into the vegetable market when they were built on fish and seafood. Curito stood in the background and kept those guys going, hauling more vegetable buckets to them. When Emilio finally stopped, he showered him with praise for that eye-catching promotion, because it absolutely crushed it and became a huge success. And there was no way he could have guessed it would be coming from him. Herida knew this victory wasn't his at all. It was the maids who shoved themselves forward, masks on, and made it happen. Back then, Curita pushed Elsa and the others to step up as the poster girls. At first, Emilio and the lady locked eyes with him, like he'd just committed the biggest mistake imaginable. For a moment, silence hit so hard it made Curito's nerves spike. Then it hit him if they didn't respond in the next 5 seconds, he'd messed up. So he snapped into panic mode, threw out apologies nonstop, and begged them to wipe away whatever he just blurted out. He was thinking that anything he said could end up being harassment aimed at unmarried girls. But when he shook his head, Emilia burst into giggles. And then he couldn't help it because soon he was laughing like crazy for. And it was shocking because something this unexpected coming from him felt wild. Since he was so shy he wouldn't even look at how they looked. To him the whole idea didn't look bad at all actually, it sounded pretty solid because back when every chef was a man, if a beautiful woman served them, they'd be forced to take a bite on the spot. And they couldn't say no. With that last shred of fear, Curado realized everything he was saying sounded wildly disrespectful, but Emilia already knew those nobles and royalty wouldn't show up, so it couldn't hurt. Emilia looked at the whole testing session like a battlefield, knowing they had to level up and outshine every other restaurant trying to knock them out. He tried to line it up, but it still wasn't enough. No matter what he did, the restaurant crowds just wouldn't come back to the table. Curado leaned in with a secretive grin and told them they could slip right into his hometown's traditional attire with ease. Emilia stared in surprise. He never expected that kind of statement from someone with Eastern blood, and Curado couldn't shake the feeling it just might work. But when he thought back, a heavy sadness hit him. He couldn't teleport there no matter what. As Emilio fought to keep himself steady, he felt his body lock up, noticeable, unmistakable stiffness. After everything he'd been doing for his company, he finally said, "Let's see if this works," and went for it. And he practically breathed a sigh of relief that the man let it drop, because digging deeper would have meant him slipping right into the past, just like that. Before they even reached the final verdict, both guys rushed to get Elsa and the rest on board, because this mattered way too much, and Elsa, with no hesitation in that firm, steady tone, they agreed she'd do it. She was convinced it all happened for their masters, like feeding the machine, and that helping anyone else was just how a normal household was supposed to run. She made it crystal clear she'd been told from the very beginning to help the company. And then with her gaze dropping, she leaned in and told him, "It's Kerr." Kerdo was the one person he absolutely needed right then, and she would do anything for him. And he could trust them with zero doubt. Emilio witnessed every fiery word being exchanged, who suddenly hijacked the conversation, asked for confirmation from everyone behind the door, and made them stop listening long enough to answer. Their names were called, and they slipped in like nothing. Then their faces screamed in big, bold excitement that they were ready, buzzing hardest over Curido's hometown traditional clothes. Dorado started painting the real picture in his mind, but right before he could hand them the full truth, he stopped. He had more to offer than just that, and he knew it. For what they were about to craft with the testing material. He spun back to the testing spot where the merchants handed out raw vegetable tastes, and when he took that bite, the green onions sent them into pure delight, and tomatoes bursting with juicy flavor. One of the guys was so completely lost that he kept asking for seconds of everything, like he didn't even know what enough meant. Both merchant partners were convinced they'd made the right call, because once they left, that taste wasn't going to magically disappear. Emilia pressed Curado to spill his secret material, and you could tell he was freaking out the whole time. A voice snapped his name from right behind him, and when he spun around, Elsa stepped into view in a stunning outfit, gripping something in her hand, smiling as she told him she decooked up the test dish they'd serve later as their killer move. The air reeked with mouth-watering scent, and every single person in the testing area inhaled it like they couldn't resist. As she told them the meat was made from vegetables, they stared at her like she'd lost her mind. And it looked like every single vegetable in the whole place had somehow been tossed into that dish the moment they asked. She leaned in and told them it was from the Eastern country, a crazy stew that piled in everything, even pork. Every plate was cooked using vegetables shipped in by the Emilio company, but the chef stared like he'd never heard of anything so wild. He grabbed one of the bowls and started putting it to the test right away. And the second it hit his senses, his face snapped into sheer shock, because this was way more delicious than anything he'd ever tasted. The chef lit up as soon as he tasted that warm dish. Its texture was so delicate it practically melted, and the veggie's sweetness shimmered through every bite, leaving him totally convinced this was going to work. And because that dish tasted so insanely good, he was already pushing to hammer out a long-term deal. Curito in the background couldn't hold in his amusement. Then the second he said that, he shot to the front, grabbed the contract, and took over the conversation like he owned the room. News ripped through the crowd, and everyone froze, because what they thought they heard in that moment didn't even make sense. In the middle stood Mr. Chamonter, the boss of one of the five-star hotels, and as a top chef he refused to hand out any long-term contract. Three girls from the maid group suddenly crashed into their conversation, yanking everyone's attention away. Leaning in from behind, he told those guys the dish was spot on, and insisted they taste it too. Jurito was witnessing the whole scene with his own eyes, and he watched every chef's face light up as they got to taste Elsa, and somehow that thought made him laugh, because to him it meant they'd truly nailed it. With every restaurant ready to slap pen to paper on the Emilio contract, their victory blew past every single expectation. Elsa was convinced that every idea she threw out would somehow turn into an amazing outcome. As he reminded himself, this was just a cozy home dish, not some mind-blowing masterpiece a famous chef would pull out like it was nothing. He explained every ingredient and how he transformed it, using veggies he hauled in from the village to turn the dish into a straight-up village-style nikujaga instead of the traditional kind, which was the same, except they'd never once used a tomato. But Kurito loved the idea, so he made the call and added it to crank up the flavor. Elsa's words lit up Kurito's taste memories, and in a flash he was gone. It's a flashback. He's sitting there loving every bite of the nikujago while his mother is still alive, cooking it for him with her own hands. He softly thanked the lady for helping him pull those old flavors back from memory. But Elsa flipped the script. She handed every single achievement straight to Kurito, telling him that her happiness came from one thing: she could help. Right then, she flashed this gorgeous smile like it was effortless. Fake it was. Kurito stared across to the other end. He realized it wasn't just him. Everything he'd done so far only happened because the whole crew stepped in and helped. And there was even a pinch of that original world salt in everything he did, proof that his arrival here wasn't random at all. Kurito felt like his past wasn't just full of nasty memories. There were also a few good ones tucked in there too. And somehow he'd actually pushed through, got the payment, and cashed in on his favors. He snapped back to the present the second he finished telling the story. He laid it out for them. This is exactly how it all works. But Olga couldn't even grasp the true meaning of it. He basked in the spotlight and told everyone, the crops are already landing in fancy restaurants in the capital. Now they've decided to lock in a subscription. At first, the villagers couldn't even make out a single word. They were totally lost. But the second it hit them with that awful realization, they all erupted into screams. Then even shook Kurito, demanding proof that what he said was really true. Kurito flashed that bright grin again and promised them with total confidence that the stuff would sell like wildfire. It couldn't get a single word out, it just froze there stiff as a statue. In the next few seconds, his real feelings erupted, and he screamed with pure joy like he'd finally reached the dream he'd chased all along. And the person behind them wore the same look, quietly listening in as the conversation unfolded. They were over the moon. Someone finally saw the real value of their veggies, and those sky-high prices practically launched them into the stratosphere. Walkjuretta reveled in the pure joy, seeing their happiness blazing at its absolute peak. Olga couldn't wrap her head around a single thing, and warned them that the moment the restaurant charged that insane price for the material, it was a total ripoff. Then it finally became clear. It was the traveling merchants who had deliberately robbed them, pocketing the goods while refusing to pay the proper price. Andrew, right from behind, snapped at Olden to stop thinking like that and to look at the. On the hopeful side, they finally got the attention they'd been craving. Stella was convinced their product was absolutely top tier. But those travelers still had to haul their way across a massive distance, and that grind would just drag down the product's current value. Everyone finally got what this side of the picture was really saying. On top of that, Olga realized it was all because of Kurito. He somehow helped him finally see the true value of their crops. Cornered with no other option, he bowed low in front of them, and Kurito nearly died of embarrassment, so he begged him, "Come on, raise your head." He tried to insist there was no bad intent behind it, but deep down he just knew the product would sell, so he went for it anyway. Just as he tried to shove all the compliments back onto his own side, Nina burst in front and snapped the truth to the boy. None of it was real. To make him understand how much his work mattered, she grabbed his attention and told him to look at the other side. Then he'd see the villagers smiling and living happily right in that moment. Everyone was cracking up and giggling, already knowing their crops were about to rake in a crazy high price. And yeah, this looked like it was about to rake in real profit. Because right now, the older ladies' givers and the guys on the scene were way more charming than the younger crowd or the elders. Kurito finally got it. Then a grin snapped onto his face as if his actions had just hit him in the best way. Then the village mayor rushed to the front and voiced his heartfelt gratitude for what the boy had done and thanked him for his incredible work. Believing it all happened because of him, he watched the village flare back to life again. And the villagers couldn't hide their awe that someone so young could pull off something that big. Kurito couldn't stop blushing from all that gratitude, but deep down, he knew every bit of it was exactly what he'd earned. He figured he might not make it to the end of his life in that place, so he pushed himself to give everything he could. Those words hit the Andrew family like a thunderclap, because they never even knew he was planning to leave in the first place. They begged him to take even more from them, like he hadn't already given everything he had. So right then, all he had to do was remember he belonged to the village, and soak in every single second like it was meant for him. Stella stepped right up in front of him and blurted out that he'd already pushed things forward big time with Nina, while she was finally kicking back and enjoying village life after all that time away. The mayor grabbed the moment and tried to tell him it all happened in times nothing was random. And he didn't have to sprint through life anymore. He could breathe, live free, and smile for real, because even now the boy's eyes shimmered with tears like his past life was still haunting him. He had things he couldn't put into words, and even when night fell, sleep wouldn't come. After his father died, all he had left was a crushing loneliness that swallowed every moment. He frantically brushed the tears away, smiling, because he had those awesome memories still burning in his mind. Those people stood right in front of them, grinning like they'd been waiting, ready to make connections and spark something new. The curator grinned with pure joy, knowing he finally got to repay that favor for real. And when Older saw the kid spiraling with too many emotions, he stepped in fast, told him to shake it off and begged him don't cry. But the boy just wanted to make it crystal clear. This village was the best place he'd ever lived. Andrew decided to make that night count for the amazing day he just had. So everyone pitched in, each person bringing something special to make it a rare vintage treat. Soon at Curito's place, everyone raised their mugs of beer and cheers burst in the air. Then the mayor stepped up and demanded everyone celebrate the win, and the whole town lit up with pure joy. The whole room erupted in cheers, roaring like a stadium as the big links came alive. When nobody could leave the spot with a single ounce of excitement, missing after they celebrated their win right there and then. Olga chugged her drink while the villagers chatted behind her, and the other women laughed as they cooked up a feast for everyone, smiling the whole time. After a few more hours of cheering finally wrapped up, Curado grinned at the last swipe on the table the women helped clean, and his place was spotless again. Curito snapped into focus. He remembered how even that old man couldn't hold himself back the moment his wife called. The only one totally checked out was Andrew. He just fell asleep right there, so Curado had no choice but to yank him back with his teleportation. This was one of those rare, golden moments when he finally got to savor the kind of gathering he'd only ever dreamed of, right there at his own home. After a quick look, he decided to ditch the indoors and grab some fresh air. The man stepped out and felt pure joy, gazing up at a sky packed with glittering stars. And once he made that choice, pure joy hit him. Living in two different places at the same time felt like the perfect move. He figured teaming up with Emilio wasn't so bad, because getting the job done gave him real satisfaction, and right then, he felt more fulfilled than anything he'd ever dreamed of. Now he couldn't stop thinking, was it really that hard to juggle a personal life and work without burning out? He finally snapped and realized he'd been so buried in fears about the future that he straight up forgot to live in the present. That's the real reason he refused to stir up any changes in his work or his happiness, and kept his life split between two completely different places with two wildly different atmospheres. A dazzling grin stretched across his face as he sat tucked away in the corner of his home. He tilted his head to the pitch-dark sky, where the stars flickered like tiny lights daring the night. The boy was riding the best days of his life, and he fully believed he could keep this amazing moment going for as long as possible. On another day, he headed to the stream, and the crystal-clear water showed every fish swimming beneath the surface. And Coretta couldn't contain her excitement as she saw just how many of them showed up. Andrew tagged along this time, and the boy couldn't stop staring, totally blown away by the stream and its. In that crystal-cool water, yeah, and get this, they'd used the Curado's teleportation magic tore him straight to that place. And once things started heating up, they threw their plans into motion. Grab the fish now, then camp later at their secret spot. Even though they were finally supposed to relax, the family man couldn't shake the fear of getting chewed out by his wife the moment she found out, and the rest of the day still slammed them with plenty of work. That's why they ditched the usual routine and decided to chow down breakfast in the morning in a whole new way. And these guys were all geared up with everything they needed to go all in on the fun. Gerito yanked out every magical item and tool they had, ready to cook up their food with pure, unstoppable magic. Andrew whipped up the veggies that morning, and they hauled sausages and eggs with them so they could kick back and truly enjoy their time. He'd swiped a little of the old lady's bread and butter for the next batch, same stuff they'd shared with him the day before. So they split the plan, baked the bread separately so the oil wouldn't cling, and that's why. They set two fires at two pans and dug in together, one pan steaming the eggs, the other toasting the bread side by side. The cooking was going full steam, and before anything else, they started plotting out the drinks they'd make first. They hauled the fish out of the trap they'd set the day before. After some time, everyone had their parts ready with every requirement accounted for. Then the dish hit the table, wine followed, and one more thing came with it. Right by the stream, both of them started loving it, settling in like it was a perfect little picnic. Every bite of that breakfast hit like a spark, stacking excitement deeper with each moment. As Andrew tried to explain, the humidity was vanishing the moment you went deep into the mountains. While Curado soaked up the view, the fish kept thrashing and wobbling all around. Suddenly, he got hit with a surge of motivation and couldn't stop pushing forward. So Andrew grabbed the table and tried to get him up, insisting he needed to do it. because if anything was wrong, Andrew could actually fix it and help for real. Kurito then straightened everything out and made it crystal clear. Everything was running perfectly. But the real reason he was so lazy, he didn't want to try because staying put felt way more comfortable. Andrew, fresh from the village, found himself slammed with even more to do than ever before. But really, that thing didn't hurt him that much. He'd gladly shoulder the weight, because if it meant giving his family the kind of life they truly deserved, he'd do it without a second thought. That was the whole reason Andrew chose to juggle his business with a little thrill, and plenty of time to breathe and relax. And that turned out to be a seriously impressive line for a guy a whole year younger. Then they turned around and hit the trail again, walking onward like they'd never stopped. Hirado snapped his teleportation magic again and appeared right in front of Andrew's home, landing there with perfect precision. As he thanked Kurado for the ride, Kurado shot back a thank you too, returning the favor and thanking him right back for that breakfast. From that moment on, Andrew refused to slack off. He threw on his steps and headed out for a walk right away. As the boy made his way to the capital, he wasn't just traveling, he was hunting for a chance to earn his own living. And with the day looming ahead, they both sent each other a sharp nod and wished each other good luck. Hirito yanked himself out of there with teleportation again. And this time, after his return from the previous life, he was already fully swallowed by that dual life. He stayed in the capital yet reached deep into the countryside. And it was all because his spatial magic stitched together two places that were never supposed to touch. His profits surged so hard for the village and the trading company that it turned into a total win-win for both sides. Things were cruising along so smoothly it felt like nothing could go wrong. Kurado teleported straight to the Emilio Trading Company, charging for the chairman's office. Then, the second he greeted him, the man wore a terrible mood-like armor, and an awkward silence dragged on long enough to make the air feel heavy. Even with the man calling his name again and again, he completely ignored him. The second he did it, his face lit up, and he greeted him right back with a bright smile. Harada didn't blink or move, then Emilio asked what was wrong with him. Kurado finally realized the guy wasn't just showing up. He was busting his ass, because the churn was thrilled that the employee kept a close eye on him. He grabbed the courage and asked him for a favor. But Kurito only caved if the content wasn't truly dangerous. Emilio hated every second of that caution, but Kurado refused for his own reason. Every time that earlier painful stretch started, that guy pushed him into insanely dangerous missions. And it all came down to the fact that Kurado had simply gone along with whatever orders his masters handed him. Emilio was still scrambling to improve his own position, insisting to him that it was his doing. Because of him, the boy was raking in big profits. But forget the joke. He told the man his demand wasn't insane, which only meant one thing. He knew exactly how wild all of the man's earlier requests had been. When she finally asked what he truly wanted, he just pulled up a request to visit the village where Kurado used to live. Asking why all of that happened, he pushed for answers. Then Milio finally clarified that the village's goods were flying off the shelves, the stock was wiped out already, and that meant teaming up with them could be huge for the trading company's next big move. That's why he pushed to meet the farmers in person, so no one got the wrong idea, and sit down with them to map out what comes next. Harada snapped back to that moment in this. There was no way to talk back and forth, no network, no internet, so the only plan was simple: meet face to face again and again in regular get-togethers. Because connection was everything in that world, his teleportation magic could slice through the biggest wall of distance. He believed the villagers deserved the truth about who was really selling those products, so Kurito shot forward and apologized, refusing to bring it up himself because it was his job to do it. Emilio didn't see that coming at all. Then a wide smile broke out, and he simply called the boy reliable. Chalking it up to pure merchant instinct, he made it crystal clear. Everything he was doing was for himself because he wanted to squeeze out even more profit. Kurito got it then right away, nodded and agreed to drive him straight to the village. While the merchant kept heading onward, a fresh plan suddenly snapped into his mind. Bring back a pack of trading company goods. Then Kurito shut that idea down instantly. They told him they weren't turning this into a business trip, and he instantly got it like, of course they needed a proper meet and greet. And Emilio's got a damn good point. But he'd been thinking hard about every detail, wondering if bringing that guy around to everyone was really the right move, like, maybe even a great one. That feeling clung to Kurato's head, like something he couldn't scrub off no matter how hard he tried. After weighing it all, he told the guy to save that business for the next time, because Gerardo kept stepping in to help, and grabbed the materials anytime he pleased. He told the merchant, if we're going face to face, we've got to earn trust first. Because with these villagers being so soft, once they're convinced, they'll grab anything you offer, no need to rush. Amelia snapped to the same truth, and then like that, he grabbed his coat and started getting ready to stop by, exactly as they planned. But before all that, he had one mission, go shopping, and he immediately asked Pareto to tag along. By the time they finally rolled into the capital, the market was already buzzing, and they were picking out all kinds of gifts. Corretto kept the cores locked away in his spatial storage the whole time, so they wouldn't have to lug anything around. Right before everything felt like it came out of nowhere, Emilio shoved a soft ice cream cone into his hands so he could eat it because it was a little reward for sticking with him the whole time he bought it. They both plopped down by the fountain and vowed not to waste a single second on their trip. But I swear it felt like it had to be worth it. Because even right then, Emilio was squeezing every last second of that money, and it honestly shocked Curado, who simply couldn't wrap his head around how a merchant's mind really works. Right now, Curado's way of thinking made it feel like the boy was finally back on his feet. He'd never once seen him clock out, take a breath, or even let the thought of rest cross his mind. Seeing what he found back at the office, he knew one thing for sure. The boy was running on pure exhaustion. And as he stood right beside him, he could only pray the man would come to love nature back in the village. Right after they finished eating, Gerardo yanked the teleport trigger, blasting himself and his merchant partner straight to the village. And that's when they finally reached. They were just outside the main gate when a voice shouted his name from right behind him. Curado locked eyes and recognized Emilio. Then Curado stepped up and introduced him as the guy who used to sell their crops in the capital. And when that man finally heard it, Emilio kicked things off with a crisp, formal announcement. He was the new chairman of the trading company. The village guy was completely blown away. Someone this prestigious actually showed up at their doorstep. And the only explanation was this. He tapped Curito's magic and somehow teleported straight to the spot without a single hitch. He even planned to head to the royal capital for a proper look around, only for the conversation to steamroll forward before he could make a move. He snapped to it the kid was famous all over the village. And somehow, every single person treated him like they'd known him forever. Amelia noticed something chilling. The guard didn't even wear a hint of bad feelings when he rolled into the village. Right then, everyone who laid eyes on him refused to call it rejection. So to him, this village felt completely unlike anywhere else. He remembered hearing how, in other villages, people had shut him down with a rough welcome just because of what he'd been doing. And even Curito had already heard the same rumor a dozen times. People said real rural life didn't exist in this world, because he'd seen proof for himself during the days he traveled with Emilio. That's the only reason Curito's heart was jammed right there, because he refused to go anywhere else. First things first, he sprang up like he'd been waiting to wake, putting everything else on hold. Step right into the guide's tour of this incredible village. For a few seconds, Humilio totally lost track of everything, just soaking in the wild, breathing the world around him. Brimming with energy and drive, those cheers kept pushing him forward, like every breeze was nature itself tapping his shoulder. He finally felt safe enough to drop his guard, and the way the village overflowed with fresh ingredients and untouched nature made it painfully clear. They were truly welcoming him with open arms. And he praised it to the skies, fully getting why Corretto wanted to live there. He was grinning like he'd finally won. Turns out even his merchant eyes gave it the thumbs up. And the moment daylight finally showed up, they agreed to meet the farmers right then and there. Curio first marched him straight to Andrew's place, where the leeks were being grown. As he cut through the crowd of villagers on his way by, everything felt charged. Emilio was straight up, giving off a Hollywood vibe as he greeted them, then instantly turned heads and pulled every girl's attention his way. Since it was the very first time they'd ever been called out like that, both of them, and even Kerdo, begged him not to pull that move at Andrew's place, because some of those parents were so fiercely devoted to their daughters that if anything like that went down, they wouldn't risk selling even a single bundle of green onions. Nana might not get too hyped, because as he walked up and told him Emilia looked just like some city guy, the moment barely sparked. Emilio's ears shot upright. When he said the name a certain way, he could tell the person mattered, so he clenched his hope and went straight to their home. And then boom, he met Nina for the very first time. He was completely stunned, and that gut punch revelation hit him like a wrecking ball. While Curito wasn't exactly chasing girls his age, or even older, he just blurted out that he'd gotten hit with a massive, humiliating misunderstanding. Then he told Nana to ring her parents, and Nana bolted straight for the call. And Emilia was still eyeing Curito like he was hiding something, her stare raising a storm of questions about what he truly loved. When Andrew and Stella rounded the corner, their jaws dropped. Someone had come from the royal capital, and it was the merchant himself, personally paying a visit. Emilio stepped forward, introduced himself like it was a mission, and straight up told them why he'd reached out and what his visit was really for. Andrew already knew the company, because it was exploding in size at a crazy speed. When Andrew said those words, the merchant dropped into a gentle bow to honor him. And Andrew, proud and smiling, returned the respect, thrilled to sell his goods to a company as esteemed as this. And he stared in disbelief at that kid, somehow already racking up a ton of wins for someone so young. His own two family members stepped forward, bowed formally, welcomed him to their village with open arms, and showered him with praise for his personality. Amelia got hit in the chest by the way those guys treated him. Nobody saw that kindness coming, and it made her feel it. They never bothered to introduce themselves, so both of them stepped up and fired off their introductions. While they were the ones who delivered the green onions, Amelia already knew from Curito that there was a farm where they grew tons of those onions, and she could tell Curito was itching to go see the place where it all happened. Andrew, without even pausing, practically beamed as he excitedly told them how he pulled off the impossible feat. Then he shot back the idea, go visit the other farmers too, the ones who bring us produce. Amelia had been hunting chances like that from the very start. As soon as Curado got that confirmation, it clicked. This merchant wasn't just clever, he'd already sized up the situation and adapted on the spot. Even though Curado stumbled over words, he swore that's exactly what he'd learn next from his merchant friend. As they pushed ahead, the whole village opened up before them in stunning detail, and it blew their minds. Like their eyes were still stuck on those Capitol buildings but got hit with something far bigger. First, they ran into Olga, the tomato guy, and everything instantly got way more interesting. And the other farmers kept right on indulging in their work, until they finally reached back to Corrido's place. Emilio snatched a wine glass, downed every last drop in one shot, then practically raved about how mind-blowingly good it tasted. And since a bunch of other villagers were there too, they watched him chug like a machine, and their jaws basically dropped at how unreal his drinking skills were. Emilio had chased his luck across the whole world, making deals over drinks like it was the easiest thing in the world. And the best part, Andrew finally found the right partner at just the right time, and it hit like pure joy. Kurita suddenly realized, wait, these people feel way too familiar. But he couldn't for the life of him figure out why they were chugging drinks in broad daylight. When Stella spotted Andrew like that, worry hit hard, because once he made it home, trouble might be waiting. While they were busy enjoying themselves, Olga suddenly steered the whole vibe toward his tomatoes, then served up a feast made entirely from them. And nobody saw it coming. Alva decided to yank that move in front of every single villager, making sure they understood how to present their vegetables. Because if they wanted to sell them, they'd better do it right. And that's how the rest of the villagers jumped in too, hauling their own produce to the merchant, so he'd be satisfied with what they brought. As everyone started to get fired up, Gerardo refused to sit on the sidelines and jumped right into the chaos. As Emilio spotted the grilled tomatoes, amusement lit up his face. So tough to grill like they'd fight back. But Olga saw it differently. She swore it was super easy, then urged them to pair it with cheese to crank up the flavor, and right as Curito and Milio took the first bite and the second it was in front of him, he snapped into compliments, calling it delicious, rich in flavor, and bursting with taste. Olga, meanwhile, was firing off fresh ideas on how to cook it the right way, something so perfected, taste amazing and still keep them healthy. Curado got so hooked he was ready to wolf it down every single day, and then he slammed in an order for a full box. Emilio couldn't believe how much the boy knew about tomatoes. That was exactly the kind of partner he'd been hoping to find. Ova swallowed the compliment and instantly turned beet red, then tried to play it off like he hadn't just completely eaten it up. Right then, Herdo suddenly snapped. His mind sparked a question and he grilled the one in front of him. They decided what name to use for trading the other crops at the market, and honestly, that choice felt seriously worrying. Emilio's ears shot up, because nobody saw that question blasting out of his mouth coming. But Emilio slipped past the table, shot to his feet and tried to tell him the truth. This was why he came in the first place, to talk it out. He felt it would be downright heartbreaking to sell the village's crops, nameless, stripped of pride, when they deserved to be remembered. And honestly, Curito saw it as a rock-solid reason. Both the brand and the bill were absolutely necessary. So yeah, they could have named it for sure, because it was right there in the source, but Olga couldn't even get that far in her head. And after he decided to think it through, he went hunting for the perfect reason behind it. Emilia couldn't wait to hear what was pounding inside his head. Like he'd already read the guy's mind and knew he'd considered it. Olga couldn't make sense of it, and he just froze in shock because sure, he could have caught a name, but the other guy, fresh off that drunken stupor, wasn't about to pull out anything useful. Olga was still trying to wrap her head around how anyone could just name something on the spot with zero thinking. So Emilia stepped in and decided to show him an example worth it. Everything got labeled like it always does, named straight from the country it comes from, and that never changes. He fired off advice, each one tied to the village's name. And on the second time, he named it after Olga, something he absolutely hated, so he snapped, screaming straight into denial, admitting it was downright humiliating to have his own name tied straight to that tomato. Everyone else was already gushing over how adorable it was, when Emilio's mind started racing with an idea. He figured the village name would get totally muddled later on, Once the other crops got shipped to the royal capital, and only their tomato supply remained, that name would be slapped onto everything as a general label. So branding it as some personal tomato mark felt like a complete waste. Oba ditched the old name, urged him to give her a little time, and the more he pushed. As his own tomato's name kept hammering his mind, he threw in the towel for the moment. After days of non-stop arguing and outright denial, they finally slapped a name on the products. Everything was branded after the village, except the tomatoes, which got their own special title. Once everything was finally done, Curado threw himself into cleaning the room, fully indulging in it. He couldn't stop smirking as he remembered Olga's reaction, because those tomatoes were definitely going down under his name. While his own talks hung in the air, he spun around and spotted Emilio up on the balcony, finally letting himself relax a little. And when he shouted his name, he offered him tea, and the guy snatched it up with a grin, eager as ever. He brewed the tea, marched over to the guy, thanked him for all the hard work, and then asked. If D'Amelio wasn't wiped out for the day, the merchant was loving every second. He'd been enjoying this village because there was nothing to flex here like in the capital. And you could live there on your own terms, right at your own pace. Curito beamed with joy and slapped his back, telling him he finally got the real heart of it all. Then he pushed an offer, stay right there too, but Emilio shot it down without wasting a second. So Curado didn't even bother giving him the same suggestion twice. As he dug into his memories, he suddenly flashed back to that day in the street. Someone snatched something off the ground and hurled it straight at him, but Rodney Sam saved him in a heartbeat by dodging the throw. As they spun around, an old man came into view mid-breath, completely stealing the moment. They were furious at the trading company that swooped in and stole their business right out from under them. He shifted from selling contracted veggies to whatever the village had growing right now for the restaurants, and his coworker immediately clocked it as nothing but a petty grudge. And right then, a brutally darker memory kept crashing into him, like he was desperately trying to scrub it out of his mind. Even with his mind running wild, he had to tell Corrido the brutal truth, what fame really cost to rise up in the capital. And then he stared at Corrido with eyes so gloomy they felt like a storm rolling in. He only asked if anything was wrong. Then he smiled and realized with real warmth that people in the village were so calm and actually cared about him. That's why he refused to let the guy ever learn what it really takes to earn fame. He spun around and told him he was over the moon after returning to the village, building real connections with the farmers. Even so, he refused to stop. He was determined to turn his trading company into one of the best, and that hunger to prove himself kept driving him forward. Those glittering eyes screamed one thing. He wasn't about to sit quietly in the capital. Retirement was so far off it might as well not exist. The curator grinned, stunned that after all this brutal journey, his hunger was still fully intact. As he snapped back to the man's real identity, he realized exactly what kind of grinder the capital employed. No matter how brutal things got in the capital, he stayed ready to drop everything and roll back to the village the moment it felt too intense. Hireta froze at the declaration, but before the shock could settle, he stepped in with open arms, telling him to come anytime because he'd be the one guiding him straight through his teleportation. But it was about to cost them big, and Amelia was absolutely not in the mood to take it easy. And he was even ready to play along with him so he wouldn't have to pay for the travel. Curato acted like he owned the whole game, and if he wasn't getting paid, he wasn't lifting a finger. He cracked his stiff body, finally loosened up, and then it was go time straight back to the capital. And he decided to bail on staying the night, because even if he really wanted to, he was desperate to tap into Curio's magic and get right back there. A mountain of work was waiting for him, so he slipped out fast, no questions, no delays. Curado grabbed his hand and got him back to where he belonged. As the next day rolled in, he was out at his own farm, hands working like there was no stopping him. Tiny weeds were choking the ground, and right then his magic wouldn't work on them, so he clenched his jaw and ripped them out by hand. After Nana watched his faith in working die out, she showed up bright and early and greeted him for the morning. Curado shot back that yes, he was pulling weeds from the field, and then he started thinking about exactly how much. It didn't feel like much of a problem at all, those weeds were tiny. Somehow Nana snagged the message perfectly, then flexed her muscles and basically hinted she'd be the one tackling the job too. Curato had zero clue a little girl would drop a bombshell like that. But she told him straight up not to underestimate her. Then she dove straight into the task and she was absolutely outpacing Curado, hitting a much higher speed and looking unstoppable. He couldn't stop praising her speed and the technique behind every move. But he couldn't dump everything on a little girl, so he dug deeper and pushed himself harder. After hours of non-stop work, they finally tore every last weed out of the garden and hit the finish line. And they pulled it off early. Curado came out drenched in sweat, wrecked from the non-stop work. But Nina still radiated pure strength and wild excitement, and it absolutely stunned him with how real her power was. He couldn't figure out how to repay the lady who'd helped him without making it a hassle, so he just bowed, thanked her, and slipped into the get that beautiful smile back on the little girl's face. She smiled like sunflowers were bursting behind her, and Kurita couldn't help but stare. This sweet kid's grin was unreal. Then he grabbed a glass of water and gave it to her, hoping it would calm her down after all that hard work. Right before going in, the lady snatched her basket, because she already had it with her. And she went out of her way to help him, even though she had to gather firewood herself. Wanting to show her he cared, the boy stepped in and took over handling the firewood aye. But Gerardo didn't need firewood to cook, yet he still chased the campfire vibe, because he wanted to find his own fun out there too. Inside, Curado handed her a chilled glass of water. Nina was over the moon to have her strength back, stunned that the boy had ice at his place, and she kept staring at the glass, forever trying to tell him just how. That moment hit like a burst of pure freshness, so good it stunned them. Then both of them threw their heads back and cheered, clinking their glasses right after. The lady chose to start chopping and gathering firewood right away, because if Tella found out she'd been idle, she'd worry sick, and she couldn't afford to fall short. Even then, that lady refused to slack off. And just as Gerardo called out to her, he pressed a cold towel right by her cheeks, telling her it felt so refreshing, and begging her to keep it around so they could make everything a bit cooler. And to make it worse, he even told her to shove some herbs straight into her mouth. And just like that, both of them stepped into the forest using Pareto's teleportation magic, hunting down firewood. They got there and surprise, nothing was on the floor at all, because this spot sat so close to the village that people would have snatched everything up the moment word spread. Because the entrance felt like the safest spot, they decided to head there just a little bit at a time. Slipped through his teleportation magic, every time he hit the spell they were already circling that same area where he'd been visited earlier. Then he pushed her to grab on because the whole ground was littered with logs. And just like that, they could snag them without breaking a sweat. His last trip to the stream suddenly felt like pure genius. And right there, as he stared at the little girl, a grin tugged at him. Her bravery and curiosity were pure fire, because the idea of teleporting never even crossed her mind. Curado stepped in with his spatial magic, sweeping her through the mess while pocketing every single log she was gathering at that exact moment. And everything got yanked in and hurled inside. Nina tossed in her bucket too, and it vanished like it was never there, leaving zero trace behind. She finally exhaled, her material was safe and no trouble was coming. Before she even stepped outside, she got curious and started hunting mushrooms, planning to take them home and eat them. Kurita stood there completely dumbfounded. He never in a million years expected the people from that world to know about mushrooms, or notice him being a little greedy. He begged her to share it because after all this time, he'd been starving to finally get it too. Nina spotted more trees in another corner of the forest and bolted to grab them, and he had to stop and calm her down, telling her not to wander off alone and get lost. After what felt like forever, they finally wrapped up every last bit of the collection: firewood, mushrooms, and the other essentials. Since everything was already packed and both of them heaped praise on their grueling hard work, then they decide. They hit the brakes on the chaos and decided to head back home, ready to finally unwind after weeks of non-stop struggle. And when they finally hauled themselves back to Corrido's place, their shoes were already lined up neatly outside. And she got hit again with an ice-cold glass of something right in her hands. She couldn't believe she was sipping tea too, an iced tea of all things. Found in the royal capital and said to be a real gift for your health. She leaned in and went, whoa, the tea's aroma hit her like nothing they'd ever casually sipped before. And then he took a quick, daring sip from 9. She realized it wasn't sweet at all, while Curado sat there, expecting one more mind-blowing comment. Still shocked, she rushed to prove she could live up to his expectations. But Curado totally got it, then decided to win her heart by slipping her something sweet she could truly enjoy. Then he popped the box open and slid a batch of sweet cookies into her hands, perfect with tea. 9 snatched up one of them, then leaned in for another bold sip of the tea. And the second she saw it, her real face lit up like she'd just won the universe. Pure, extraordinary delight. She told him the flavor was way better that way, and when a grown-up says it, you just know it's legit. Without warning, her thrilled smile vanished, her face went bone-white for a moment and then she told him like, the royal capital is packed with stuff I've never even seen before. With a dull look on her face, Hireta suddenly got it. He'd somehow dragged her spirits down because he knew she'd always had that heavy longing to see the royal capital. But he didn't dare throw out a bunch of big capital facts in front of her because she'd never even been there. And he knew her reaction was brutally honest with zero acting, and somehow it still came out adorable every time. Giving you my thoughts for a sec longer, Corrido, right out of nowhere. He told her he'd be heading to the royal capital tomorrow and begged her to come with him this time. An awkward silence stretched on and on, like the whole world forgot how to breathe. And right out of nowhere, Curado finally got what he'd really meant. like the words hit him through pure, overwhelming emotion. But honestly, that answer wasn't even surprising. She'd been grinning for ages, and now she finally had what she wanted. She was about to get the chance to pay when someone visited, until he realized he'd said it purely because of that earlier promise, and Nina erupted in excitement, convinced her dream was finally coming true. Once it finally clicked, he snapped into action and demanded she get her father and mother's permission right away, no exceptions, period. Yet her excitement didn't even blink. She grabbed the firewood and sprinted off right away to get permission. Kurita realized right then just how fearless that woman truly was, because that kind of strength takes real courage. But right then, he even found himself thinking about Andrew's face when he learned her daughter was heading to the royal capital with a total stranger. Right now, the boy clenched his resolve and decided defeat would come for him, then he'd take it like a king. But destiny had a wild curveball. Stella and the kid showed up at his home and told him Nina could head straight to the capital. Corretto was hit so hard by the shock that his mind just couldn't process what he was seeing. And at one point he even demanded clarification, because his real issue wasn't with Stella at all, it was with Andrew. Stella leaned in and told him, "Don't worry, this won't be a problem," because she wanted Nanette to see all kinds of places around the world. She trusted that boy with her whole heart, and she prayed he'd grow up with childhood memories he'd cherish forever. So there was no way she was going to let this incredible chance slip by. Still, she figured trouble would crush him right now, until Kurito shut that down fast, saying her trust humbled him more than anything. Then she handed him Nana's care and snapped that Nana must follow the right guidance and do exactly what she was told. The curator finally clocked it. Stella always chose what was best for Nina's heart, and he couldn't help but grin knowing Nina had a mom like her. After he got the confirmation in his hands, he decided this trip would become unforgettable, and he promised the mother that her daughter would be watched and taken care of the whole way. Stella beamed with happiness, but Corito was dealing with a whole different kind of trouble. His stomach twisted at the thought of Andrew's reaction when he finally found out that he'd stolen his precious daughter. Stella leaned in and promised she'd handle everything, no matter what. Even the giant man gulped in fear of her, so Curator turned and headed off at once, because she was a girl. Nana wasn't ready at all. Her hands were in rough shape, so she spun back to that spot, determined to get herself back to her best. She rushed her response, begged for permission, and apologized. But Curado was the real problem for not giving that woman time to get ready. Curado sniffed himself, and the moment the stench hit, he realized something was seriously off. He had to change too. After snagging some really good clothes and stepping out looking sharp, he suddenly realized, yeah, this wasn't enough. And just like that, the little girl finally slipped back in two, then Coretta raced to go check on her. She was dressed to perfection, calm and stunning, her beautiful hair falling soft as she wore a tiny purse around her neck, looking like a real little goddess. Curado couldn't tear his eyes away from her for even a second. That event left a sharp little sting of insecurity in her, like maybe she was the only one who felt weird. Then he just went and praised her to her face, saying she'd really inherited those genes straight from her mother. Nina couldn't believe the way she said it. There was clearly too much resemblance, and the moment it came out, it only made the boy look even more mortified. But he quickly explained, he wasn't mad at all, just completely blown away by how beautiful it was. But honestly, it wasn't even going to feel weird to ride around in the capital like that. Then he praised her like she was one of the prettiest girls, but she wasn't buying it yet. There was a stubborn little denial in her eyes. But her smile was so much cuter it stole the whole scene. Hirito finally understood what real transformation looks like, how a girl changes the moment she gets dressed up. The boy even told her, wear those clothes every day and your popularity will hit a sky-high peak. And she couldn't really do that, because those clothes made it almost impossible to move around on the farms. She decided to save those outfits for big moments, harvest festivals and other special occasions. As soon as the thought hit him, he had to admit she was right. And the whole worry landed on Andrew, because he would absolutely hate anyone eyeing his pretty daughter like that. Stella showed up to send them off and practically buzzed with excitement, saying the kid couldn't wait for the day. The moment Nana realized her caretaker was there, she bolted over to check her present look right away. Then got handed strict instructions on exactly how a lady was expected to act in the capital. Hirito finally got it. Everything that little kid owned came straight from her mother, and Estella was done waiting. She pushed them to leave as early as they could and snapped, "Stop wasting time talking here." Nine finally saw what was really going on, so she grabbed Kerdo and bolted, though he was barefoot and never even had his shoes on. Right before they stepped out, Stella dipped into a soft, respectful bow in front of him, begging him to protect and care for her daughter. Then he finally got the green light. Both of them walked out just like that. They waved goodbye as Nina promised she'd bring back some souvenirs. And out of nowhere, both of them vanished from that place the instant it happened. No footprints, no signs, nothing. Back in the royal capital, they barreled into the market and stopped right by the tallest building in the whole crowd, where Curato finally told her they'd made it right here. The second the little girl spotted it, her eyes lit up like the royal capital itself was shining right back at her. She couldn't stop grinning at the crowd and soaking in the wild, electric energy of the whole place. Nothing like what she'd ever seen in the village, and before she could even finish processing it, she was left unable to. She couldn't look away for even a few heart-stopping minutes, then her words just vanished. Curato couldn't even catch a single word, and it threw him off balance fast. He couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong, so he forced the nerves off her face and started to step closer, like he was afraid to miss his moment. Right when everything felt calm, the lady's face lit up. Then she screamed in pure disbelief the moment she saw the capital. With nothing left to fear right then, his worries vanished into thin air. He shoved the thought out of his head, and the moment he did, a little girl, glowing with pure excitement, started pointing at every building and stylish shop around them. The type of people she was chasing in her life. Glittering lights shimmered around her as pure joy lit up everything she could see. And when he chose to read her face a little deeper, he did it without hesitation. He realized she wasn't just brave, she was fearless, and her curiosity was bursting out of her like fire. He was certain this moment felt like fresh air to her, and with every new thing she saw, she'd be soaring like she'd hit the clouds. The girl sprang to life, pacing and searching like every question in her head had to be answered, right now. And yeah, a spark of jealousy crawled up in him, but he still had to keep looking after her. When the man slipped into a flashback, he remembered his very first visit. Those same white eyes staring back, and the whole place felt electric, brand new. He couldn't sit still, pure excitement crackled through him. He couldn't stop himself from wondering if she felt it too, and yeah, it looked exactly like she did. Nina stared up in pure disbelief at the towering buildings all around her. And when she pressed for answers, she finally found out it was the clock tower. It always ticked on the exact time, because the place was packed with workers using magic to keep everything perfectly synced. Nina beamed that people at the capital actually knew how to tell time, but the curator read it like he was stuck in a non-stop blur the whole way. He pitched the idea of climbing up and checking it from the top, and even if it sounded sweet, she still wasn't sure. A sudden butterfly fluttered into view, and her focus snapped to it instantly as it danced around. Curito snapped that it wasn't some natural thing at all, it was a magician's spell. He stood in the middle of the street, baring his soul to the world, and every kid just lit up and basked in it. The man was a total master at his craft, and then out of nowhere, everything changed. He yanked off his cap, and out of nowhere, he stuffed it with a ton of flowers, then somehow flipped the whole thing into a steaming pot of flour. This wasn't the end. Before the moment could even fade, he snapped into action and summoned a relentless rain that tore through every flower petal. Nina was totally swept up in the visuals in front of her, lost in every single moment her eyes caught. As it became her most beautiful memory, one she'd never forget. One of the flowers dropped straight into her hand, and she couldn't help but gasp. It was gorgeous. And the moment she stepped into the capital, joy seemed to hang in the air, because she couldn't stop marveling at how incredible it was. Curito realized he was a bit off. Like, if he'd been paying attention, he would have understood just how deep that happiness went. He'd only bring her if he brought her himself, and maybe he should have done it earlier. Right then, he chose to show off his teleportation power right in front of her. Nina snapped to the realization that she hadn't praised his magic enough for the day, so she rushed in with all the perfect words to light up his face. As Gerardo finally clocked it, that from the very beginning they'd only been hanging around the capital's square, and pushed harder for her to go even farther. Nine was craving something amazing to kick off his day with real, satisfying food. And then she realized food was the one thing she finally understood, way more than anything else. Curito started mapping out his options for the capital, because the whole place was massive. Food was the one thing everyone knew inside and out. He decided to sweep her straight to the market in the central district. And then through teleportation, they pop right back in again. Nina was absolutely buzzing. She couldn't wrap her head around how many buildings there were, because they seemed to crowd in on every side. Curita clocked something was off in the capital, and he knew the streets would be packed with more trouble than usual. Azjaretta knew Nina could get crushed by everything and lose her way, so he made it his mission to keep her safe at every moment. Right then, she noticed two beastmen leaning in, whispering and chatting like secrets were passing between them. And Corrado just froze. She knew about them without ever stepping foot in the capital, like she'd already read every detail in books. But the pure joy lighting up her face proved it. This was the very first time she'd ever seen them for real. That little girl was completely blown away by how insanely fluffy those beastmen were. Even among the beast folk and lizard men, nobody was exactly the same. Kusha looked like a friendly humanoid, while others leaned hard into dog or lizard-like features. Their looks didn't just happen. They were carved by genetics and how strong their parents' bloodline was, shaping everything from their power to what their bodies could do. so the ones with the fiercest beast traits usually headed straight into adventuring. It was a tiny village, barely a few months old, so beastmen sightings were practically unheard of, and Nana was itching to spot every last one as they marched through. Harada was certain they'd track down even more of them, and right as their discussion hit the middle of its roar, the beastman by his side spotted it instantly and he shouted Kurito, because he knew this transporter all too well. Kurita's eyes snapped to them, Guro and yawned unmistakably. But Nana just couldn't wrap her head around why they kept calling him a transporter. The beastmen stared at him hauling a kid around, puzzled out of their minds. So when they saw he'd come to visit a friend, they couldn't resist teasing him. Because nobody could have predicted he'd be raising such a ridiculously cute kid all by himself. Harito snapped back with a teasing warning, use his teleportation magic again and you'd better be careful, because doing it the wrong way sure as hell wasn't funny. Nobody took the news well that Kurito was behind them, so when it finally sunk in, the beastman stepped forward and showered him with praise, saying Kurito was the one who always pulled them out when danger hit during their adventures. Once again, he just couldn't handle the compliment like a cool guy. His cheeks flared pink and his eyes were practically blushing. Garo clocked it instantly. The kid had never seen a single race besides her own in her whole life, and right then her excitement was overflowing. He dropped to a knee and let her touch his fur, and the moment her hand met it, excitement crashed through her all over again. She kept going, pressing her fingers to it bit by bit, until every new brush sent her even deeper. The more delighted she got, the more she grabbed his arm and blurted that it was ridiculously fluffy. Then she swore she was enjoying every single second of it. Both beastmen got totally smitten by the girl's cuteness, and Garo even wagged his tail like he was being controlled by his own master. Kurito, meanwhile, strutted in with that proud little confidence, so when Garo saw him creep toward the fur just to feel it, Garo snapped, yelling that he wasn't allowed anywhere near it. When they pressed him for the reason, the truth hit hard. Kurito had humiliated him back then, getting treated like a dirty dog by the whole adventure guild while they're drunk out of their minds. Hearing those words, Kurito's mood sank, but the lizard men still dangled a chance for Nina to finally touch his scales. She noticed they felt both smooth and tough, nothing like the real lizard man who always kept his focus on kids. It all came down to Nina's warmth. Her kindness was the real magic, the charm that hit hardest. Right in the middle of all that, Jiro leaned in and told Kurito the Thunder Party was going down fast. And she'd been aching for him ever since he vanished from the capital, so they both kept begging him to join them and stay a while, just to prove everything was going to be okay. With him and the whole party around, things had always been smooth and effortless, so they ruffled Nine's head and strolled away. He invited her to join them next time so they could introduce her to the other races. Kurito and Nina tearfully wave goodbye as they part ways. And she gushed about the awesome friends he had. She was blown away by how many jobs Kurito juggled, pitching in with the vegetables and giving people rides. So no wonder everyone in the capital seemed to know his name. Her eyes lit up with pure gratitude when she saw it for what it was. So many people depended on him, and she finally knew it was absolutely true. Knowing people trusted his trading was the best high of all. And ever since he landed in this world, he'd been saving a ton of people, because in his past life he'd learned exactly how to do it. He'd always ignored the people who mattered, so loneliness swallowed him whole. And in his quiet thoughts, he finally admitted that money really wasn't everything. With so much time already wasted, they finally snapped out of it and bolted to the market to grab their food. As they roamed the streets, they cut across a few winding paths. They finally burst into the heart of the market. It was packed with shop after shop, hawking every kind of material you could name, right down to fresh vegetables. Every vendor shouted over the chaos, pitching their wares to anyone who would listen. That was the first time Nina ever laid eyes on a place packed with shops, stall after stall selling all kinds of goods. That's because the royal capital hauled in ingredients from every corner of the world, and that's what made it ridiculously amazing. She saw it for the first time and couldn't believe her eyes. Food was being sold like that. In some far-off backwater where you couldn't really ship supplies, people had to trek to the nearest village, barter for whatever materials they needed and call it a day. She felt completely swamped. Then out of nowhere, something snapped her attention right to it. She bolted after that, waving toward a shop and insisting she was heading there. And when she pointed out the fish, she singled out Nevo. And he unloaded a ton of knowledge about it, patting it down like he genuinely cared. Her excitement fizzled the moment she saw the price, too expensive to ignore. Kurito explained that mages trap them in icy magic, or they use enchanted tools to keep everything fresh, so that's exactly why the prices. Prices in the capital kept climbing, fueled by the brutal cost of getting goods there and the time it took. So buying it straight at the shore was the smart, cheaper play. Nine finally realized it. That's why Kurito hoarded every scrap of magical material, preserving it carefully so they could cash in big when they reached the capital. And he lit up because she finally nailed the heart of business, buy low, sell high. Kurita quickly clocked that she was sharp as a blade, and the perfect match for someone who'd be able to live in the royal capital with ease later on. Those words lit a fire under her and the kid leaned in, demanding confirmation. Fueled by pure curiosity, she pushes forward, desperate to reach the royal capital. Kerdo never saw that statement sparking this much buzz, even as she couldn't shake the worry about whether she'd ever leave the village someday. She believed the power to grow crops wasn't a distant dream, it was something she could seize with her own hands. Curado suddenly snapped, those mayor's words hit him like a truck. The young ones always choose to vanish from the village. Like Gray and Taylor who vanished the moment they left and one day, when Nina's no longer a kid, she might decide to set her sights on the royal capital. But he couldn't afford to be selfish right then, even if it made the moment feel a little painfully lonely. When the moment finally hit, he stepped in to help and push her forward, still wishing that day would have stayed far, far away. Right in the middle of his thoughts, she spotted a stall packed with vegetables, and she couldn't resist walking over to inspect them. As she finally burst into the shop and laid eyes on the onions, her smile vanished in an instant as she told them, "You're so small, aren't you?" Those comments bruised the shopkeeper's pride. She snapped they were rude, and fired back that they'd come straight from a famous farm, even raising a sample herself to prove it. The curator swallowed his pride, apologized for the kid's words, and then decided to teach her, his way, no excuses. Even the shopkeeper caught himself. He'd said something to the kid he never should have, and he wasted no time apologizing for it. Then both of them tore off and disappeared from the place, and the little kid blurted out a weird question that made everything feel strange. Kurito leaned in and shook his head, gently denying it. But the girl just couldn't let go of the fact that he owed her an apology on her behalf. When Kurito saw her motivation dip, she snapped that everything she said was true, but it still wasn't the shopkeeper's fault because the vegetables they farmed back in that village were straight-up legendary, so fresh, so splendid, it felt unreal. Not every spot could even grow those vegetables, and the shopkeeper never once noticed the big leaks, because he didn't know they were there in the first place. He told them to her, "I'm tiny, just a speck in her eyes, while everyone else sees me as totally normal." And it all came down to how you looked at it. Once they understood that, they'd grow from it and keep moving. Nina felt it even deeper now, and she was sure the words she'd said cracked the shopkeepers' hearts. Kurito suggested they go check out the other veggies, because the capital had more wonders than just her, and that was its real charm. And with it, they could also level up what they all already knew, growing their minds together. Nina grabbed his arm and thanked him for opening the door to all those amazing new discoveries, saying it gave her an insanely deep, eye-opening understanding of everything she just went through. They cut the plan short, headed straight for the next market, and refused to waste a single minute. They had to enjoy the day. They clomped down the staircase together, both clutching chocolate ice cream in their hands. Nina descended step by step, extra careful. Her stomach was growling like it was begging for food. They wandered non-stop, stomach growling, just hunting for anything to eat. She was itching to try this super trendy spot she'd never get into before. After all this time, she finally dug deep for the courage to ask Kurito for something. And even then, he'd gone hungry enough to feel it. Then it hit him. That lady was finally offering the exact kind of request he'd been waiting for from the very start. According to Kurito's memory, their village didn't have a proper place to eat, so of course Nana would let herself dream about lunch at a real cafe. He finally landed the chance he'd been waiting for forever, and grinned, then dove in immediately. Seeing her face again lit up his mind, and he tried to picture a trendy spot he could take her. But after thinking and rethinking, every idea vanished. Then it hit him, he had no clue where places like that even existed. He was completely clueless. He always drank solo and ate at home, so he never stumbled on those adorable little restaurants everyone else seems to know. Right then, he desperately wished a smartphone would magically surge forward, but staring and hoping alone wasn't going to cut it. He refused to step into some random place and look pathetic. Those guild meeting restaurants demanded proper dress and perfect manners, but the food itself, yeah, that part was totally off limits. He kept hunting for the perfect spot where royal vibes and serious style meet, but finding a place that could actually serve delicious food was brutal. Right then it hit him, he had a place there, so he grabbed her hand and told her to come because it would feel amazing. Somehow the girl couldn't get enough of the place, she wanted to be there more than anything. He went on to say he'd cooked up 2 spots in the capital inside the house, so they could chow down on restaurant-level meals, and the window view was amazing too. Nine couldn't wait to get there, she wanted to see the place, and the boy finally felt at peace because the lady looked genuinely happy. It was decided, then he snatched her hand and blasted off with teleportation magic, landing at their destination instantly. The very next drop landed them at the clock tower building, right where the danger waits, where you could spot the whole capital at once, drenched in an absolutely extravagant view. Nana loved every second of it, and Kurito landed like, "Wait just a moment." After ordering the maids to get the meal ready, he waited around for a bit so he could head back. He couldn't shake the fear that leaving the girl there would be a huge mistake. But with nobody around and her not planning to go anywhere else just to see the sight, he snapped his decision and headed out right away. Next, both of them hit the street and headed straight to Kurito's place. And when they finally stormed up to the main gate, Nina was hit with total shock. Believing it was a castle, Kurito tried to brush it off, claiming the place was totally normal, nothing special at all. As they stepped inside, Nina's excitement surged over everything, especially that fountain. As soon as they stepped inside, he realized Nina was having a blast hanging out with the maid, and Elsa shoved a list into the curator's hands, packed with shop details Nina would absolutely obsess over. She worried about Carillo's image, so she sat down and started mapping out what Nina might actually want. Packed between clothing stores, accessory shops, glass craft spots, and cozy cafes. She even tossed in a simple map, and Kurito couldn't believe his eyes. Even if he wasn't great at it, he still cherished every second of it and promised he'd drag Nana back to the village, so she'd be out of reach all night. With every detail already locked in, they packed up and moved out. But when Nina finally grabbed Elsa's attention, she flashed a bright, unstoppable smile. Smile leaned in and told her, "This cooking is insanely good, so delicious it's unreal." She'd savored it all, and now she was counting on her fingers the dishes she'd never tasted yet. Both of them grinned, totally charmed by the girl's kindness. And Elsa made it crystal clear, she'd even packed a few souvenirs for her to bring home. Kurito used magic to stash them inside his spatial space, and those treasures were meant for her family. So she leaned in and thanked her warmly for her generosity. Kurito was convinced that dragging her along was the smartest move. And just like that, when it was time to go, they turned around and headed back. The maids dipped into a sweet bow and told them, "Have a great day with Nina," like they were sending them into something special. As they tore out of that place, they kicked things into gear and started running. He started roaming straight into the capital, bouncing from shop to shop where tons of people. A huge crowd packed in to explore and hunt down their next big purchase. After all this time, that bright thrill still blazing in 9 is something you can't miss. They cut loose, checked out something else, and just like that, when they finally walked out of the place, that little girl kept taunting him, laughing that the grown-up still ended up paying for more stuff anyway. Nina was the only one acting childish like it was no big deal. She was already getting into it, and the whole thing felt like pure fun. She shoved the purchase into her own pocket instead of handing it over to the spatial magic user. Curative clammed up, swallowed the urge to argue, and let everything slide just like that. They kept pushing through the streets, hitting shop after shop as they searched for more. And they kept pushing forward until something suddenly snatched their attention. And the kid's warning instantly flipped a switch in her head when she told him not to blow money on nothing, because getting schooled about finance by a kid was straight up mortifying. Next, they spotted a ladies' apparel shop and instantly zeroed in on it. Nina spotted a stash of hairpins and instantly thought, "These are insanely cute." She started snapping her eyes around, taking everything in. And when Kurito clocked those hairpins would totally suit her, a little spark of excitement hit. He leaned in and begged for advice, revealing that his favorite color was the clue he couldn't stop talking about. Nana was on a mission to snag the perfect gift for her mom, hunting down just what would fit her best. Kurata started painting a picture in his mind of how she would look in every single color. And because everything looked so ridiculously beautiful, he couldn't bring himself to pick just one right then. Still, she couldn't grab more than one if she wanted to get something for her father. Corretto suddenly remembered Andrew's reaction. When he found out his daughter bought him a souvenir, he'd burst into tears of pure joy. He told her first grab something for your dad, and then they'd pick out as many hairpins as they wanted. When they pressed her, demanding to know what her father was truly after, both of them blurted out the same answer at the exact same time. Alcohol flooded his mind, and he pictured himself already totally wrecked. Still, with what she'd shoved in her purse, they could have only dreamed about wine. So Curative pitched buying wine glasses they could order straight from them, and it turned out to be a seriously brilliant move. They sprinted into the glass section and spotted every kind of glass imaginable, in every shape and style. And when the time to choose finally hit, Hirito pushed the decision to Nina, because that gift was hers to wield. And that's why if he went with that option, it would cost a fortune, and she'd break down and cry. As Nina lifted a glass, a grin spread across her face. This choice felt hilarious and totally perfect. It looked amazing, and then they checked the price. They finally figured out they could only snag one hairpin for her mom. Her father's gift was finally settled, and Nina started poking through every hairpin on her own head, hunting down the one that would look absolutely perfect. Finally, he locked in on the orange one, right as it would absolutely explode into the lush village. Before she walked out of Curato, he leaned in and asked, "So what other color are you thinking?" And she pointed. He shoved her toward the billing and stayed put, waiting there for a while. He stared at it for a few long minutes, like his eyes couldn't tear away. And then they both turned and walked away, stepping out like they meant business. They discovered the place was way more packed than it normally was, with way more people than you'd ever see on a normal day. It just couldn't tell what was happening, something felt wildly off and it couldn't make sense of it. And Curado had totally lost track of time, darkness was creeping in fast. He whirled to tell the girl they had to head back, and froze in disbelief when Nina was nowhere to be found. He immediately tore into the search for her. And then right from the far end of that corner, he heard her voice cut through the air. His worry spiked, so he sprinted to where she was. And when he found her, relief hit him hard because she wasn't far at all. He pushed through the crowd with everything he had, fighting his way straight to her hands. And when they clenched, he yanked her into his arms at once, while she blurted out an apology for vanishing into the crowd, even though it wasn't her decision at all. Curito shot them an apology too, and right as they were hashing it out, a firework suddenly lit up the sky and yanked their attention away. They spun around and there it was. The crowd's whole reason to gather, the grand fireworks blazing bright. Nina's breath caught as the fireworks exploded in the sky, and it hit her hard, so she squeezed Curio's hand tight right in the middle of the crowd, pleading for just a little more time. Both of them agreed to take one look. But he couldn't stop worrying about her father and what he'd do if he found out. He swore once the moment arrived, he'd use his magic to bring her back. It felt like a warm reassurance, like the promise was glowing bright behind the fireworks, lighting up everything. She beamed a bright grin and nodded to show she was fully on board. Curito blasted his teleportation magic the instant he could, vanishing from the capital and reappearing right in front of her home. When they turned back, Nina blared their presence with a loud shout, while Curado casually stretched his body like he didn't have a care. They'd both been having the time of their lives, then the gate suddenly creaked open. Andrew burst out in tears, and I swear I'd never seen his daughter look this moved after so long. He yanked her into a tight hug right away, bombarding her with questions about whether anything terrifying happened. Curita finally got it. This wasn't anything creepy at all, just an overprotective dad trying to guard his daughter, and the second she said she was okay, it all clicked into place like instant reassurance. And just like that, she blurted out that the royal capital was absolutely incredible. Then the lady launched into this wild description of towering, gigantic buildings packed with magic. All the different races, the wild seafood piled high at the market, and those fancy fireworks lighting up the sky like a whole celebration. Like her dream had finally come true, and her smile blazed brighter by the second. Andrew was so shaken by what he felt that it hit him like lightning. But the second he spun toward Corrido, his face snapped into a whole new expression. Who snatched his daughter without a single shred of permission. Stella swept in, whacked Andrew on the head, and snapped that he'd better stop giving Curito weird looks, because it was her call to send Nina. No matter what, Andrew couldn't help grinning, because seeing her smile lit him up. That solved every problem like it was magic. So he chose to thank that kid, because the boy had been looking after her for all that time. With a battered grin on his face, he said he loved it just as much. And he even teased that next time he'd go with the whole family. But Andrew's face turned bright red, and he totally lost his composure. Then all three erupted into giggles, which was way too embarrassing for a grown adult. He tried to argue, but the deal only rattled him harder, and Curito finally got it. Grown-ups weren't just brave. Stepping into the unknown really scared them too. Then it hit him like a bolt from the blue. He leaned in and told Nana to hand over the gift she'd bought, because it just might calm Andrew's fears for good. The moment the command hit, she yanked out her bag and grinned, saying she'd already bought souvenirs for both of them. To the parents, it was the one thing they'd never dream of getting excited over, until they realized she'd just turned it into a gift. Even though it was her own money, she ripped it open and right there in her hands, she passed him the gorgeous flower hairpin from the royal capital. Andrew fell in love with that wine glass, so much so that he decided to sip wine from it every single day. Nine shot him down fast, warning him not to pull that stunt too often. While she tried to pin it down, every answer kept pulling at her, and she just couldn't land on one choice. Until Stella stepped in and said it didn't matter what she picked because it all worked out. Curato realized with a jolt that both of his parents were just like everyone else. When he saw them, a flashback hit him like a lightning bolt, like everything had finally revealed its real meaning. And right there, he cursed himself for not having given his own father some kind of gift. Even though he never did this for his parents, he still chased the hope of finding his family in these three, packed a few souvenirs for them too. And for dinner, he pulled out fresh ingredients from the spatial box and had the maid whip up a feast. He urged them to soak up the night, just like the easy chit-chat they'd been sharing. Right when it was time to leave, Hirtu slammed the brakes and told Nina, "Stop, right now before we go." And told her, "Hold out your hands." He slipped her the hairpin she loved, her backup pick, right back at the shop. He swore it would fit her perfectly, and this was his souvenir for her straight from him. This time, Nina practically couldn't contain her joy. It hit harder than anything else all day long. She yanked it onto her head right away and fired back, "So how do I look?" In that exact moment, she was the most beautiful girl in the whole universe, and Kerdo lit up with a bright smile as he said it. Every word of the conversation got caught by Andrew, right there in his ears, who couldn't help but feel his heart swell at how his daughter was soaking up every single moment with that stranger. And he swore that one day, without fail, he'd thank the boy. The very next day, Wacuretta sprawled on his bed, finally letting his shoulders drop and taking a breather. He remembered the night he went out with Nina. He realized way too late that he knew absolutely nothing about the capital's nightlife. Even with him out in front, he had zero clue what to do, because it all came down to Elsa. Living out of two places with nothing but work on his mind was downright depressing. So right then, he made up his head to explore both places for real. The only snag, he had zero electronic tools to dig up information. And to top it off, he was one of those modern spoiled brats who never had to do a thing himself. The only person he could reach was Elsa. She was a noble from the capital, and she knew the ins and outs of style and all the finer things. So he decided right then and there to ask her for everything from that moment on. As he finally hauled himself back to the capital, he dashed straight home. She couldn't wait for the day, so she grabbed her top recommendations. Then, right in the middle of his thoughts, he shouted, "Elsa!" And he yanked the door open without a second thought. And the instant it swung wide, another maid stood right behind it. Curado was thrown off by his sudden appearance, and a wave of guilt crashed through him for putting her through all that pain. Even while her face screamed with pain, she still smiled through it and soothed the master with gentle words as she tended to her injured nose. Curado kept blurting out non-stop apologies, because he never saw her hiding behind that door. He grabbed ice and a towel for the rescue, ready for whatever came next. Elsa slipped in from behind just as he started to explain, and with a hard, no-nonsense stare, she made it clear she already knew everything. He told the maid to loosen up, and she nodded before easing out quietly. Curito still couldn't wrap his head around it, getting recruited to wreck people, then being blocked from even using healing magic. But that's not why he showed up at all. He finally made up his mind to spill everything to Elsa, every worry, every ounce of fear, right there in that moment. Elsa realized the master wasn't just sending her. He wanted to dive into the capital's wild entertainment. He leaned in and asked how her day went, then he found out that she'd slip out solo every day, grabbing breakfast at a cozy cafe, hunting for books, then hitting stores after lunch to try on new clothes. That day felt like the ultimate adult way to have fun, and when he pushed for more details, he found out she always slipped away to see paintings. The capital was packed with legendary artists, and its art museums ran non-stop, opening fresh exhibitions every single season. This is how Elsa burned through her time. She nudged her to ask the other maid if he wanted to join in on group activities, and he agreed, telling her to save it for next time. The truth hit hard, he'd already hurt her, and he just didn't have the nerve to come clean and ask. Right now, throwing himself into that huge group activity felt like climbing a mountain, so he decided to step into the places he loved, by himself for the time being. He thanked her for the tips, then slipped away and took off on a leisurely stroll just like that. He caught his breath and realized the info he'd stumbled on was pure gold. So as he headed to the north side, he made sure her suggestions were the first thing he checked. He spotted a crowd of people flowing side by side, moving like they were all tied to the same heartbeat, turning it into a calmer lane with fewer bodies and way less chaos. Then, just like that sleek mall slammed into his sight like a spotlight, and he couldn't look away. And he couldn't stop smiling as he remembered every great bookstore he'd stepped into. He was blown away by that tiny tree standing in the middle, glowing beautifully as if the inside had dressed it up just for him. He stared at the wild, intricate design, and it felt like he'd just stumbled into a full-blown theme park. There was just one difference. These stores were nothing like the ones in Japan, and he had absolutely no idea what he was looking at. And right when he spotted one of the picture books, as he wandered the capital with Nina, he remembered how those books had piled knowledge into her. And even now, with his eyes on the pages, Nina still wouldn't leave his mind while he grabbed every last bit of it. So whenever the boredom hit, he'd just toss it over to the village kids and let them have it. With his pockets stuffed from the first shop, he tore himself away and headed out. From the very start, he realized he'd gone way too far, and he knew he had to rein in his spending before it spiraled out of control. Because even on her final day, the little girl still snapped at him. He threw the brakes on his shopping for the day and called it quits. But he still couldn't make it to lunch yet, it was way too early. So he couldn't resist. He pushed a little further and started exploring more around the area. Next on his agenda, he picked himself up and headed straight to the painting exhibition, to chase what Elsa was urging as her second pick. He finally slammed into an art museum, the kind packed with masterpieces that leave you speechless. Because the capital was dripping with art, Guards were posted outside the museum, and the whole setup screamed one thing. They were about to unveil rare, priceless masterpieces. In his past life, art meant absolutely nothing to him. No spark, no interest, not a single connection. But right now he had all the time and money he wanted, so he decided to take a shot. He grabbed his ticket, walked inside, and got searched head to toe. Then they made him sign in before he could go any further. The second he stepped inside, his jaw dropped at how incredible it was, and couldn't stop wondering what priceless art they were guarding so fiercely that the security was practically overkill. The world went so silent that even every breath came back to haunt the room. As he stepped inside, he realized he'd entered one of the oldest art museums in the capital, and its history felt like a key he could use to truly understand the country. He strode through the art gallery, soaking up every dazzling piece of bright, glowing art on the walls. When he finally reached that spot, he stumbled on a huge crowd, all staring at one painting like their worlds depended on it. He threw everyone into a huddle just to steal a better look, and his curiosity was burning at full blast. The second he spotted a place to see what they were staring at, he couldn't stop himself. He got utterly hooked on that painting. It painted the royal capital and its towering castle in dazzling detail, so over the top it made him chuckle, and it still looked absolutely amazing to his eyes. He couldn't stop wondering what the painting's name was. And it turned out to be Gerald Asterisk's Castle by Rafiria. That art hit him hard, and the feeling stayed stuck in his mind as he stepped out of the museum. It was the first time his painting ever hit him like this. Those emotions just wouldn't fade, and he could have stared for forever. Right as he started wondering if a painting like that could even exist, his stomach betrayed him with a loud growl. It was already lunchtime. It was humiliating, right there in the middle of the street, with a crowd watching far more than we ever expected. He chose the very first place that popped into his head, but the moment he tried to go, he was completely lost, like he never planned to show up there at all. With the whole place packed with couples at that exact moment, his face turned ghost pale as he landed in second place, where crowds huddled in groups, laughing and soaking up every second of their time. This place didn't feel like it belonged to him at all. So he slipped out of there too, and the waitress made it worse. She blurted out that he was just one single customer, right in front of everyone. Curito stared at his mess, swallowed his frustration, and then stormed away from the place. He took a deep breath, forcing his raging nerves to settle. He finally clocked that Elsa's suggestions to the retailer weren't random at all. They were picked to match her own taste, like she was slipping him a girl's recommendation. That place had real style, but it screamed women only, and being the lone guy at the counter made him feel completely out of place. He figured he needed a change of scenery, so he slipped out again and went hunting for fresh places to explore. Every place he tried to hit up was either shut tight or straight up busted, FFFFF. The place was packed with couples and tight groups, and it just wasn't his world, so the boy felt his motivation slipping away in real time. But the timing was off and every spot was jammed, so his strength drained fast, hunger was gnawing at him like crazy. All the chaos he was stuck in wouldn't even let him figure out where the hell he'd ended up. At the very end, he finally reached a place where the world went totally empty. As he wrestled with the idea to just leave it all behind and head to Elsa to get her to start cooking. That Black Cat coffee spot snared his attention the second its aroma hit the air. Because it was a cafe, this was the perfect payoff after everything he'd fought through. He found the name weirdly cute, then started scanning for an open spot, right when he stepped inside. He swung the doors open and found the place totally empty, only a handful of customers scattered inside. The room opened wide, and the moment he stepped in, a friendly, bright smile lit up the place, telling him he could pick any seat he wanted, and just like that, joy lit up his whole face. Then he picked a corner seat all to himself, where nobody could bother him, plus the whole vibe hit him like a wave of nostalgia, like that old classic cafe back home. Elsa's recommendations were already amazing, but the real magic was his charm, the one he fought for and finally uncovered after tons of struggle. Just as the waitress asked what he wanted, he decided to go for it fast. To grab a sandwich for lunch and wash it down with icy fruit tea. The world around him felt calm enough to melt the stress away, and while he was just catching his breath, his food showed up, exactly what he'd ordered. He couldn't believe it, this service moved fast too. The second the sandwich gets swapped out, he stared in disbelief at what was right in front of him. Those things were huge, and somehow they looked even better than he could process, snatching the boy's attention even harder. The waitress straight up said it was her father who declared that a small sandwich doesn't count as a real sandwich. The mustached man was so deep in brewing his coffee that he looked like a full-blown gentleman, completely lost in his own careful prep. Because the sandwich ingredients flipped every single day, the cafe had no choice. It named its menu after what it served. So while it almost didn't feel real, she urged them to dig in and enjoy the feast. And just as he was about to take that first bite, he cracked it open and got hit with that warm egg stuffing. and a nostalgic paste smell that yanked him straight back into his past life. He suddenly flashed back to the days when he'd devour tiny sandwiches with just one hand. But this time he had to use both hands. With every bite, his doubts vanished. This one tasted way better than the last, and he felt it in his bones. Even though everything spiraled wildly off script from what he'd planned. He realized this secret spot was the absolute best place to be. And he was dead set on returning to that place again and again. After he finished both sandwiches, his stomach finally felt stuffed to the brim. And his grin lit up his face as he savored every second of his time. As sleep started creeping over him, he grabbed an iced tea, then decided to dive into a book. He cracked open one door and the calm that hit him, away from the city chaos, made him breathe easier. He whipped over to reading, then hunted down more cafes to explore before finally sliding into the restaurants for drinks. His mind was racing with 100 thoughts, and the air around him felt totally unreal, like the world had just gone bigger than he could handle. With the gramophone blasting in the background, Henry, with a stack of books in a quiet, cozy corner that felt like instant peace, taking in every bit of it like he was soaking up the moment. Just when everything finally felt calm, Emilio exploded into the moment and jumped right into the middle of it, greeting him, like nothing else mattered, which, that moment hit him like a punch, his face twisted with pure disgust at how he looked. Emilio was handled like always, ice cold, no warmth at all. And when the man burst out of nowhere and demanded his tea, it completely jolted the waitress behind the counter. Her reaction made Corita's brain spin. Was Emilia hinting that he and Nina were dating? Emilio leaned in and admitted he already had someone he deeply cared about. More than anything, he'd come for business, straight here, no excuses. The real question was how he could possibly know Curato would be right there. Emilio told him, since Jurito isn't going anywhere else, I'm suggesting we don't waste time and just stick with this. There was no chance he'd step into his friend's shop by himself. His personality wouldn't allow it. This shattered the boy inside, and even all the other thoughts screamed at him, like maybe he'd bolt away just to find some quiet place to breathe. And you'd think there's no way he'd end up alone in a quiet little cafe. Acted like arrows of shame stabbing straight into him, so infuriating it made his blood boil. But Emilio was right there on the spot. How he handled it screamed detective, like the whole case clicked in place. Like he'd known the whole truth from the very first second. The iced tea got poured, and in an instant, Hirito's energy and all the fun he'd been chasing evaporated for the rest of the day. And just like that, we're right back in the middle of the conversation. Emilio showed up with urgent requests from someone who had to get in touch with Pareto. And the Merchant Guild was the one pulling the strings behind it all. Teleportation was the one skill his guild always chased, because it boosted them fast and it felt like they had the whole market locked down. Curato was dead certain he'd never once tried to hide what he could do, because it was something nobody could ever copy, and even when they kidnapped him, he still slipped out like it was nothing. One of Emilio's old acquaintances reached out with a request, and for him, bringing up something like that was almost unheard of. Curato had no clue about his private life because he'd never once shared it. With that heavy mood hanging over him, he pushed forward and asked what kind of person they really were. And because the man was already lurking right outside, Curato nearly lost it when Emilio casually brought them along without a single word. Emilia stepped outside and shouted for the person, only to find a lady standing there instead. Since she was drop-dead gorgeous and looked one hit away from breaking, Curato was. Composure shattered again when he laid eyes on a breathtaking woman. The instant she apologized for ripping him out of his rest. She introduced herself as Rafuria, just a painter by trade, yet she'd crafted that breathtaking artwork of the royal capital, and he was completely stunned.